Chapter 923. After eavesdropping outside the door for an hour, everyone felt that it was about time. So they dispersed one by one, waiting for the two people inside to come out. In the end, another hour passed, 2 hours. Hey my god, your boss usually looks pretty good and his body doesn't look like he'll stay for long. I didn't expect it to take so long. Guess how many times he did it? Lin Wunwun walked around outside the bedroom again and couldn't help but mutter. Everyone? How would we know? They had never seen their boss, who was a bit of a germaphobe, flirt with any woman, so how would they know about his long-term problems? They all thought he was going to do it with their minister Lu Tianyi, okay? And no matter how he looked at it, it was still the lower one. Lin Wunwun crossed his arms over his chest, touched his chin and said, but I heard that he and our leader's brother, Lu Tianyi, seem to be a couple. Now Lu Tianyi is single again. No, he's single to begin with, and he's just a good friend with Minister Lu, definitely just brotherly love. There's no gay relationship. Zheng Xiaoyan immediately refuted her. What the hell were Fujoshis thinking these days? At this time, in the base, Lin Xiao walked on the wall construction side of the second base to survey. Because there wasn't much work left in the base, she came to see how long it would take. At the current speed, it'll probably be finished in about 20 days. Duan Wan walked a step behind her. She looked at the workers around her and said to her while holding the information in her hand. Lin Xiao was wearing a pair of sunglasses, a loose knee-length dress underneath, and a loose muslin coat on the outside. Shen Yuzhen was wearing a white shirt and gray trousers, while the others were wearing camouflage clothes. After walking around, Lin Xiao felt a hot feeling coming from her lower abdomen, and her body began to heat up. Maybe something happened to little man again. Okay, let's go to the medical center now. She turned and walked out of the construction site. Duan Wan and Shen Yuzhen thought she was just looking for Lin Hao for some research business. They didn't expect it to be a problem with Lin Xiao's body. After all, she was a zombie. As long as her body wasn't injured, there shouldn't be any problems. After getting in the car, Shen Yuzhen drove to the medical center of the first base. Lin Xiao sat in the back seat with his hand casually placed on his belly. Only when he touched it with his hand did he realize that the temperature on his stomach was even hotter. However, her heart was very calm, as if there was no premonition of danger, nor did she feel uneasy. After arriving at the hospital, Lin Xiao went straight to Guan Lin Hao's office and consulting room. Anyway, Lin Hao's office was next to his consultation room. When he arrived at the office, he knocked on the door but no one answered. He opened the door and looked inside. There was no one inside. Shuang looked at the consulting room next to him. There was no one there either. Lin Xiao simply sat in his office and waited, leaving Duan Wan and Shen Yuzhen outside. As a result, as she sat, she began to feel sleepy. This made Lin Xiao feel a little strange, but she couldn't stop herself from losing consciousness. She tilted her head and slowly fell asleep. After an unknown period of time, Lin Hao returned to the door of his office. When he saw Duan Wan and Shen Yuzhen, he immediately knew. The leader is here? The two of them nodded. He's been waiting inside, Duan Wan said. How long have you been in there? Lin Hao asked. More than half an hour, Duan Wan replied. Oh, I got it. Lin Hao nodded, then pushed the door open and walked in. In the end, he silently retreated out of the door, then looked at the two of them strangely and asked, Where is she? Didn't you say she was inside? She's inside? Duan Wan looked at him with a blank and puzzled expression. Then she turned her head and looked inside in confusion. In the end, there was no one inside. Shen Yuzhen also stuck her head in to take a look, but she didn't see anyone either. She sniffed and suddenly said with a strange expression, The leader's aura is still inside. After saying that, she glanced at the two of them in confusion, then looked at the office in confusion. The aura was indeed still there, but why was she gone? Thus, the three of them at the door fell into a state of confusion. Then they walked into the room at the same time and started looking around for her. On the other side, when Lin Xiao woke up, she found that she was no longer sitting in Lin Hao's office. The unfamiliar room in front of her seemed to be a study. She first turned around in a daze before coming to her senses. Damn. Where was this? Wasn't she in Lin Hao's office? Why did she go to another place after taking a nap? Wait, why was the smell here so spicy and familiar? Wasn't this Wu Qingyue's smell? And Wu Yueling's? And that fat rabbit's? She hesitantly walked to the table and glanced at the names of the documents on the table. They were all high city documents, data files, etc. It couldn't be. This was... Lin Xiao walked to the window in bewilderment and looked outside. Then, her face was filled with confusion. What was going on? Why was she here? She lowered her head slightly and suddenly found that she couldn't see her hand on the window. Ah, ah. Her hand. Go. Already. Not only her hand, but her entire body was now in a transparent state. What was the matter? She didn't pay attention just now, but now she realized that she couldn't see her body when she lowered her head. This feeling was so terrifying. Fortunately, she wasn't unfamiliar with this situation. Wasn't this the state she was in when she could be invisible? Lin Xiao quickly reacted and closed her eyes, wanting to show herself. But, no. Counter. Answer. Yes. Lin Xiao realized that she had suddenly entered a state of inexplicable invisibility and couldn't get rid of it. Her face was blank. There were thousands of curses in her heart, but she didn't know if she should say them. Moreover, this definitely had something to do with little man. As a zombie that didn't need to sleep, her body suddenly heated up and she felt sleepy. In the end, she appeared from one place to another after a nap. What was going on? The 3 curses in her heart were trampled by a group of mutated beasts. At this time, footsteps came from outside the door. Soon, the door was pushed open and Wu Qingyue walked in with Wu Yueling in his arms. And Wu Yueling was carrying a bald gray rabbit in her arms. Lingling, sit here and play by yourself. Daddy has to work. After putting Wu Yueling down as if there was no one else, Wu Qingyue walked to his desk and sat down to deal with his work. The invisible Lin Xiao looked at the fat rabbit in Wu Yueling's arms that had become ugly after a few days of not seeing it. It was still so fat after shaving. Chapter 924. After Wu Qingyue sat down, he felt that there was something wrong with the surroundings. He looked around the study room and didn't see anything unusual. Then he looked at Wu Yueling, who was sitting as usual. There was nothing wrong. Only then did he withdraw his gaze, pick up a document and open it to read. Lin Xiao stood by the side and turned to look at him, then turned to look at Wu Yueling. Then she turned and jumped down from the open window beside her. Wu Qingyue raised his head and looked around again. Finally, he looked at the window in confusion. Downstairs, Lin Xiao landed lightly on the ground and was ready to walk out. Well, she couldn't walk. Lin Xiao silently retracted her legs and took another step forward. Then she couldn't move. Because as long as she took this step, there seemed to be a huge magnet behind her that was firmly sucking her. She couldn't take another step forward. What the hell? She didn't believe it and took another step forward. After the second step, she couldn't lift her legs anymore. Lin Xiao silently retracted her legs, turned around and walked towards Wu Qingyue's building. Well, this time it was smooth. What did it mean? Did he want to control her in this building? What was going on? What was the cause of this? Besides, what did her physical condition have to do with this building? Lin Xiao suddenly felt that she had become a ghost. Well, it was the kind of ghost that couldn't go anywhere and couldn't be seen by others. If she hadn't seen zombies running all over the place, she would have thought that she had come to the wrong set and that the world she was in was fantasy, not science fiction. She tried a few more times in another direction, but it was still useless. She was locked in the range of this building. What was in this building that was related to her? Lin Xiao was puzzled. Since she couldn't go back to her base for the time being, Lin Xiao had no choice but to return to Wu Qingyue's house. Looking at the closed door, she stopped. Should she knock? Her current state didn't seem suitable for Wu Qingyue to know about her situation. But if she didn't let him know, she seemed to have no way to contact her home base. But she couldn't guarantee that Wu Qingyue would do something strange if he knew her current situation. Although Lin Xiao felt that Wu Qingyue wouldn't do anything to harm her, she didn't trust him enough. However, after weighing the pros and cons, Lin Xiao decided to ask Wu Qingyue for help first. Otherwise, she really didn't know what to do in her current state. Lin Xiao thought for a moment, then retreated to the courtyard and looked up the stairs. He stared at the window of the study room for a moment, then ran up and leaped onto the glass windowsill. With a flip, he entered the room. As soon as she came in, she saw Wu Qingyue suddenly raise his head from the pile of documents and look in her direction. Lin Xiao's heart skipped a beat. Could it be that this person could sense her presence? Wu Qingyue's face was expressionless as he looked at the open window with a puzzled expression. He felt as though something had run in through the window, but there was nothing in his eyes. But he clearly felt the strange movement in the air. It was the same feeling when he entered the house. Lin Xiao slowly moved a few steps to the side and saw that Wu Qingyue was still staring at his original position. Only then did he heave a sigh of relief. But why should she heave a sigh of relief? Didn't she want to let him know of her existence? She glanced around and was about to walk to Wu Qingyue's desk to see if he could hear her voice. However, at this moment, Lin Xiao suddenly felt someone coming in from downstairs. She stopped talking and walked to the window to take a look. The person came in from the back door. Obviously, he had hidden himself on purpose. Moreover, she saw that the person entered the small building with familiarity and walked toward the study room on the second floor. Lin Xiao knew that the person was looking for Wu Qingyue. Soon, the person appeared at the door of the study room. Li Yueshan stood at the door. After glancing at Wu Yueling, who was sitting on the sofa, he didn't come in directly. Instead, he raised his hand and knocked on the door. As soon as Wu Yueling saw someone, she immediately ran down from the sofa. She quickly ran to Wu Qingyue's desk and climbed on him with her hands and feet. Then she looked at the person at the door cautiously. She had seen this person a lot recently, but she was still afraid of him entering her territory. Wu Qingyue put down the document in his hand, turned his head and smiled at the door. "Is everything ready?" Li Yueshan stood 3 meters away from the desk and nodded. "Leader Xiao said it's ready." Wu Qingyue nodded. "That's good, you go and arrange the people first. Take them out quietly tomorrow morning before dawn. Don't act rashly, wait for me to arrive and then execute the order." Tomorrow, the leaders of Sea City and the major bases would have a final meeting. After this meeting, regardless of whether the deal could be made or not, it would be over. So taking advantage of the fact that Wei Haichao and the others were discussing with Xiao Yunlong tomorrow and were distracted, Wu Qingyue would take advantage of this time to clean up those people. "Yes." Li Yueshan nodded obediently and then turned to leave. Looking at the back of Li Yueshan walking out, Lin Xiao turned to look at Wu Qingyue. From the words just now, she already knew that this person would personally get rid of those people tomorrow. It seemed that not only did he want to do it secretly, he wanted to leave no one alive. Lin Xiao didn't care that she accidentally heard the other party's plan. In any case, if Wu Qingyue succeeded, it would only be beneficial to her. And Wu Qingyue obviously knew this, so he shouldn't be worried about her knowing. Lin Xiao leaned against the window, opened her mouth and softly called out to Wu Qingyue. "Eh." Well, her voice couldn't come out. But she wasn't too disappointed in her heart, she was already mentally prepared, thinking that it was as expected. So she gave up speaking, walked to his desk, took out a pen from the pen holder, took the draft book next to the pen and began to write. Wu Qingyue looked at the pen and paper in front of him that suddenly flew up to write by themselves. Fortunately, he had good self-control, he was almost scared out of his wits. "Okay?" Fortunately, he quickly reacted. It might be a psychic with an invisibility skill that had invaded. Anyway, after seeing Lin Xiao's invisibility skill, Wu Qingyue was no longer so shocked. No wonder he felt that there was something wrong with the window. The smile on Wu Qingyue's face disappeared, looking at the other person writing with a blank expression. He couldn't help feeling a little puzzled. Since the other party could invade his study silently, why didn't they hide well? Soon the other person wrote a sentence. Then she put down the pen, turned the book around and pushed it in front of him. Wu Qingyue glanced at the words above. "Do me a favor, send someone to the universal base to help me find Xiedong." Just this sentence alone had already revealed her identity. Chapter 925. Wu Qingyue didn't expect that the person who sneaked into his study would be Lu Tianyu, who was supposed to stay in the base. "It's you?" He looked at the words on the table and subconsciously looked up at the place where the other person was standing and writing. However, he only saw air. He was silent for a moment and looked at the other person with a strange look. His mind was thinking about what was going on. It's fine if this female zombie stealthily ran into my study, but why did she ask me to send someone to help her find her people? Did she go out alone this time? She didn't have a subordinate with her? Even if she didn't bring her subordinates, she didn't need to ask him to send someone to find her, right? Couldn't she leave here for the time being? And why did she keep being invisible? Shouldn't it be more polite to show up and say it? Did something change in her body that she couldn't see? A bunch of questions roared through his mind, but Wu Qingyue's calm face had a smile again. "Is there something wrong with your body again? By the way, can't you show up?" Thinking that there might be something wrong with her body, Wu Qingyue was worried, but this was only a guess, he could only test it quietly. Lin Xiao took back the book and wrote, "It's not convenient to show up for the time being, please help me find someone." "Thank you." She didn't say that she could get rid of her current state, nor did she say that she couldn't leave here. With her current subtle and complicated relationship with him, helping Wu Qingyue find someone was just a small matter. The other party shouldn't be unwilling to do it. "Why should I help you if you don't tell me the reason? So why are you here?" Although he was very concerned about the physical condition of this female zombie at this time. But he knew that if the other party refused to say it, he wouldn't get an answer no matter how hard he pressed. He had already figured out the character and habits of this female zombie. She didn't want to talk too much about personal matters, and she didn't like others to interfere too much with her affairs. Lin Xiao frowned and thought about it before writing. I don't know what's going on, wait until I figure it out. Seeing what she wrote, Wu Qingyue had a surprised expression. He asked in confusion, even you don't know what's going on? Then what are you doing here? How could there be something that happened to her that she didn't know? Wu Qingyue didn't understand what she meant. Lin Xiao wrote, don't worry, I won't steal your secrets. The corners of Wu Qingyue's mouth curled up and he said with a faint smile, I believe you're not interested in this either. When Wu Yueling heard Wu Qingyue's sudden words, she looked up at him. He realized that there was no one else in the room except for himself. But who is Papa talking to? Then she saw the pen and book on her father's desk move by themselves. Wu Yueling widened her eyes and watched curiously. She felt that it was as fun as magic. She was not in the least afraid. She watched as her father spoke to the air again as if there was someone there. Also he saw the pen moving. Could it be that Dad was talking to the pen that was standing up? Lin Xiao and Wu Qingyue let go of their pens and stopped writing. Seeing the pen fall on the table, Wu Qingyue knew that she didn't want to say more. He nodded and said, all right then, I'll help you find them. Is there anything else I can help you with? The pen on the table stood up again and wrote 4 words. No thank you. Wu Qingyue nodded and said, well, when Xiaoqing comes over, I'll ask him to send someone to inform your people. Lin Xiao thought for a moment and wrote another sentence. In return, I'll help you look after the child. This person has to go out to work tomorrow, so he needs a nanny. Plus, she just saw Lingling's current state, so she felt that this condition would be very suitable. Then the study became quiet. Wu Qingyue looked down at Wu Yueling and coaxed her with a smile. Smiling, he coaxed, Lingling, can you sit on the sofa and play? Papa has to work and it's not convenient for Papa to work like this. Wu Yueling looked around and after making sure there was no one else, she slowly slid down from his lap. Then she walked towards the sofa while turning her head to stare at the pen that Lin Xiao put back into the pen holder. The gray rabbit on the sofa saw her coming and moved to the side. Just as Wu Yueling walked over, she suddenly heard a voice in her mind. Lingling? Can you hear me? Ah. This voice is a zombie's mama. Wu Yueling suddenly stopped, twisting her body to look around in surprise. At this time, a hand gently touched her head, and the zombie's voice sounded again. It's me, but don't call me zombie mama, okay? Call me sister. She corrected it for a long time, but she couldn't correct this strange form of address. Why did this child listen to Wu Qingyue so much? Being touched, Wu Yueling was startled at first and then she became happy. She happily called out in her heart, Mama. Lin Xiao. Well, now the zombie in front was removed. Why did she have to call her Mama? Lin Xiao looked at her helplessly, and habitually carried her to sit on the sofa. He stroked her long hair and said, I'm not your mama, call me sister. Wu Yueling looked left and right. This kind of situation where she couldn't see anything, but could really feel the other's body, was very fun for her. Lin Xiao asked her in her heart, Did you miss me these days? Wu Yueling nodded her head. In fact, she still remembered the first 2 days, but children were forgetful, so she didn't remember much after 2 days. Lin Xiao smiled and reached out to grab the rabbit next to her. He asked, Why did you shave the rabbit so ugly? Who did it? Wu Yueling raised her hand and pointed at Wu Qingyue who was at the desk. As if feeling something, Wu Qingyue looked up and saw Wu Yueling was hugged by a mass of air. Wu Yueling's body was empty as if she was sitting in mid-air. He felt like he was going blind. If he looked at this situation for a long time, he didn't know if his eyes would have problems in the future. Just like this, Lin Xiao accompanied Wu Yueling on the sofa and talked. Wu Qingyue sat at the desk and worked for 2 or 3 hours. When Lin Xiao sensed someone coming, she put Wu Yueling aside. She said to her, Lingling, let's play a game, okay? Wu Yueling looked at her blankly, although she couldn't see anything. But when she heard the game, she became interested and nodded with sparkling eyes. Lin Xiao said to her, Later someone will come. Sit still and guess if that person can find me. Don't let him find me. If Xiao Liqing came in and saw Wu Yueling's strange behavior, he would feel very strange. She didn't want others to know that she was here for the time being. Wu Yueling nodded, not really understanding. Anyway, it was fine as long as she didn't let others find out that she was a zombie mama. Anyway, no one could see it now. Chapter 926. Soon the sound of footsteps came from outside the door. Wu Qingyue looked at Wu Yueling who was sitting still in surprise. He could see the change in Wu Yueling just now. He felt that she was communicating with someone, and he knew that the person she was communicating with was the female zombie. But the female zombie didn't say anything, and didn't write anything for Ling Ling to see. He didn't know how they communicated. Xiao Liqing stood at the door, and before he could knock, he saw that Wu Qingyue had already seen him. Thus, he consciously skipped this step and directly walked in. However, after taking 2 steps, he slowed down in confusion. Because these days, whenever Ling Ling saw him or anyone else, she would immediately run into the arms of their leader. Why didn't she run today? Seeing Uncle Xiao look at her, Wu Yueling slightly shrank back. But this time she didn't run towards Wu Qingyue, but stared at Xiao Liqing with her big eyes. Xiao Liqing slowly walked to the desk, and after seeing that Wu Yueling didn't have any reaction, he turned to look at Wu Qingyue. Wu Qingyue calmly looked at him and asked, "Did Du Kuanxing leave?" Xiao Liqing nodded, "Yes, he just left the base." Wu Qingyue had already expected this, so his expression didn't change. He smiled and said, "What he lacks the most right now is food. He should be in a hurry to transport the food back to the northeast." The journey was so long and the road was full of danger. The earlier he left, the earlier he could get through these difficulties. And the survivors of the Black Dragon base were almost at the point of starvation. He's smart, he knows to leave the alliance in China. It's safer this way, Xiao Liqing said. He's an overly cautious person, he just doesn't want to put himself in a dangerous situation. And no matter if China succeeds or fails, it won't do him any good. It's better to take the risk and split up. Wu Qingyue said. Du Kuanxing was a sinister person, he could be cunning and could be vicious. But the things he schemed were all used on the survivors of the base. He only thought about how the survivors of the base were doing, and the benefits of the base and so on. In fact, he was a good leader if it wasn't for his lack of strength. He was undoubtedly the true leader of the Black Dragon base. Based on the 400,000 survivors in the Black Dragon base, even if they eat frugally, the food he traded would only last them for 3 months. Moreover, after this incident they probably won't cooperate with the Huaxia base anymore. Xiao Liqing sighed. Wu Qingyue said, I'm afraid they've taken out their final trump card, the corpse cores, energy cores and so on. By the way, remember to block Wei Haichao's communication channel tomorrow. Don't let them find out. Yes. Xiao Liqing nodded, then suddenly asked, what about Ling Ling tomorrow? He couldn't possibly bring her along, right? Wu Qingyue smiled faintly. Just leave Ling Ling at home tomorrow. Someone will take care of her. Xiao Liqing frowned slightly and asked worriedly, is she willing? What if she had a relapse when the leader was no longer around? Wu Qingyue nodded. Of course she is. Don't worry. I, the father, am not anxious, so why are you, the uncle, so anxious? Can't I be anxious as an uncle? What's your point? Xiao Liqing looked at his boss speechlessly. But looking at Wu Qingyue's calm expression, he knew that Wu Qingyue had indeed found someone reliable to take care of the child. But he was really curious, other than him and the female zombie leader, who else would Ling Ling accept being close to? I know you care about Ling Ling. But listen to me, she'll be fine. Wu Qingyue smiled and looked at him. By the way, send someone to the Universal Living Base to find their second base's intelligence chief, Xiadong, and tell him to come to my place. Oh. Xiao Liqing was dazed for a second and nodded. Then he asked curiously, but why did you ask him to come here? Well, someone is looking for him. Don't worry about it, just tell him to come to my place as soon as possible. Wu Qingyue said. Yes. Xiao Liqing could only suppress his curiosity. After indicating his work for tomorrow, Xiao Liqing left. Wu Qingyue subconsciously looked at the sky and then looked at the time. He found that it was already dinner time, so he stood up. Come Ling Ling, let's go down and prepare to cook. He stood by the sofa and looked at Wu Yueling as he reached out to her. Wu Yueling obediently slid down from the sofa and stood up to hold her father's hand. But she looked back at the empty spot on the sofa. Although there was no one sitting there, there was a slight imprint on the sofa. It was as if an invisible person was sitting there, and in fact, there was indeed an invisible person sitting there. But soon the invisible person stood up, and the imprint on the sofa quickly bounced back to its original state. Feeling that her head was touched, Wu Yueling turned to look at Wu Qingyue. The gray rabbit that was squatting in the corner of the sofa also jumped down and jumped out of the door. Wu Qingyue pulled her out of the door, and after they went out, the door automatically closed. After going downstairs, Wu Yueling obediently hugged the rabbit next to her and ran to the sofa in the living room to play. Wu Qingyue walked into the kitchen to cook. Lin Xiao looked at Wu Yueling hugging the rabbit and playing it over and over, and the gray rabbit also let her play with its body. Bored, she looked left and right and then looked outside the door thinking that she could try to leave here. So she walked over to open the door and walked out. After the sun went down, the temperature in the air dropped sharply. At night, it would be around 11 or 12 degrees, even if it was July. But this didn't affect Lin Xiao too much. For her, it was more comfortable at night. Because she was afraid of heat. Other zombies were more active by absorbing the energy of the sun during the day, and when the temperature dropped at night, their vitality would also decrease. But for Lin Xiao it was the opposite. After Lin Xiao closed the door, she walked to the courtyard and looked up at the sky. The wind at night was also very strong and the night wind was blowing. At this time, one of the guards who was secretly guarding the small building looked at the door that was opened and then closed with some confusion. He didn't see anyone come out and he didn't know who was playing behind the door. He didn't realize that the person who opened the door had already come out. He just thought that it was a problem with his angle and he didn't see the person behind the door. Lin Xiao lifted her legs and walked out of the small courtyard, but when she walked to the place where she couldn't walk during the day, she suddenly could walk again. She paused in surprise and took 2 tentative steps forward. She realized that she could really walk and her heart was happy. Could it be that the strange state had been lifted? But before she could finish being happy, when she just walked to the position of the small courtyard's door, she couldn't walk anymore. Chapter 927. Lin Xiao retreated in a daze and tried to take a few steps forward. The result was the same. She couldn't walk any further. What the hell was going on? Lin Xiao stood in front of the courtyard with a cold expression. She crossed her arms and began to think about the changes that happened today. She clearly couldn't walk to this side during the day, but now she could change the distance. Then there must be something that caused this. Then what was this thing? She crossed her arms in front of her chest and unconsciously raised one hand to slowly scratch her chin. She then turned her head to look at Wu Qingyue's room. If there had to be a change, it would be that 2 outsiders had come and Wu Qingyue and his daughter had come down from the 2nd floor to the 1st floor. Suddenly, Lin Xiao's eyes flashed and she looked towards the direction of the room with a dark gaze. Could it be that the reason why she appeared here for no reason was related to the person in the room? Then could it be because the other party had intimate contact with her body and caused some kind of connection? Her current body could no longer think normally. Once this thought appeared, Lin Xiao immediately wanted to find Wu Qingyue to confirm it. She immediately returned to the door of the room and pushed it open to walk in. The soldiers outside the room looked at the door strangely and silently wondered if the leader's little princess was playing behind the door. After Lin Xiao entered the room, she glanced at Wu Yueling who was still playing with the rabbit on the sofa. She turned around and walked towards the kitchen. She stood at the side of the kitchen and looked at the person who was busy cooking. After thinking about it, she decided to wait for the other party to finish first before going to talk to him about this matter. As the leader, Wu Qingyue's home was equipped with the most advanced equipment. Even the various equipment in the kitchen had been modified. They used the latest fire energy furnace developed by the Huaxia base. It had high efficiency but low consumption. A level 4 fire-type corpse core could be used for 3 months by an ordinary family. Standing at the entrance of the kitchen, she looked at the man who usually stood at the highest position in the base. At this moment, he had a serious expression and skillful movements as he poured oil into the pot. He put in the garlic and stir-fried it. Then he poured in the vegetables and nimbly stir-fried them. He had a slender figure and wore a gray, blue and white checkered apron in front of him. His eyes were calm but very focused. His lips that usually liked to curve into a smile were now lightly pursed. His temperament had also become very calm, giving people a sense of déjà vu of the master of a good family. Lin Xiao smelled the aroma of the dish, which was fried with cooking oil. The dish looked good. From her angle at the door, she could see that Wu Qingyue was leaning sideways. Because the belt of the apron was tied to the back of her waist, when she tightened her waist, the curve of her back was revealed. Lin Xiao silently looked at the man's slender legs and perky buttocks, but a thought flashed through her mind. I wonder how this guy's butt feels. Looking at its smooth curve, it should be very bouncy. He suddenly realized that his gaze was a little perverted. Lin Xiao moved his gaze upward to the side of the other person's knife-like face without batting an eyelid. The lines of the lips and the nose had a strange beauty to them. Just as Lin Xiao began to size up the man in his boredom, the man suddenly turned his head. His eyes flickered with a strange dark light as he looked at Lin Xiao. Then Lin Xiao saw the corner of his mouth curl up into a meaningful smile. Lin Xiao rolled her eyes to the ceiling, raised her hand to touch her nose and turned to leave the kitchen. It felt like she was running away. It would be very embarrassing if he was caught peeping, alright? But when she turned around to leave, she threw away the strange feeling of embarrassment in her heart. What peeping? Was she looking at him fair and square? Why would she feel guilty? And she was so blatantly looking at the other person with his strength, he must have already noticed it. Just as she walked out, Wu Qingyue came out with a hot dish and put it on the table. Then he turned around and went back in. After a few minutes he took out another dish. Lin Xiao walked to Wu Yueling's side and sat down. Wu Yueling immediately felt her presence and leaned toward her. She looked at Wu Yueling and asked in her heart, "Lingling likes to eat Daddy's cooking?" Wu Yueling heard the voice in her mind and nodded. "Daddy's cooking is delicious." Lin Xiao smiled. "Really? Unfortunately, I can't eat it, so I can't taste his cooking." Although she wasn't a foodie after becoming a zombie, she couldn't eat the food that she thought was delicious before. This was also a loss. Soon Wu Qingyue made 3 dishes and 1 soup, and placed 2 bowls of rice on the table. But there was a wine glass on the left with red wine in it, and he didn't prepare any utensils. "Lingling, come eat." He poured the wine and put the bottle on the table. He took off his apron and called out to Wu Yueling. Then he said to the side of Wu Yueling, "I know you can't eat cooked food, but a glass of wine should be fine. I don't know if you can taste it." Then he saw Wu Yueling raise her hand as if she was holding someone's hand. She was indeed holding someone's hand. After Lin Xiao led Wu Yueling to her seat, she pulled out the chair with the glass of wine and sat down. After Wu Qingyue sat down, he first took a bowl of soup for his daughter. After she slowly finished, he picked up the chopsticks and put some food in Wu Yueling's small empty bowl. He let her eat with the chopsticks but didn't feed her. Although Wu Yueling's movements were very unskilled, she still tried very hard to eat. Lin Xiao picked up the glass in front of the table and took a sip of red wine as a sign to Wu Qingyue. Of course she really couldn't taste anything. It was as tasteless as water. Following the principle of not talking while eating, Wu Qingyue and Wu Yueling quietly finished their meal under the bored gaze of Lin Xiao, who was drinking the wine one mouthful after another and finally drinking her lake water. After eating, Wu Yueling gently put the chopsticks on the table and stood by the kitchen door. Wu Qingyue neatly put the bowls in the sink. Then she placed a small plate of washed vegetables on it and handed it to Wu Yueling, who was standing by the door. After Wu Yueling took it, she immediately walked over to the gray rabbit on the sofa. She began to feed her rabbit. Wu Qingyue then returned to the kitchen to wash the dishes. Lin Xiao suddenly looked at him and then at Wu Yueling. She couldn't help but sigh in her heart. This man was really a father and a mother, and he seemed to be doing a very good job. If she didn't mind him pestering her, she would look at it from an objective point of view. This man was handsome, had a good figure, and was very capable. He was also a good family man. Honestly speaking, he was a very good marriage partner. Unfortunately, she didn't plan to fall in love, and it was even more impossible for her to get married. She just needed to take care of her family and her base. Chapter 928. When Wu Qingyue came out of the kitchen, he saw a piece of paper floating in front of him. There was a sentence written on it. "Do me a favor, can you leave this house now?" Wu Qingyue looked at the words on the paper blankly, and after a few seconds of silence he said, "Why? What's the reason?" To him, it was already strange for this female zombie to appear in his house today, and now she wanted him to do this kind of strange thing, but she didn't explain what was going on. Wu Qingyue felt that he had to clarify things first. Although he knew that she didn't have any bad intentions, but it might be related to her current state, so he also wanted to know. The paper floated down again and floated to the coffee table. Then she picked up the pen on the table and wrote another sentence in the blank space below. "I need to clarify something first, then I'll tell you." Lin Xiao also knew that he was determined to know her answer this time, so she didn't insist. Wu Qingyue walked over and looked at the words on the paper and asked with some doubt, "You really know how to say it?" Lin Xiao quickly wrote a word, "Yes." Wu Qingyue then turned around and said, "That's good. But it's not convenient for me to go out from the front door, I'll go through the back door. How far do you want me to go?" Lin Xiao wrote, "Just walk out of the yard." She knew what Wu Qingyue meant by not convenient. It was to avoid being discovered by the spies from China. Although there were no other suspicious people around Wu Qingyue's house except for the soldiers guarding it. But it couldn't stop people from observing from afar with binoculars. "Lingling, Daddy will come back later to give you a bath. You stay here and feed Big Gray, don't run around." After saying that, Wu Qingyue found a hat and put it on. Then he put on the hat and a mask and walked to the back door. After observing the situation outside and confirming that there were no spies within a radius of at least 600 meters, He walked out. Wu Yueling looked in the direction that Wu Qingyue left. Although she wanted to follow, Daddy told her to stay here and feed the rabbit. After hesitating for a few seconds, she suppressed the idea of following and continued to feed the rabbit. He handed a green and tender leaf to the gray rabbit and watched it chew on it. Wu Yueling's heart gradually calmed down. Well, anyway, her father said he would be back soon to help her bathe. She followed Wu Qingyue out of the house and saw him standing outside the courtyard. Lin Xiao walked out and tried to circle around. She found that as Wu Qingyue walked out of the courtyard, she could also walk out of the courtyard. Moreover, he could continue to walk forward for some distance. When he was 20 meters away from Wu Qingyue, he couldn't move any further. Lin Xiao tried a few directions and positions, but they were all about the same. With Wu Qingyue as the center, she could not be more than 25 meters away from him. What do you think? Do you feel anything? At this time, Wu Qingyue suddenly spoke to the surrounding pitch-black air. Lin Xiao frowned slightly and suddenly walked to his side. She reached out to grab the clothes on his arm and continued to walk out. What's wrong? Feeling pulled by something, Wu Qingyue knew it was Lin Xiao. He asked again. Lin Xiao grabbed his clothes and walked out. Her hand accidentally touched Wu Qingyue's arm. Hearing his question, she subconsciously replied in her heart. The reason seems to be on you. However, she found that he didn't seem to hear her voice, so she wanted to return to the house and write to him. At this moment, Wu Qingyue suddenly stopped, turned his head to look at Lin Xiao and said, The reason is on me? Lu Qianyu, are you talking to me? What reason? Lin Xiao also stopped and looked at Wu Qingyue in surprise. She had always felt that Wu Qingyue's superpower level was too high. She couldn't sense his thoughts and he shouldn't be able to hear her thoughts. However, now that Wu Qingyue asked this question, it was obvious that he had heard the doubts in her heart. Wu Qingyue himself was also surprised. I seem to be able to hear your voice in my head. Lin Xiao let go of her hand and then tentatively said, What about now? However, after she let go of her hand, Wu Qingyue didn't seem to respond again. Feeling Lin Xiao let go of his clothes, he asked blankly, What's wrong? Lin Xiao raised her hand to grab his arm again, but when she was about to touch him, she hesitated for a moment. Then she gently grabbed it and asked in her heart, What about now? Can you hear me? Wu Qingyue was pulled around by her for no reason, and then she said that the reason was on him. She could even transmit her voice to him, which made Wu Qingyue feel very novel. I can hear you. Did you say something just now? He had a strange feeling as if he had just lost contact with her. Lin Xiao looked at her hand that touched his arm and said, I think I need to touch you to hear my voice. Wu Qingyue nodded. Well, I see. He looked up at the sound of the cold wind blowing around him and asked, Can we go back now? Lin Xiao immediately replied, Yes. With that, she let go of her hand. The two of them entered the house and Wu Qingyue led Wu Yueling to take a shower. He decided to ask Lin Xiao after taking a shower. Lin Xiao crossed her arms over her chest and sat on the sofa, thinking about what she had just discovered. It turned out that it wasn't this building that locked her up, but Wu Qingyue? If that was the case, would she have to go with him tomorrow? But she had promised him that she would help him take care of Lingling at home. This was not good. But why did such a situation happen between her and Wu Qingyue? And more importantly, she couldn't enter the space. She had tried during the day. Even if it was a random location, she could enter the space and come out again. Even if she ran to another location, it would be better than being locked in this place and unable to move. However, she couldn't go back in. Lin Xiao touched her slightly protruding belly and sighed helplessly in her heart. Little man, you are quiet, but is it really good to keep tormenting your mother like this? This is such a trap. As if responding to Lin Xiao, she suddenly felt her hand being gently pushed by something inside her belly. Lin Xiao was slightly stunned and then immediately became happy. She put her hands on her belly and stroked it to see if she could feel the feeling just now again. But after touching it a few times, she couldn't feel anything. However, her little man could move so early. When she was about to give birth, would she be able to turn around in her belly? She touched it for a while more, but there was no more movement. Lin Xiao sighed in disappointment and continued to think about the question just now. Chapter 929. After helping Lingling take a bath, she dressed her and wrapped her wet hair with a dry towel. Wu Qingyue walked to the sofa in the living room with his daughter in his arms. While drying Lingling's hair, he asked, Why did you say it's because of me? And does your voice have to be heard by touching me? Wu Qingyue had already guessed this from her behavior outside. Lin Xiao thought for a while and could only tell him the truth. She took a pen and paper and wrote, I can't be too far away from you for some unknown reason. She didn't say that she was tied to him by an invisible string and was restrained by him. Why was it that she had to follow him and not the other way around? Wu Qingyue rubbed Wu Yueling's hair with both hands while turning his head to look at Lin Xiao's words. After a few seconds of silence, he asked in surprise, "So you are tied to me now?" Lin Xiao didn't write, but just tapped the tea table with the pen. Wu Qingyue understood that she meant that he wasn't wrong. Then Lin Xiao wrote, "In this case I may not be able to stay here tomorrow to help you take care of Lingling." Wu Qingyue's hand that was rubbing Wu Yueling's hair paused slightly. He suddenly understood and said, "Right, since you can't stay away from me, then you have to go out with me tomorrow. Then I have to think of another way to solve Lingling's problem." Then he thought of something and looked at Lin Xiao. He couldn't help asking, "What are you going to do? You just said that the reason is because of me. What is the reason? How can I solve it?" Lin Xiao shook her head and wrote, "I just know that the reason is because of you, but I don't know what the reason is." At this moment, a voice sounded in Lin Xiao's mind, "Mama. Mama. I know. Because I have absorbed too much energy recently, the original energy in Mama is not enough for little man, so I need Papa's energy." Lin Xiao, who was shocked by little man's sudden awakening, was speechless after hearing the reason. "Tell me, how did you absorb Wu Qingyue's energy from afar?" Lin Xiao complained in her heart. Then little man's words came, "I was afraid that I couldn't absorb it if I was too far away, so I asked Mama and Papa to get closer." Lin Xiao, by getting closer, you mean I can't be within 20 meters of him? Little man's tone was a little weak as she said, "That? Actually, I don't know what's going on. I just want Mama and Papa to be closer to each other, and then it became like this." "Xiao Lin, what's wrong? Don't you know the reason?" Wu Qingyue asked again when Lin Xiao didn't respond. Lin Xiao picked up the pen and wrote, "I really don't know. I should think about how to settle Lingling tomorrow." She couldn't be separated from him now, which meant that she had to follow him out of the base tomorrow. However, he couldn't bring Lingling out for this mission. Should he find someone else to bring Lingling out? However, Lingling definitely wouldn't let anyone near her, so they could only stay in one room. He wasn't sure how long Wu Qingyue would need to go out this time. Wu Qingyue didn't seem to be in a hurry. "It's fine if you don't stay. Lingling can stay in her room by herself." Lin Xiao didn't agree with leaving Lingling alone in the room. What if the child was afraid? Something else might happen when she was afraid. Lin Hao told her that if Lingling's condition worsened, she would self-harm. Although Wu Qingyue couldn't see Lin Xiao or hear her response, he didn't know why he could guess her thoughts. He said, "In fact, with this gray rabbit accompanying her, she won't feel afraid. Because this is her little friend and it's also very important in her heart." Lin Xiao frowned and didn't remain silent. At this time little man followed her thoughts and said, Mama, I have a way, let Lingling go with us." Lin Xiao was stunned. She looked down at her belly and touched it with her hand, asking, "Why? That's too dangerous. Wu Qingyue was going to kill people tomorrow. How could he take Lingling with him?" Little man said, "Mama, I can protect little man." Lin Xiao was stunned and asked blankly, "You protect? How are you going to protect her?" Little man said, "Mama, carry Lingling over first, I'll try it for you." Lin Xiao thought for a while. She was curious about little man's method, but she also wanted to try it. So she wrote a sentence on the paper. "Let me hug Lingling for a bit, then we'll try another method." At this time Wu Qingyue had already dried Wu Yueling's hair. After seeing what she wrote, he nodded, let go of Lingling and put her on the ground. Lin Xiao reached out and pulled Lingling over, then said to her in her heart, "Lingling, little man has woken up, do you want to talk to her?" Wu Yueling's eyes suddenly lit up, and she nodded slightly. She hadn't talked to little man for a long time. Although she felt that Wu Yueling was very happy, her expression didn't change much except for her eyes. She pulled her to sit beside her, and then pressed her little hand gently on her belly. Lingling, did you miss me?" Little man was also very happy. She excitedly sent a message to Lingling. Wu Yueling's eyes flashed and she nodded again. She said in her heart, "Yes. Lingling misses little man, but little man only knows how to sleep." Little man comforted her, "When I come out, I can play with you." While listening to the voices of the two children, Lin Xiao wrote on the paper with a pen, "How long will it take for you to deal with those people tomorrow?" Wu Qingyue was originally waiting to see her other method, but when he saw that Wu Yueling seemed very happy after going over, he didn't know why. Now that he saw Lin Xiao writing to ask him about tomorrow's situation, he answered her. It won't take long, a few hours. His eyes stared at the pen, wanting to know what else Lin Xiao wanted to ask him next. However, Lin Xiao just held the pen vertically, playing with it, and didn't write for a while. At this time, little Man said to Lin Xiao, "Mama, I'm going to start, watch." Lin Xiao lowered her head and Wu Yueling, who was beside her, disappeared in a flash. Seeing his daughter suddenly disappear, Wu Qingyue was stunned for a moment. He didn't panic, but just looked at their position curiously. "You have this skill?" Lin Xiao wrote with the pen. "It's not my skill." Wu Qingyue looked at the few words in confusion and subconsciously asked, "If it's not yours, then whose is it?" "Lin Xiao, little Man." At this time, little Man said, "As long as Mama holds Lingling tomorrow, I can make Lingling disappear." Lin Xiao was a little surprised and asked, "Where did you take Lingling?" Little Man said, "Mama's space." Lin Xiao sensed the space but couldn't find Lingling's figure. Then he asked, "Where is it? Why can't I feel it?" Chapter 930. Little Man said that she brought Lingling into the space, but Lin Xiao couldn't feel Little Man's existence in the space. Although she couldn't enter the space, she could still sense everything in the space. Wu Qingyue looked at where she was sitting in a daze. So this was Little Man's skill in her stomach? The child wasn't even born yet and it was already so powerful? He suddenly said, "Can I touch her?" Lin Xiao heard and thought that he wanted to touch Lingling, so she wrote. Lingling was brought into a special space by Little Man. But Wu Qingyue suddenly shook his head. "No, I want to touch your stomach." Lin Xiao. She didn't want him to touch her. But this was her right as the child's father, she couldn't refuse. Although she wanted to raise the child herself, the other half of the child belonged to Wu Qingyue, so she didn't have the right to stop him. At this time, something flashed in front of their eyes. Wu Yueling came out again. Her eyes had a hint of confusion. But soon it lit up. Seeing Lingling come out, Wu Qingyue was still looking at Lin Xiao's position with a bit of expectation in his eyes. He really wanted to sit next to her and touch her. But he didn't want the little good impression she had of him to disappear just like that. At this time he saw the pen write on the paper, "Yes." Wu Qingyue was dazed and then a burst of joy. He didn't move, but he soon felt someone sit down on the sofa next to him. An invisible hand reached over, grabbed his hand and gently pulled it over. Then Wu Qingyue felt his hand covering a slightly cold bulge. There was also a layer of cloth in between. Lin Xiao's invisibility skill could hide her clothes, but she didn't know what it was based on. After touching the female zombie's stomach, Wu Qingyue didn't have time to feel anything before he suddenly felt something under his palm. Wu Qingyue immediately felt a subtle feeling in his heart. This was his child, a descendant connected to his bloodline. This subtle feeling made Wu Qingyue a bit reluctant to let go. He gently moved his hand and touched Lin Xiao's stomach. Then he felt out the shape of her stomach. Sure enough, it was still very small, but it had been so long. But it was growing so slowly. Wu Qingyue had a feeling of anticipation in his heart. He really wanted to see this child grow up quickly and then come out to see what he looked like. Lin Xiao felt the warmth from his palm and the way he was caressing her. For some reason she felt a little itchy in her heart. When will she come out? Wu Qingyue suddenly asked while touching it. Furthermore, he could feel that his subordinate's body was a little stiff, but he did not immediately push his hand away. This made Wu Qingyue very happy. Lin Xiao said, "Based on her current speed, it will probably take another 7 to 8 months. Wu Qingyue said with some disappointment, "It's going to take so long." Lin Xiao was also helpless. Even with a big belly, he still had to last longer than others. It's really hard for zombies to give birth. She asked, "I'm a zombie, you can't look at me like a normal person. Are you done touching me?" Wu Qingyue reluctantly withdrew his hand. At this time Wu Yueling lay down beside Wu Qingyue again. She suddenly looked at Lin Xiao and Wu Qingyue with anticipation. Then, as if she suddenly thought of something, she pulled Wu Qingyue's hand and shook it. Wu Qingyue turned to look at her. "What's wrong?" Wu Yueling raised her head, lifted her little face and looked at him with a pair of big watery eyes. Wu Qingyue didn't know what was going on and could only look at her blankly. Lin Xiao, who was on the side, felt Wu Yueling's thoughts and was speechless. Then, she silently moved away from Wu Qingyue and sat back on the single sofa. She would never tell Wu Qingyue that Lingling wanted the three of them to sleep together. After Wu Yueling and her father looked at each other for a while, she realized that her father's channel was completely different from hers. She couldn't help but feel a little anxious. She turned to look at Lin Xiao's direction and began to feel anxious. Lin Xiao looked at her and felt the anxiety in her heart. Then, she looked at her eyes with an excited expression. She couldn't help but worry. Wu Qingyue also realized that something was wrong with his daughter and was shocked. He quickly picked her up and asked anxiously, "What's wrong?" "What's wrong? Lingling? Don't worry, don't worry." Wu Yueling looked left and right and pursed her lips. Suddenly, she opened her mouth. "Sleep." Suddenly hearing his daughter speak, Wu Qingyue was immediately surprised. He didn't even hear what Lingling said. He looked at Yueling and asked happily, "What did Lingling say just now? Can you say it again?" Dad didn't hear it clearly. Wu Yueling choked out 2 words at the crucial moment, but now she was unwilling to speak again. She just stared at Wu Qingyue angrily. She already said it, but Dad didn't hear it. She was so angry. Her father had promised her that he would sleep with her zombie mommy, but he had forgotten about it. Lin Xiao saw that after Wu Yueling said those 2 words, although she was still very angry, she had somewhat calmed down. She took out a piece of paper and wrote, "I know what's going on with you and me. Little man needs energy. It's all because I don't have enough energy. She seems to need to draw energy from you." Wu Qingyue wanted to hug Lingling and comfort her, but Lingling seemed to be a little angry. She suddenly turned her face and ran to Lin Xiao lying on her legs. She turned her back to Wu Qingyue and ignored him. Although she was still very unhappy, she wasn't as anxious as before. Wu Qingyue was relieved and looked at the words on Lin Xiao's paper. He was a little confused. "She wants to draw my energy? Is it because of this that you are tied to me?" Lin Xiao nodded her pen. Wu Qingyue said strangely, "But I don't feel anything wrong. Since she wants to draw my energy, shouldn't I be abnormal? Why is it you?" Of course, Lin Xiao didn't know why this happened. She asked Little Man, "Little Man, do you know?" Little Man replied, "Maybe it's because Dad doesn't need too much energy? So there's nothing strange about him?" In fact, Little Man wasn't very clear. As long as Mommy stood by his side, Little Man wouldn't feel hungry. In fact, Little Man didn't know that Lin Xiao's situation would become like this because she wasn't awake before. But the energy in Lin Xiao's body suddenly dried up, and she couldn't stop absorbing energy. But if she continued, it would hurt Lin Xiao's body. So in order to protect Lin Xiao, she subconsciously activated another method. So the space skill in Lin Xiao's body was activated by Little Man, and Lin Xiao was put into the space. Then she followed Wu Qingyue's breath to his side before letting him out. Chapter 931. Lin Xiao asked curiously, "Is the energy I absorb not enough for you to eat?" She absorbs a lot of energy cores and zombie cores every night. "It's not enough to feed this child." Little Man said, "It's not enough." Lin Xiao asked again, "Then how long do I have to stay with him?" "Don't tell me you have to stay until you're born. It's scary if that's the case." At the same time, she wrote on the paper to answer Wu Qingyue, "Because I'm out of energy, I'm invisible to protect myself." But she heard Little Man's reply in her mind. Little Man doesn't know either, maybe it won't be long. Lin Xiao, what does this mean? You don't even know what you've done? Feeling that Lin Xiao was a little angry, Little Man immediately hid and became quiet. Wu Qingyue paid attention to Wu Yueling's emotions while reading Lin Xiao's words. Then he understood. Looking at the time, it was about time for him to coax Lingling into her room to read. So he said to Lingling's little but, "Okay Lingling, it's time for you to read. Daddy will take you upstairs to read." Although it was said that she was reading a book, she was actually really reading a book. She had to read a story over and over again, recognizing every word. Plus there were diagrams and Wu Qingyue's explanation. Lingling didn't find it hard to accept. Plus, Wu Yueling loved reading so she could recognize the words she was taught. Although she didn't know how to write, she could at least recognize the words when she saw them. But at this time Wu Yueling was struggling with him and didn't want to talk to him. Hearing his words, she didn't respond and just hugged Lin Xiao's leg. Thinking that Wu Yueling was a little emotional just now, Wu Qingyue could only give up. Because he couldn't force her, he could only arouse her interest. Usually Wu Yueling was happy to read, but tonight she wasn't happy. Thinking about it, Wu Qingyue said to Lin Xiao with a smile, "How about I take you to your room first? Since you can't leave, you can stay here for now." If she didn't stay here, where could she go? She couldn't leave. Lin Xiao rolled her eyes at him and just nodded her pen. Wu Qingyue looked at Lingling on her leg and said, "Lingling, let's go up together. Take your zombie. Auntie is going to rest in the room." Lin Xiao, who was called Auntie, was speechless. Although her soul was already 36, she could still call her Auntie. But Wu Qingyue's pause made her feel strange. Only then did Wu Yueling stand up from Lin Xiao's lap and pull her hand to walk upstairs. Lin Xiao glanced at the rabbit who was curled up in the corner of the sofa, not sure if it was asleep or not, and asked, "Lingling, do you not want your rabbit anymore?" Wu Yueling stopped in her tracks and turned around to look around. When she saw the big rabbit in the corner of the sofa, she suddenly let go of Lin Xiao's hand and ran over to pick it up. Wu Qingyue looked at her little figure as he walked upstairs. Lin Xiao waited for Wu Yueling to follow behind Wu Qingyue like a little tail before walking over. Wu Qingyue took Lin Xiao to a guest room next to the stairs on the second floor. He opened the door and pushed it in. After turning on the light, he looked inside and said, "This is the guest room that has been cleaned. You can rest here first." He knew that zombies didn't need to sleep, but he knew Lin Xiao's habits. She would use the time at night to absorb energy. Lin Xiao knocked on the door as a response and walked in. Wu Qingyue then prepared to take Wu Yueling upstairs to her room, but Wu Yueling dodged Wu Qingyue's hand and ran towards the bed in this room. Her meaning was obvious, she didn't want to go back to her room. Wu Qingyue looked at her helplessly and gave up on the idea of letting her go back to her room. "Then I'll have to trouble you to take care of her. Lingling, remember not to make too much noise, okay? You have to listen to the words of the zombie auntie." Wu Yueling ignored him. She wasn't some zombie auntie, she was a zombie mama. She was determined to call her that and she wouldn't change it no matter what. Lin Xiao looked at her speechlessly. Then he knocked on the door again. Wu Qingyue retreated and walked to the study room next door to continue his work during the day. After Lin Xiao closed the door, she sat on the bed and looked at Wu Yueling. She really wanted to have a good talk with Wu Yueling, but she was afraid of making her emotional. But the thoughts in this child's head were too strange, and it seemed to be getting more and more intense. Wu Yueling sat on the bed with the gray rabbit in her arms. She looked left and right but didn't seem to feel Lin Xiao's existence. Lin Xiao walked over and sat next to her. After thinking for a while, she couldn't help but touch her head and asked, "Does Lingling really want a mother?" Wu Yueling immediately looked in her direction and nodded. Lin Xiao sighed and said, "Does Lingling not want anyone else to be your mother besides me?" Wu Yueling shook her head and then nodded. "No, I don't want anyone else. I want you." Lin Xiao slowly said, "But I'm not a human, I'm a zombie. I can't live with you for a long time. You should find a human to be your mother and live with you." Hearing this, Wu Yueling's eyes immediately turned red. She looked at her with tears in her eyes. Lin Xiao, she really can't say it. Looking at Wu Yueling who was about to burst into tears, Lin Xiao felt very helpless. She really couldn't do anything about the child's thoughts. She was naive and stubborn. Wu Yueling looked at Lin Xiao and asked her with a wronged and puzzled look, "Why can't you live with us? You don't bite or eat people, do you?" Lin Xiao said, "I won't do it now, but I can't guarantee that I won't do it in the future. What if I go crazy one day? By then I might hurt you, your father and others." Wu Yueling lowered her head but her tears fell. She quickly raised her hand to wipe them away, then turned around and threw herself on the bed with her back facing Lin Xiao. "Lin Xiao, why does this scene look a little familiar?" At this time at the Universal Base, everyone searched for the whole afternoon but didn't find the figure of their leader. It was as if she disappeared into thin air. Thinking about how her body had been having problems recently, Lin Hao was the most anxious one. However, this matter couldn't be openly found, so he could only discuss it with Lin Feng. "How is it? You still haven't found her?" Seeing Lin Feng walk into the office, Lin Hao immediately stood up. Looking at Lin Feng's serious expression, he knew the result. Lin Feng shook his head. "I've looked everywhere but I didn't see her. Weren't the two of you always by her side? Did you notice anything strange at that time?" The last two questions were asked to Duan Wan and Xin Yuzhen. The two shook their heads. Xin Yuzhen replied, "At that time, the leader's aura was in Dr. Lin's office and didn't leave, and she didn't say anything else at that time. Even if something unexpected happened, it's impossible for there to be no movement at all." Everyone's expression was solemn. Chapter 932. Just when the people in the base were secretly looking for Lin Xiao's whereabouts, they suddenly received a message from Wu Qingyue. Lin Feng looked at the messenger strangely. "You mean our leader is in Haiqing now?" Qian Xiaoai nodded. "Yes, and the order was sent by our leader. He only told Xiedong to go there are no other orders." Lin Feng looked at the others, thought for a moment and said, "Okay, then let Xiedong go first." Duan Wan and Xin Yuzhen looked at each other, then Xin Yuzhen said, "I'll go find Xiedong immediately." With that said, she turned and left. Only then did everyone return to their respective positions, waiting for Xiedong's next step in Haiqing to report back. When Xiedong went to Haiqing, Wu Qingyue also knew he was a zombie, so he opened a small door for him to go through. When they arrived at Wu Qingyue's house, it was already past 10 at night. Lin Xiao looked at Wu Yueling, who was sleeping soundly with the rabbit in her arms. She was about to carry her back to her room when she felt Xiedong's breath coming from afar. She knew he was almost there, so she gave up on carrying Lingling back to her room. She quietly walked out of her room and silently closed the door. Then she went downstairs and sat in the living room to wait. When Xiedong arrived, Wu Qingyue also felt his breath. So he finished his work for the day and walked out of the study. When he passed by Lin Xiao's door, he stopped, then gently opened the door and walked in. Since he could feel Xiedong's breath, then she must have felt it long ago. Wu Qingyue knew that she was not in the room, so he walked in and gently carried his daughter out, then carried her to his room. The living room didn't have any lights on, so he couldn't see anything in the dark. The pen that was originally placed flat on the coffee table was being held left and right, and there was no one on the sofa in the living room. Xiedong saw this scene when he came in, but he was a zombie, so the darkness didn't affect him. He looked around and finally his eyes fell on the pen that was moving around. Why would the pen move by itself? Xiedong felt a bit strange. Then suddenly a voice came to his head, because I'm holding it. Xiedong was speechless when he saw the pen suddenly rise into the air. He was stunned for a while before he asked, "Leader?" Lin Xiao said to him telepathically, "I can't go back to the base in the near future. Help me pass on the important matters that I need to deal with in the base. Let Yuan Tianxing and Lin Feng handle the unimportant ones." Xiedong nodded. Yes. Although Lin Xiao couldn't make a sound, as a zombie of the same kind, she could transmit her thoughts to Xiedong, who was a level lower than her. However, it had to be close, not too far away. During this period of time, I might be in the same location as Wu Qingyue. If you want to find me, just find him. Xiedong looked at the pen strangely. Although he didn't know why Lin Xiao kept using this invisible mode to talk to him, he didn't ask. After hearing Lin Xiao's instructions, he nodded to show that he understood. Lin Xiao put down the pen and told him, "Don't let too many people know about this. Let's go back first." Xiedong understood what she meant. This matter could only be known to Yuan Tianxing and Lin Feng in the base. The others would be kept a secret for now. Yes. He responded expressionlessly, then quietly left. Apart from Wu Qingyue's dark soldiers, no one else knew that Xiedong had appeared here. After Xiedong left, Lin Xiao went back to her room. When she opened the door, she found that Ling Ling was no longer on the bed. She guessed that Wu Qingyue came and took her away. She didn't think too much about it and directly laid on the bed. She took out a level 5 zombie core from her space and began to absorb it. For ordinary people, or for the newly invented energy machines, the level 5 zombie core's energy could be used for a long time. But for Lin Xiao, it was only enough for her to absorb for 2 hours. The energy that Lin Xiao absorbed entered her body and slowly went into her brain, then to the rest of her body. When it finally went to her lower abdomen, the energy had already been reduced by 70%. Therefore, only 30% of the zombie core energy that Lin Xiao absorbed was absorbed by Little Man. The remaining 70% was left in Lin Xiao's body and the zombie core in her brain. But for Lin Xiao, who was only at the peak of level 7, it was like a drop of water falling into a dry lake. She didn't know when it would be filled. On the other side, after Wu Qingyue put the sleeping Ling Ling on the bed, he covered her with a blanket and went to take a shower. Then he climbed into bed and hugged his daughter to sleep. But he didn't know that in the middle of the night, a small portion of the superpower in his body was gradually flowing out of his body, forming an energy current in the air. Then it flew out of the half-open window, made a turn, and went in through the window of Lin Xiao's room. Then it entered Lin Xiao's lower abdomen. The next morning, before Lin Xiao opened her eyes, the energy was cut off. When the last tail entered her body, Lin Xiao slowly opened her eyes. Upstairs, Wu Qingyue also opened his eyes not long after. He didn't seem to feel the energy that was flowing out of his body. Maybe it was too little, so he didn't notice it. The first thing he did when he woke up was to look at Wu Yueling. Seeing that his daughter was still sleeping soundly, he quietly got up to wash up. After washing his face and coming out, he saw that Wu Yueling had already sat up with disheveled hair. She was rubbing her eyes in a daze. "Ling Ling is awake? Then come down and wash your face and brush your teeth. After breakfast we'll go out to play today." He didn't go over to carry her down, but instead walked to the side to pour water. Although Wu Yueling looked like she wasn't fully awake, she didn't resist when she heard Wu Qingyue's words. She sat on the side of the bed in a daze, got off the bed and put on her shoes. Wearing her small shoes, she went to the bathroom by herself. When she finished washing her face and came out, Wu Qingyue was already dressed. Then he changed her clothes, tied up her hair and so on. After he was done, he brought her out of the room and went downstairs to make breakfast. Lin Xiao had already come downstairs. She was sitting on the sofa, grabbing the gray rabbit and rubbing it. When Wu Yueling came downstairs, her eyes lit up when she saw the gray rabbit that was pushed in the air. She left her father and ran to the sofa. Wu Qingyue glanced at her, then went into the kitchen to make breakfast. After breakfast, Wu Qingyue paid attention to the situation around him before taking Ling Ling out. Lin Xiao didn't sit in his car. Instead, she sat on the roof of the car and went out with him. The sun wasn't very hot in the morning, so she could stand it. Chapter 933. Early in the morning, in a hidden building 6 kilometers away from Sea City's safe zone, several advanced and powerful tanks were parked in the underground parking lot downstairs. Shadows of people could be vaguely seen above. There were no zombies around the building, as if they were avoiding something. There were no zombies within 100 meters. The potions used by these people were exchanged from the Green Mountain base, which was the same potion that Lei Qing wanted to use to trade with Lin Xiao at the Universal base. "Are you all ready?" A level 6 arcanist among the group asked the other captains. "Ready." Everyone responded in unison. One of them asked, "We can prepare to move at any time." The level 6 arcanist nodded, looked at his watch and immediately ordered, "Okay, move out immediately." "Now." "Yes." Everyone immediately responded and quickly dispersed. He began to gather his own team members and began to move. One of the teams was wearing protective suits that could isolate the smell of breath. They were holding a dozen or so ordinary people who were tied up. These people's hands were all tied up. They were all strong and young. However, his eyes were lifeless and his face was pale. They were separated one by one and had a potion poured into their mouths. Then the people who captured them pulled out daggers and started to cut open their skin, letting blood flow out. Then he threw them out of the car and tied them up with a rope. His originally lifeless eyes revealed a look of horror and anger, and his face twisted. The smell of fresh blood immediately spread from their bodies. It was unknown if it was the effect of the medicine they had just been fed. The stench of their blood became very thick, drifting in the air with the wind and spreading far away. Roar, roar, roar. Soon the zombies nearby all smelled the blood. These people began to slowly drive the tank, dragging the bloody man around in circles to places where there were more zombies, attracting all the zombies in the surroundings. The ordinary person who was used as bait was bleeding, but when he saw the zombies rushing around him, he was afraid and wanted to escape, so he kept running under the tank. Until the blood on their bodies flowed out, they fell into a coma and were brought to the car. But they were not rescued, they were tied to the back of the car and continued to cut their wounds to lure the zombies. Roar, roar, roar dash. The number of zombies at the back of the car increased, and a small zombie tide began to appear. On the other side, Wu Qingyue's men who were watching them from afar, gritted their teeth and put down their binoculars. What do they want to do? How could he do such a thing? Crow. Another companion said expressionlessly, "It looks like they are preparing to gather these zombies. I think they want to lure them to our base." "That's right, they can't enter our base. But they want to use this method to create chaos in our base and then take advantage of the chaos to break in. Hurry up and report this back." "I'll go now." When Wu Qingyue's car quietly drove out of the base, he received this information. The smile on his face deepened, but there was no trace of a smile in his eyes. Instead, there was a flash of coldness. "I got it. Go back and tell Cheng to tell the other 2 leaders not to worry about what's happening outside. Tell them not to worry, just keep an eye on those people in the base. They may also have some actions today. Tell Xiao Yunlong not to be careless," he said with a sneer. "Yes." The subordinate quickly went back to the base to pass the message. Lin Xiao stood on the roof of the car and smelled the faint smell of blood in the air. There seemed to be something in the smell of blood that made her a little excited, but she didn't know what it was. She roughly guessed that those people were using living people to gather the zombies. It seemed that they were going to lure them to the gate of the Sea City base. In this way they could take advantage of the chaos to sneak into the Sea City base. Even if the people outside couldn't come in, those who were already in the base could take action. Wu Qingyue's car quickly drove out of the safe zone and stopped. After a while, a subordinate came over to report the information. "They have gathered the zombies in more than a dozen directions. and the total number is at least tens of thousands. Wu Qingyue asked, "Are those people all in these cars?" The subordinate replied, "Yes, they are all in the cars." Wu Qingyue nodded and said, "Okay, continue to keep an eye on them." Yes. Lin Xiao watched the excitement from the side. She wouldn't intervene anyway. At this time, Wu Qingyue carried Wu Yueling out, looked at the roof of the car and said, "I'll have to trouble you to take care of Lingling." Lin Xiao immediately understood and gently rolled down from the car. Then she took Lingling from his arms. Looking at Wu Qingyue suddenly talking to the air, the driver and Wu Qingyue's men next to him all had the same expression. When Lingling seemed to be taken away from Wu Qingyue's arms and disappeared in front of their eyes, they wondered if they were hallucinating. After Lin Xiao carried Wu Yueling over, she called Little Man Man. Then her hands became light and Wu Yueling disappeared from her hands. In the Sea City base, after 9 o'clock in the morning, Xiao Yunlong, Zhou Shihui and the others were once again talking with Wei Haichao and the others in the living room. But this time there were no people from the Black Dragon base. There were only people from China, Heaven Fire and the Meng clan. "Our conditions will not change. If you really don't accept it, then there is no other way. Then there is no other way. This cooperation can only be suspended." Xiao Yunlong just smiled at them. Wei Haichao was a little surprised by his words. He stared at them and asked, "Suspended? Does your Sea City want to suspend this transaction with our China?" It should be known that the various instruments made by China were not something that Sea City could produce. In the past, they relied on the fact that Sea City could not produce these technologies, and every time they traded, they would ruthlessly slaughter Sea City's supplies. And in order to get their various advanced technological products, Sea City had to grit their teeth and cut off a piece of meat for them. Who told Sea City to not have such powerful scientific and technological personnel? Xiao Yunlong shook his head. "No, not this time. It has to be stopped in the future." In the past, because they did not have the technology, they had no choice but to suffer in this direction. But now that the technology of Sea City was also evolving, the technical personnel were also growing. Although there was still a long way to go compared to the mature technology of China, they could quickly meet their own needs. So they did not need to use their huge amount of food to exchange for those technological products with China. Besides, things were dead but people were alive. In the past 2 years they had poached a lot of scientific and technological personnel from China. They no longer needed the other party's products, but the other party now needed their food. Chapter 934. What? You want to stop trading with us in the future? What? Without the products we provide, your base will not be able to live a comfortable life. Wei Haichao's face changed from surprise to a dark expression. His last sentence already had a hint of threat in it. He did not expect Sea City to be so stubborn this time. In the past, every time Sea City wanted to suspend trading with them, the Chinese base would take out the most advanced weapons to threaten them. If they refused to trade, then don't blame them for being impolite. A few years ago, Sea City was weak and had a large population. At that time, although there was Wu Qingyue of the Thunder attribute, the advancement of his ability was still very slow and he relied on weapons to survive. In the past 2 years, although Sea City had a great protest against the unequal value of the trade between the two sides, after many negotiations, China was finally forced to take a step back. In any case, Sea City had slowly developed and had some confidence. Xiao Yunlong sneered disdainfully, "Even if we don't trade with you, we can still live a comfortable life. You don't have to worry about it." If they did not teach China a lesson this time, they would think that they were afraid of them. Playing dirty tricks on their heads? Did they think they were dead? Want to snatch technology? Want to snatch people when you can't snatch technology? Dream on. Wei Haichao and Ho Guozhong's faces darkened, staring at Xiao Yunlong. "What do you mean by this? We have always been cooperating, don't you give us a reason to suddenly terminate it?" Xiao Yunlong glanced at Zhou Shihui, then looked back at them and said, "Reason? Well, that's simple. Because we can now produce good technology for use, we don't need to bother China's technology in the future. After all, if we want to use your things we have to pay a greater price. It's not worth it at all, right?" Wei Haichao narrowed his eyes and said with some disbelief, "You made it yourself? How long can it be used? Is it as good as ours?" He sneered, looking down on the technology of Sea City's scientific and technological personnel. The best technical personnel in China were all in China. Even if Sea City could find a few, could the things developed be compared to those made in China? Seeing the stiff atmosphere between China and Sea City, Heavenly Fire and the Meng clan were watching the excitement. They were also surprised by Sea City's request to terminate the deal. After all, the major bases did not dare to openly offend China. After all, it was the #1 survivor base. They were powerful and had a large population. Now that Haiqing dared to openly oppose them, they would definitely be targeted by China in the future. They would find all kinds of opportunities and excuses to suppress Haiqing. Moreover, Huaxia had long had the intention to suppress Haiqing. It was just that it had not shown it yet. Who asked Sea City to produce a rank 8 metahuman so quickly? Furthermore, it was the lightning element, which was even stronger than Xikong Chen's fire element. Moreover, the other bases had also received the news that many of the technicians who were not doing well in Huaxia or had been suppressed were secretly preparing to go to Sea City. Even if we can't make it as good as you, it's fine as long as it can be used. We don't ask for much. In the past I couldn't do it, so I asked you to cooperate with me. Now that we can do it ourselves, of course we don't need to exchange with you. Xiao Yunlong smiled lightly. At this time, seeing Xiao Yunlong's proud smile, Wei Haichao and Hou Guizhong also sneered in their hearts. Wait until their second plan succeeds. After taking the people away, Huaxia would not have to worry about the problem of not being able to grow food on the land. At that time they would not be restrained by Haiqing like now. They could still suppress Haiqing. But now they had to wait to see Haiqing deal with the zombie tide in a panic and have no time to pay attention to them. At this time, outside Haiqing base, Wu Qingyue stood on a 7-story building, looking at a chariot burning with black smoke 100 meters ahead. The chariot was completely scorched black, with a dent on the top and the body of the chariot still on fire. It was as if it was struck by lightning from the sky. However, this was indeed caused by a lightning strike from the sky. After the chariot stopped, countless zombies gathered behind immediately rushed up and pounced on the chariot. They reached into the cracks and grabbed the injured, half-dead or just dead people inside. Wu Qingyue glanced at it and immediately turned to the next chariot. There was still one last chariot. The other teams quickly respond. Team 1. Team 2. At this time, the rank 6 metahuman in the last chariot was shouting into the communication device in exasperation, wanting to receive a response from the other chariots. Just now, he suddenly realized that he could not contact the other chariots. After hearing a few thunderous sounds, he had a bad premonition. In the end, he shouted into the communication device for a while, asking the people in the other chariots to respond. In the end, there were fewer replies from the other chariots. As the thunder rumbled more and more, the replies from the other teams gradually faded away. Now it was completely silent. Wu Qingyue did not need to get close to the chariots. He just stood far away and waved his hand, causing several lightning bolts to descend from the sky and strike his targets. Lin Xiao stood a dozen meters away from him, feeling bored as he watched. After seeing Wu Qingyue easily destroy the dozen chariots that were prepared to attract the zombie tide, the nearby zombies rushed up and buried the chariots, or exploded the chariots. Even so, it did not stop the enthusiasm of the zombies. After dealing with these people, Lin Xiao let Man release Wu Yueling. When Wu Yueling came out, she looked at the surrounding environment with a blank expression, but when she saw Wu Qingyue, she calmed down. At this time they were all on the roof of a building. Wu Qingyue walked over and held Lingling's hand as they walked down the stairs. Soon the two of them went downstairs and sat in the car that was already parked downstairs. The car drove back to Haiqing. At this time, Wei Haichao and the others in Haiqing did not know that their second plan had been extinguished. Looking at the time, he felt that it was about time. But when he saw Xiao Yunlong and the others were still calm, he couldn't help but sneer in his heart. Let's see if you can still be so calm later. Xiao Yunlong also looked at the time and said, since we can't talk anymore, I think it's about time. Why don't we treat you to a meal and send you off? Li Jingye of Skyfire Base and Bao Qingji of the Meng clan hesitated. They did not expect the people of Haiqing to drive them away so directly. They looked at Wei Haichao and saw that Wei Haichao and Hou Guizhong were expressionless, so they did not move. Since Leader Xiao has said so, then we will not force you. But I hope that Haiqing base will not regret it in the future. Hou Guizhong said coldly, then turned to look at Wei Haichao, got up and left. As he walked out, he vaguely looked at his men, indicating something. Chapter 935. The subordinate who was glanced at by Hou Guizhong quickly disappeared. Since your base is so kind, then we won't be polite. Wei Guizhong also stood up and said with a smile. Originally, all future transactions had been unilaterally terminated by Sea City, so they did not have the face to continue to stay. And Xiao Yunlong's words of treating them to a meal was more important to send them off. Obviously, he did not want the other party to stay in his territory. But China had not received the news that there was a tide of zombies outside the gate of Sea City base, so they certainly would not leave. So for this meal they had to sit down and eat with a thick face. The remaining Bao Qingji and Li Jingye looked at each other, then at Xiao Yunlong and Zhou Shihui. Without saying anything they all got up and went out. Xiao Yunlong and Zhou Shihui did not expect them to agree to a meal. After a slight pause, the two looked at each other, their eyes flashing with a bright light. They could vaguely guess the other party's thoughts. They were just waiting for the incident to happen. But they did not know what kind of expression they would have when they knew that it would not happen. Seeing that they were not willing to leave so quickly, Xiao Yunlong and the others did not directly expose the other party, but sent people to the canteen to prepare a table of good dishes and wine. They took these people to eat. At the table, both sides had their own thoughts, neither spoke nor moved their chopsticks. In order to stall for time, they looked at the other party with a sneer. What? Leaders, are you not satisfied with our table of dishes? Do you want to change to another table? Xiao Yunlong's mouth curved into a smile, and his words were very normal. But there was a touch of contempt in his tone. Wei Haichao glanced at him and said with a smile, "How could it be? It is not easy to eat so many good dishes in the end of the world. I heard that the breeding industry in Sea City is also very good. You can find ordinary pigs, cows and sheep to raise. These meat are very precious." Although he looked at the several plates of delicious meat on the table and praised them, his hands did not move his chopsticks. But Li Jingye next to him slowly picked up his chopsticks, picked up a piece of braised pork and put it in his mouth. While chewing with relish, he nodded and praised, "Well, not bad. Delicious, I still like to eat meat, ha." After he finished eating, he picked up the wine glass that was 70% full and took a sip. Then, he said with a relaxed expression, "Since everyone knows how precious these dishes are at this time, how can we waste them? Isn't that right?" "Ah, I agree with Leader Li." At this time, Bao Qingji also laughed loudly. Then he picked up the chopsticks and started eating. Of course, they were not worried that there was something wrong with the dishes on the table, because there was no need for Haiqing to do so. Xiao Yunlong's eyes flickered as he looked at them, and then he also picked up his chopsticks. Although their cooperation with Huaxia had broken off on the surface, Huaxia was not the only base present. Haiqing had no intention of becoming enemies with the other two bases. Thus, everyone continued to eat and drink for a while, each with their own thoughts. The subordinate that Hou Guozhong had signaled to disappear just now quickly returned. He didn't care that the people dining in this private room were all leaders of the various bases. He quietly walked in, quickly walked behind Hou Guozhong, and bent down to say something in his ear. Hou Guozhong's face changed imperceptibly, but he quickly concealed it. But the others were secretly paying attention to him and did not miss this. Xiao Yunlong on Haiqing's side had a meaningful smile, while Wei Haichao on Huaxia's side had a bad premonition when he saw Hou Guozhong's expression. While Li Jingye and Bao Qingji's expressions did not change, but their eyes darkened. And Hou Guozhong heard his subordinate say, "There was no movement outside the door." This meant that according to the plan, the corpse tide that should have been drawn over at this time was not drawn over. Then it was possible that the people outside had encountered some accident, or encountered some situation that caused the corpse tide to not be drawn over in time. If the other side did not draw the corpse tide over, then there was no way to divert the attention of Xiao Yunlong and the others. Then it was unlikely that they would take advantage of the chaos to take away the soil researchers. At this time, Xiao Liqing also came in from outside the door and came to Xiao Yunlong's side. He did not speak in a low voice like Hou Guozhong's subordinates, but spoke in a voice that everyone present could hear. "Leader, just now there was news from the west gate that there were more than a dozen zombie hordes moving not far from the safe zone. I don't know why those zombie hordes gathered together, but fortunately they did not approach the safe zone." Xiao Yunlong very cooperatively showed a surprised expression, turned to look at him and asked, "Zombie hordes moving? Gathered together?" Xiao Liqing nodded. Originally these dozens of zombie hordes seemed to have a tendency to merge together, almost forming a small corpse tide, but I don't know why they did not merge. At first they were still approaching the safe zone, but then they stopped for some reason. Xiao Yunlong asked, "What about now?" Xiao Liqing said, "Now those zombie hordes have stopped moving, they did not gather together and there are no other movements. They seem to have quietened down." Xiao Yunlong nodded and glanced at Zhou Shihui. "So it is like this, then you continue to keep watching. Pass the situation to our leader Wu at the Universal Base, he has a way to solve these zombie hordes." Zhou Shihui nodded. He who had not spoken until now finally opened his mouth and said in a low voice, "It's not a big deal, it shouldn't have a big impact. But he looked at the other people and said, but if Director Wei and the others want to go through the west gate, they may have to take a detour or go through the north gate. Because these people all came from the west gate, they should go through the west gate. And at this time, Wei Haichao and Ho Guozhong's faces were already a bit ugly when they heard the news, but they endured and forced themselves to cover it up. Wei Haichao secretly clenched his teeth and said, it doesn't matter, we can go through the north gate. They did not expect that the plan outside would be ruined. And the other side said it so loudly, it was obvious that they deliberately let them hear it, and the other side had long been aware of it. But they could not reveal any flaws to let the other side catch them, and it was even more impossible to admit that this matter was arranged by them. So now Wei Haichao and Ho Guozhong could only grit their teeth and swallow it into their stomach, pretending to be concerned, and asked, since there is the possibility of a small zombie tide forming, then this matter is more serious. You should be careful and deal with it as soon as possible. Xiao Yunlong smiled and said, oh, it doesn't matter. Now we have a way to deal with zombies. You don't have to worry. Wei Haichao responded with a fake smile, that's good. An Li Jingye and Bao Qingji's expressions were changing, their eyes were somewhat flickering, and no one knew what they were thinking. Chapter 936. At this time Ho Guozhong suddenly looked gloomily at Xiao Yunlong and the others, saying, I heard that your leader Wu often stays in the newly built base, it seems that he is really infatuated with Miss Lu. Xiao Yunlong nodded in acknowledgement, indeed I also think so. Unfortunately, although the flowers are interested, the brook is heartless. Miss Lu doesn't like our leader Wu. It seems that it will be very difficult for our leader to marry Miss Lu. Ho Guozhong said, but when we came here I heard that there seemed to be a thunder ability user going crazy at the base, I don't know who it is. After all, everyone knew that there were very few thunder ability users, if not counting the zombie emperor. So far there was only Wu Qingyue. Oh, is there? Why don't we know? Xiao Yunlong replied with a blank expression. I think you don't need to hide it, Wu Qingyue is an 8th level thunder ability user. When he goes crazy, who can get close to him? Your leader's situation is probably very bad now. Wei Haichao said with a sneer. It directly showed that they already knew about this matter, and if your Sea City lacks a strong person like Wu Qingyue, what qualifications do you have to compete with China? Since Sea City doesn't know what's good for them, then they can't blame China for being impolite. Our leader Wu is fine. You don't have to worry, Zhou Shihui said calmly and took a sip of his wine. Obviously there was not much reaction to Wei Haichao's words. Xiao Yunlong was the same. And the reaction of the two of them in the eyes of others made them think that they were deliberately hiding it. Their hearts were probably not calm anymore. Now that they knew that the plan outside could no longer be carried out, Wei Haichao and the others did not want to continue to stay here. They all got up and left with a gloomy face. I will send you out of the gate. Do you want to go through the north gate or? Xiao Yunlong stood up and asked with a big smile after they all got up and left. West gate, are we still afraid of those zombies? It just so happens that we are passing by and can help you solve it. Shouldn't your Sea City thank us? Wei Haichao replied with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. That's not necessary, we can solve it ourselves. We don't dare to trouble you to do this. Xiao Yunlong replied indifferently. Completely ungrateful. Humph. Do as you wish. In any case we'll just go through the west gate. Wei Haichao's face darkened as he said coldly. Without the opportunity to stir up trouble, Wei Haichao and the others didn't directly kidnap them in broad daylight. What's more, Xiao Yunlong and Zhou Shihui, in order to prevent them from doing anything behind the scenes, also specially sent them to the gate of the base. After leaving the base, Wei Haichao and Ho Guozhong immediately headed towards the location where the zombies were gathered. Not long after, they saw the destroyed vehicles. Their bodies were sprayed with the zombie isolation agent from Qingshan base. The zombies started to retreat when they smelled it from afar. With these potions, it would be very convenient to move around outside the safe base. But if he wanted to use it to kill zombies, he wouldn't need it. Wei Haichao and Ho Guozhong's expressions were extremely ugly as they looked at the chariot that had been burnt to ashes. Boss, we found the other cars. The situation is the same. After the subordinate went to investigate, he came back and reported to Ho Guozhong. Ho Guozhong's face turned even uglier. It looks like they were not attacked by the fire element, but by the lightning element. Their situation was still fine this morning, but they were destroyed so quickly. It seems that the opponent's strength is very strong. Li Jingye looked at the situation of the vehicle and opened his mouth to analyze. The vehicle was burnt black, but there were no other traces in the surroundings. It didn't look like the vehicle flipped over and then self-destructed. It was obvious that when the vehicle was driven here normally, it was directly hit by an ability and then blew up. There were a lot of wreckage in the vehicle, and there were a lot of blood and pieces of flesh outside the vehicle. It should be the people in the vehicle that were dragged out and eaten by the surrounding zombies. The weapons in the vehicle were blown up, and their new weapons were destroyed before they could be used. It can't be the lightning element. The place where Wu Qingyue went crazy is also not here. If it was him, it's impossible that only this vehicle was hit by lightning, and there are no other traces of lightning strikes. Hou Guozhong directly excluded Wu Qingyue. In his view, it was impossible for Wu Qingyue to appear here at this time. Then who is it? And from the looks of it, your people were completely caught off guard by this attack. Then the opponent's ability level can only be high, not low. It should be at least level 7, and if it's not the lightning element, then it's the fire element. This Haiqing and Universal Base is level 7 fire ability user. If it's Lin Feng from Universal Base, could it be him? But I've never heard of him breaking through level 7, and he only reached level 6 last year. It shouldn't be that fast. Li Jingye thought curiously and suddenly thought of Lin Feng. No matter who it is, we will definitely find out who it is. Wei Haichao gritted his teeth and coldly snorted. At this time, Bao Qingji suddenly looked at Hou Guozhong and asked, "This Haichao has shed all pretense of cordiality with China. What do you plan to do next?" This time it could be said that they had returned in defeat. They originally didn't intend to do any real business, so other than the appearance of some goods that were used as a cover, they didn't bring anything. On the other hand, the elites and weapons that they had secretly brought were all wiped out. However, the things that they really wanted to bring back were not there at all. They didn't get the land purification technology, and they also didn't get the technicians. They were also forced to terminate their future business with the other party. To China, this was simply a ruthless slap in the face. Since Haiqing doesn't know what's good for them, then don't blame us for not showing mercy. Anyway, they can't cure Wu Qingyue now. Let's see if they have the strength to resist us. Wei Haichao's eyes flashed coldly, and his expression was gloomy. This Haiqing is too selfish. Since they have the land purification technology, why can't they let everyone know about it? They aren't united at all. If this goes on, it will be harder for humanity to survive. Li Jingye had a dissatisfied look on his face as he criticized Haiqing. But in this post-apocalyptic world where only the strong were respected, everyone guarded their own side, and didn't interfere with each other's business. If you want to obtain benefits from others, you naturally have to pay the corresponding value. The technology that China possessed was much more than Haiqing. But at that time, they didn't say that they would give up these technologies for the sake of humanity's unity and survival. Instead, they stared at the technology that others had and they didn't have, greedily calculating. Chapter 937. China's alliance with the other bases in Haiqing had failed, and China had lost face. Skyfire and Meng didn't get anything out of it either. The Black Dragon base, on the other hand, had traded for some food with Haiqing. Du Kunxing was the biggest winner. He hadn't asked for much, but at least for the next 2 or 3 months he wouldn't have to worry about food and clothing for the hundreds of thousands of Black Dragon survivors. Since things have come to this, we'll go back and plan things out. But the most important thing right now is to solve the problem of food. Haiqing may not be willing to trade with you, but that doesn't mean they won't trade with Skyfire. What do you think? Do you need our help in the future? Li Jingye asked with a smile. Wei Haichao narrowed his eyes at him and smirked inwardly. His face remained impassive. Not at the moment, we still have food. When we need it in the future, we won't forget about Skyfire. But maybe we won't need to wait until then, we'll be able to figure out a way to purify the soil. Li Jingye nodded. Alright, I still have some business to attend to, so I won't be going with you. Let's say our goodbyes here. See you later. Wei Haichao didn't say anything, just said, take care. Li Jingye and his men parted ways with the Chinese. They took a detour in the direction of Universal Base. This base is doing very well right now, and for Sea City to allow them to develop like this, I'm starting to wonder if this is a second base that Sea City has secretly extended out. Moreover, the original survivors of Hidden Cloud City and Earth Dragon Base were adding in large numbers to Sea City and Universal Life Base. Universal Life Base was able to swallow so many people. It can't be as simple as it looks. Li Jingye had his eyes on Universal Base for a long time. He'd sent many people to investigate, but none had yielded any useful information. Even Gui Kong himself had disappeared when he arrived at this place. There's something strange about this base, but our men aren't making any obvious moves. They just dealt with a bunch of troublemakers not too long ago. In order to maintain their identities, I told everyone not to make any moves. Li Jingye's assistant looked at him. Because there had been a lot of people joining the Universal Base recently, it was very easy for them to send people to sneak in. However, after they entered, the people in the Universal Base would investigate them. Therefore, in order not to attract attention, the deputy asked the people who sneaked in to temporarily stop gathering information. Take it slow. Haste does not get you to eat hot tofu. It's already very good that they managed to sneak in. Let them hide first and don't move. Li Jingye smiled faintly. He seemed to be very supportive of this matter. He continued, as long as the leader of the base isn't stupid, he will keep an eye on these newly joined survivors. If he does something as soon as he enters, won't he expose himself? The deputy nodded. At the same time, Yuan Tianxing, Lin Feng, and the others were having a meeting at the Universal Base. After Xie Dong returned, he told them about Lin Xiao's situation and temporarily handed over the base to them. In fact, not long after Lin Feng returned to the base, he bumped into Lin Hao in the medical center and learned about Lin Xiao's sudden disappearance. After knowing that Lin Xiao was fine for the time being, he was relieved. As for why Lin Xiao suddenly went to Sea City, he did not pay much attention to it. Anyway, he couldn't guess his sister's thoughts. As long as Lin Xiao was fine, he was too lazy to care. These creatures are very afraid of sunlight. They don't dare to come out during the day and only come out at night to look for food. They don't have abilities, but their bodies are very strong. Their mutated level is the same as the mutated beasts on the ground, but these level 1 creatures can bite a level 2 ferocious beast to death. They can even fight level 3 ferocious beasts to a draw. More importantly, these creatures can control their berserk state. After Lin Feng explained the situation of the underground creatures, his expression was somewhat cold. When Yuan Tianxing heard this, especially the last sentence, he was slightly surprised. You mean they can control their berserk state freely? Lin Feng nodded and said expressionlessly, that's why I said that these level 1 creatures can defeat level 3 ferocious beasts. Moreover, they are not restricted by the opponent's size. These creatures look like gorillas, but they have no hair on their bodies. They have a layer of hard keratin-like skin, and the muscles on their limbs are very strong. Their claws are also very hard and sharp. They can really cut through iron like mud. Their teeth are also very scary, and they can bite even more than the mutated rats. However, these underground gorillas don't have eyes. They probably use their nose and ears or other senses to detect their surroundings. Yuan Tianxing imagined the actions that Lin Feng described and imagined an extremely ugly monster without eyes. Every night, these creatures will come out on a large scale to eat alone. When the sun is about to rise, they will only go back into the ground. They like to eat living creatures and only come out at night to hunt mutated beasts. Moreover, they don't eat on the ground. As long as they catch them, they will bite them to death and drag them back into the cave. Lin Feng continued. Yuan Tianxing frowned and asked a question. How wide is their range of activity at night? Lin Feng replied, every night when they come out to hunt, they will choose a different direction to advance. The furthest they can go is currently a kilometer away. As long as they pass by, all living creatures within a kilometer will be caught by them. Not a single one can escape. Their senses are very sharp. Even the birds on the trees will be bitten off before they can fly away. In other words, none of the underground gorillas had survived. Yuan Tianxing looked at Lin Feng and asked, then how did you guys observe them? You weren't discovered? Lin Feng shook his head. We weren't the ones who approached them. Asan and Asi were the ones who brought them over. Asan and Asi were zombies, so those things weren't interested in them. They completely ignored them. Yuan Tianxing then nodded in understanding. Oh, so that's how it is. What's the highest level of these things? Lin Feng was silent for a few seconds before saying in a low voice, Level 7. From the time I observed them, there would be at least a level 7 with more than one of them coming out at night. This is because a different batch of them would come out every 2 to 3 days. Yuan Tianxing's eyes widened as he said in disbelief, You mean we can't be sure of the number of level 7s? And there are many of them. Although it wasn't difficult to encounter a level 7 mutated beast, it wasn't to the extent of them appearing in groups. That was because level 7 mutated beasts were very territorial. It was impossible for 2 of them to move out at the same time. Not even their own kind. If there were 2 or more level 7 mutated beasts appearing at the same time, it could only mean that there was a level 8 existence behind them. Anyway, I've seen more than 20 of them in the past few days. Moreover, when these level 7 mutated beasts go berserk, their strength is comparable to a level 8 mutated beast. Lin Feng let out a long sigh. Chapter 938. 20 Level 7 Mutated Beasts in a Group. What kind of destructive power and danger was that? It was no wonder that Lin Feng's expression was so serious after he returned. Yuan Qinxing thought for a while and asked, "Did you go down to the cave to take a look?" Lin Feng nodded. Yes, it was very quiet in the day. There are many underground passages that crisscross and cover a wide area. Each passage gets deeper the further you go, but for safety's sake I didn't let Ah-san and the rest go too deep. When those things came out at night I let them go down too. But they were attacked. Only a small part of those things came out of the ground. Most of them are still in the underground cave. Other than the cave that was discovered, are there any other caves? Yuan Qinxing frowned and asked. Lin Feng shook his head. I've looked at the terrain within 10 kilometers, and there isn't a second cave like this. But I can't guarantee that there won't be another one in the future. Yuan Qinxing said, if there isn't a second cave, perhaps those things won't spread. But we're not clear about the situation underground, so we can't guarantee that. But that area should still be marked as a dangerous restricted area. Inform all the hunting teams to avoid that area. Lin Feng nodded and said, yes. I'll write a report to the leader. Hearing him mention Lin Xiao, Yuan Qinxing's expression was slightly startled. Then he asked hesitantly, Leader, is she really fine? Recently he always felt that she gave him a strange feeling. It was as if her aura had calmed down a lot. Although her aura hadn't changed, he didn't know why she didn't feel as dangerous as before. And now she suddenly disappeared for unknown reasons and then appeared in Haiqing inexplicably. He felt that there was something he was very concerned about. And when Wu Qingyue went crazy last time, although there wasn't much movement, he woke up so quickly. It didn't seem right. Lin Feng thought about it and said, according to my understanding, there should be some problems on her side. But it's not a big problem, so she didn't let us know what happened. Don't worry, isn't Wu Qingyue here? Although he said that Lin Xiao shouldn't have any big problems, he also learned from Lin Hao that her problems were actually caused by the baby in her stomach. Although her situation was a little special, it seemed very normal. After all, pregnant women would have different reactions due to the mother's body when they were pregnant. Although Lin Hao was a little anxious about not being able to control her situation, he was not very worried that there would be a big problem. Therefore, Lin Feng trusted his brother's attitude and was not very worried about Lin Xiao's situation. Yuan Qinxing looked at him, his lips moving slightly, but in the end he swallowed the words he wanted to say. Alright, her brother wasn't worried at all. As an outsider, there was no need for him to be too anxious. Although he had decided to let go of her, it was too difficult to do so. Reason could control him, but it could not control his heart. While Lin Feng and Yuan Qinxing were talking about the underground creatures, they didn't know that the cave extended to the other side. A group of creatures that were bald but had very long legs and no eyes on their heads were waving their sharp claws and digging a hole in the ground. Wherever their claws passed, be it hard stones or weathered earth, they were all easily smashed and cut open. This group of muscular creatures with long forelimbs and short hind limbs were the only ones in the group. The creatures in charge of digging in front were all huge level 5 creatures. Behind them were their companions with lower levels and smaller bodies. They were quickly carrying the excavated soil away. Not long after, 10 kilometers northwest of the cave that Lin Feng and the others had just scouted, suddenly, in the middle of a small park, a few meters wide and 7 to 8 meters long, suddenly sank with a bang. The bottom of the pit was dark and nothing could be seen. Because it was daytime, the sunlight shone in but could not reach the end. At night, when the sun set and the sky gradually darkened, there was movement in the pit. Only then did the sound of movement come from the pit. A claw shining with a cold light reached out and scratched the ground beside the pit with a thud. The sharp nails dug directly into the soil, and then a shadow flashed out. Soon, a second and a third shadow appeared. In the darkness, after these shadows crawled out of the cave, they sniffed the air, and then quickly rushed in the same direction silently. Behind them, black shadows flashed out of the cave one after another, chasing in the direction that the black shadows in front of them left. Not long after, there was a strange movement near the park, and a wave of bloody smell came. However, no sound was heard. Soon, a shadow quickly returned, one of its front claws dragging a bloody object into the cave. After a few minutes, another shadow was seen dragging an object that emitted a bloody smell from afar, and quickly entered the cave. After a night, the countless mutated cats, dogs, and birds that originally existed in this park had disappeared without a trace. Only the surrounding air was filled with a faint bloody smell that lingered. When the sun rose, the sunlight shone down, and a gust of wind blew through the forest in the park. The bloody smell gradually dissipated. When Lin Xiao woke up early in the morning, she scattered the ashes of the corpse core in her hand into the trash can, and then walked to the sink in the bathroom to wash her hands and face. She did not know why, but today was already the third day of invisibility. However, Lin Xiao felt a lot more relaxed today, and her body did not feel so oppressed. Ever since she couldn't use her ability before, she felt a sense of oppression in her body that was bound. Although she would absorb a few corpse cores, plants and energy cores every night, it was not as easy as today. After Lin Xiao washed her face, she dried her hands and touched her stomach. After saying good morning to little man, she changed her clothes and walked out. On the other side, after Wu Qingyue woke up, he had a faint feeling that he did not want to get up. However, he only hesitated for a few seconds and then got up from the bed. Then, after washing up, he served Wu Yueling. When he came downstairs, he saw a cup of water on the coffee table, and then an invisible hand picked up the cup. Then he saw the cup tilted and poured into an invisible mouth. The water in the cup decreased a little and then it was put back on the table. Seeing this scene, Wu Qingyue was already used to it. As for Wu Yueling, she ran towards Lin Xiao happily. Wu Qingyue had a shallow smile on his face, and his eyes softly looked in the direction of the sofa, and then turned to the kitchen. Chapter 939. After Wu Yueling said those two words the night before yesterday, she did not speak again. No matter how Wu Qingyue coaxed her last night, she was not willing to speak again. Although Wu Qingyue was a little disappointed about this, he was more happy. After all, Wu Yueling had spoken again, so the chances of her speaking in the future would be much greater. This was a good sign. Wu Qingyue, who entered the kitchen, inadvertently glanced in the direction of the living room. The corners of his mouth unconsciously hooked up. The smile in his eyes was different from when he was outside. At this time he was smiling in the real meaning. Although it was very faint, it was not as fake as usual. This was the first time the female zombie lived at his place. He used to stay in her territory. Staying in his own territory like this, Wu Qingyue's heart had a subtle sense of satisfaction. But when he thought that the other party was not willing, he had no choice but to stay at his place. This made Wu Qingyue feel a little unhappy again. But who cares, as long as she was here it was fine. Could also be counted as living together. Wu Qingyue put aside the distracting thoughts in his mind and began to make breakfast. Outside, Lin Xiao let Wu Yueling sit next to her. Her little hand was also placed on her stomach, and she was communicating with little man. Lin Xiao was reading a biography that she found on the bookshelf in the living room. She had nothing to do here. She could only read to pass the time, or wait for Xiaodong's arrival. In the end, Xiaodong did not come, but Xiao Yunlong came. Not long after Wu Qingyue and Wu Yueling finished breakfast, Xiao Yunlong and Xiao Liqing came together. Before the two came in, Lin Xiao put the book on the table. Then she gently moved Wu Yueling's hand away and stuffed the gray rabbit into her arms. As a result, after hearing Xiao Yunlong's voice and footsteps outside the door, Wu Yueling immediately dropped the rabbit and slid down from the sofa. She turned around and hid behind the sofa. As soon as he entered the living room, he saw a small figure hiding behind the sofa. Xiao Yunlong? He turned to look at Xiao Liqing and asked, "Didn't you say Lingling's condition is a little better?" Xiao Liqing shrugged and said, "It's a little better to see me, but I don't know when I see you." "Xiao Yunlong? He's here? Let's talk on the second floor." Wu Qingyue walked out of the kitchen and greeted the two of them before turning around and going upstairs. Xiao Yunlong looked at him strangely, then glanced at the corner of the sofa where Wu Yueling was hiding. "You're not going to bring Lingling up? Just leave her alone in the living room?" Wu Qingyue smiled and said, "It's fine. She'll be fine in the living room." Xiao Yunlong and Xiao Liqing hesitated for a moment in the living room, looking uncertainly at Wu Qingyue, their expressions somewhat disapproving. However, Wu Qingyue had already gone upstairs, and Wu Yueling did not dare to come out. This was Wu Qingyue's house, and it was also Lingling's house. She was so familiar with her home, so she should be fine. In the end, the two of them looked at each other and followed him upstairs. After Lin Xiao watched the two of them go upstairs, he leaned against the back of the sofa and reached out to touch Wu Yueling. "Tell her they're up and they can come out." And when Wu Yueling really could not feel the presence of other people in the living room, she slowly crawled out. Lin Xiao looked at her amusedly. Even that rabbit was more courageous than her. She really didn't know what to say. Looking at Wu Yueling, Lin Xiao looked up at the direction of the study on the second floor. Her eyes flashed with a blank look. Just now she suddenly found that there seemed to be a strange feeling on Wu Qingyue's body, and then narrowed her eyes to stare at the energy on his body. But she couldn't see anything. The purple energy in the other party's mind was still very full, and the energy meridians of his body were also very bright and dazzling. Nothing had changed, but she didn't know why she felt that the other party's aura seemed to be a little weaker. Could it be that she was wrong? Lin Xiao thought blankly. 2 hours later, Xiao Yunlong and Xiao Liqing came down and hid again when they saw Wu Yueling. The two of them walked out helplessly, not daring to tease Lingling. This child, she was originally a little better. But now she has become like this. When will she be like a normal child? Xiao Yunlong's somewhat worried voice came from far away outside the door. Maybe it still needs time. This kind of situation can only be cured by time and environment. Xiao Liqing's voice was soft and gradually faded away. After Wu Qingwei came down, he sat down on the sofa and helplessly said to Lingling, "Lingling, come here." Wu Yueling's action for Xiao Yunlong and Xiao Liqing was very rude and uneducated. But thinking of Wu Yueling's mental illness, the adults did not take it to heart. "Next time don't hide. Have you forgotten that Godfather and Uncle Xiao are so good to you? You will make them sad if you hide from them. Lingling can't make the people who love you sad, do you understand?" Seeing Wu Yueling slowly come out again, Wu Qingwei said softly to her. There was no intention of coaxing her in his tone, nor was there any reprimand. It was just plain as usual. Wu Yueling sat next to Lin Xiao, slightly bowed her head and did not look at him. But her fingers were slowly twisting the corner of the hem of her clothes. Wu Qingwei looked at her like this and did not say anything. Instead he said to Lin Xiao, who had picked up the book again, "Haiqing will no longer cooperate with Huaxiao from now on. Huaxiao's plan this time failed, and they may continue to target Haiqing in the future." Hearing this, Lin Xiao put down the book. Then he picked up a pen and a notebook and wrote, "If you refuse to cooperate, they will only take tough measures. I believe it will not be long before Huaxiao's artillery fire will be directed at Haiqing." Wu Qingwei looked and said, "That's inevitable. Huaxiao has always been dominant. Now Haiqing's resistance makes them feel that their position is threatened, which will cause them to lose a lot of resources. Xikong Qin is not stupid. As long as he is still here, he will find a way to suppress Haiqing." The so-called loss of resources referred to the loss of talent. Originally, Haiqing had already poached a little bit of talent from Huaxiao. If they watched Haiqing become uncontrollably strong, then they might not be able to keep the talents in their base. After all, there were many people in Huaxia and resources were limited. If they went to Haiqing, then there would be no competition from the same industry, and there would be more resources. Moreover, Haiqing's environment was better than Huaxia's. Outside the base, there would not be so much wind and sand blowing on their faces, and they would not be frozen like popsicles in winter. Lin Xiao looked at him, then narrowed his eyes and carefully sized him up. After realizing that he really could not see anything, he did not care anymore. He only said, "Huaxiao is so far away from Haiqing, it will not be easy to hide if they want to make a big move. But I think you should pay attention to the other party's weapons, otherwise you will still be at a disadvantage." If Haiqing was at a disadvantage, the base would also be affected. Chapter 940. At night, Lin Xiao was waiting in the living room. Xie Dong brought some documents that needed to be processed and appeared in Wu Qingyue's living room. He didn't say anything and just placed the documents and a bag of zombie cores on the coffee table. Then he quietly stood to the side and silently became a background board. Lin Xiao put down the book in his hand and put away the bag containing the corpse cores and energy cores. She had asked Chiu Lily to send a few stronger level 1 kings to collect them. Since it wasn't convenient for her to go out, she left these matters to Chiu Lily. She then took the documents from Xie Dong and started reading. The construction progress of the second base, the identity and number of new survivors, the rats at the zoo and the underground creatures, etc. Lin Xiao came to a halt after reading the detailed information of the underground creatures. She squinted her eyes and looked at the documents carefully. The first thing that caught her attention was the attributes and combat strength of these creatures. There were more than 20 level 7 mutated beasts with no difference in level and number, the ability to control their berserk state, the ability to kill those above their level, the habit of coming out at night, and the liking of living things. All these factors clearly told Lin Xiao that this was a huge threat. A group of more than 20 level 7 mutated beasts? What kind of combat strength was this? Moreover, they could go berserk, and when they did, their strength would increase by another level. What would happen if these things launched a night attack on a human security base? Lin Xiao couldn't help but frown and think, because the location of these creatures was too close to the base. Let's not talk about the fact that they didn't spread out or move, but these creatures like to eat living things. This meant that after they finished eating, they would probably go further to hunt. Lin Xiao asked, "Did Lin Feng say that there were other caves?" "He said that he didn't find a second cave." Xie Dong immediately showed his presence. Lin Xiao frowned and thought for a while, then wrote some words on a piece of paper and said, "Let Lin Feng strengthen the search for the second cave. Then send an order to the entire base to collect information about these creatures from the corpse hunters." She had a feeling that these creatures definitely wouldn't stay in one place. It had only been a few days and they had already killed all the living things near the cave. Their aggressiveness was too strong. Moreover, their nest was underground and the surface was only their hunting ground. Since there was no one here, there would definitely be someone else. After writing the release order on the paper, he signed it. Lin Xiao tore down the order and passed it to him. Xie Dong stepped forward to take it and answered, "Yes." Lin Xiao continued to stare at the document. The lights in the living room were still off. Even in the dark, Lin Xiao could still see the words on the paper. Suddenly she had a flash of inspiration. She thought of the huge swarm of rats. Even the mutated cats couldn't shake the giant rat swarm. If he could lure this group of creatures over, that would be great. However, the distance between the two sides was 100 kilometers. It was too far. Moreover, this group of things lived underground, so they had a strong sense of belonging to the underground. After some thought, Lin Xiao tossed the idea aside. Not to mention the sheer number of these creatures, they were living underground. He was too unfamiliar with these things, so he really didn't know how to lead them over. These things only came out at night and it was too dangerous at night. Xie Dong continued to be the background. Lin Xiao couldn't think of any ideas for the time being. Moreover, she still didn't understand the situation of these underground creatures, so she could only put it aside. She gave the documents she finished yesterday to Xie Dong and told him to take them back to the base. Lin Xiao threw the documents in her hands into a small space in her space. The few small spaces she had were all used by her to store junk. The big space outside the small space was used for the zombies and Lu Tiany's vegetable field. There were also mutated beasts running around on the other side of the lake. It was just that the vegetables that Lu Tiany picked recently hadn't been transported back to the base. They couldn't be kept fresh in her space unless they were soaked in the lake water. But every day there would be vegetables and beans that were picked, and they couldn't be air-dried. They could only let Lin Xiao take them out and dispose of them. But such a small action wouldn't let Xie Dong take them back to the base, so Lin Xiao directly gave them to Wu Qingyue as a return gift for living here these days. Therefore, Xiao Liqing would take a large batch of vegetables from Wu Qingyue every 2 or 3 days. And Wu Qingyue's fridge was also stuffed to the brim. After staying here for a month, Lin Xiao finally discovered that Wu Qingyue's energy aura was really getting weaker. And Wu Qingyue also discovered it because every morning when he woke up, he would have a lazy feeling that he didn't want to move. This feeling was getting stronger and stronger. He would never laze in bed. Recently, his heart had been very confused by the fact that he wanted to laze in bed every morning. But he didn't know why, but recently he didn't use his ability, and he didn't absorb the zombie cores. It couldn't be because of this, right? Wu Qingyue, who was at a loss, checked himself from head to toe, but still didn't discover anything. One morning, Lin Xiao suddenly touched Little Man and asked, "Little Man, you said you wanted me to be tied to him to absorb his energy. I saw that his energy was indeed getting weaker. But how did you do it?" She didn't see Little Man absorb the other party's energy at all. Little Man said, "When he was sleeping, Mama, you only care about absorbing energy every night. It's very normal that you didn't discover it." Lin Xiao finally understood. So it was like that, if she was absorbing energy at night, then she really wouldn't have noticed it. Although Lin Xiao had been absorbing zombie cores for a month, Little Man had absorbed 30% of the energy every time. But Lin Xiao's zombie core was still recovering abnormally slowly. Until now, it hadn't even recovered to 10% of its previous energy. But for Lin Xiao this was already very good. Because recently the zombie cores she had absorbed were relatively low, ranging from level 3 to level 5, and level 6 was relatively rare. Unless Qiu Lily personally took action, those level 1st kings wouldn't be able to get level 7 zombie cores, mutant beast cores or energy cores of mutant plants. Lin Xiao leaned against the kitchen door, crossed her arms and gently swept her chin with her fingers. Her eyes were calm as she watched Wu Qingyue's figure. She had been living here for a month and she didn't know why she gradually liked watching Wu Qingyue cook, but she didn't know why. So every time, she would quietly lean against the side and watch his natural and serious movements. These days, besides talking to her, Wu Qingyue didn't do anything else to her. But Wu Yueling was slowly no longer afraid of Xiao Yunlong and Xiao Liqing, but she still didn't let them get close to her. Chapter 941. It had already been a month. Lin Feng and the other corpse hunters had discovered 2 more holes in the underground cave. Lin Xiao's guess was right. After these things killed all the zombies in one place, they would immediately move to the next place. Up until now, they had found 2 caves in the northwest and southeast, and they were both more than 10 kilometers away from the first cave. Moreover, these holes were all newly dug. If this went on, who knew when a hole like this would appear in all life base? Lin Xiao had spent a lot of resources to collect information about these creatures. A month had passed. 3 zombie hunting teams had already gone in. Including the army that Lin Feng had brought to the base, hundreds of people had already gone in, and none of them had come out. Moreover, even when Lin Xiao sent Elmar to bring other zombies down, they were still defeated. Although these things wouldn't eat zombies, they would still react fiercely to zombies invading their territory. Fortunately, the zombies' bodies were tough. As long as their heads were not injured, they would not die. However, even so, Elmar had brought 2 level 1 kings and 5 level 5 leaders, and they all came out with injuries. When Nanjing, who was a level 1 king, came out, she had lost an arm. Although the injured zombies would not die, their injuries would not automatically heal unless they ate human flesh and drank human blood. Therefore, the zombies in the base did not eat humans, and the injuries on their bodies remained the same. This made Lin Xiao feel helpless. If he could release Mo Yan's female zombie assistant from the space, she would be able to help heal them. However, she could not enter the space right now. She could only use the lake water to suppress the zombies' injuries. Although the lake water could heal human injuries, it could not heal the zombies' injuries. Fortunately, it could still suppress them a little. If they wanted to heal, they would have to enter the bottom of Lin Xiao's lake and let her control the lake's energy to heal them. These creatures were very strange. Even if Elmar went invisible, they would still be able to sense her presence. This was because they did not use their eyes to see but other senses to see. Fortunately, Elmar's level was high, and her reaction speed was very fast. Therefore, she was able to safely escape from the cave. However, it was also very dangerous because she was chased by 3 level 7 gorillas. Fortunately, these things seemed to be afraid of sunlight. After Elmar and the others came out of the cave, they stopped chasing. Then they went in with their fluorescent lights and the things retreated immediately. Not only were they afraid of the sun, but they were also afraid of strong light. However, the underground gorillas were very intelligent. They knew that they had to get rid of the lights first before attacking. However, at this time Elmar and the others had already explored most of the underground caves. He discovered that in addition to the many tunnels on the surface, there were many large pits below, and the pits were filled with the bones of animals. It was gnawed clean, leaving only white bones behind. With so many fresh animal bones thrown in, the smell would definitely not be good. Moreover, there were many cave passages further down. Before Elmar and the others could go down, they were chased out by the level 6 and level 7 underground gorillas in a berserk state. Although zombies were stronger than humans, they were still able to kill some low-level zombies. Looking at the report from the Universal Base, Xiao Lin felt that the situation was getting more and more serious. Moreover, the base had not been able to kill a single one of these creatures in the past month. Yes, he couldn't be killed. These creatures were immune to the ability attacks of the ability users. There was no effect on their bodies. Burning them was useless, freezing them was useless, and the wind blades only left white marks on their bodies. Poison was even more useless. These creatures were full of viruses, and being scratched by them would cause the virus to infect them. Lin Feng, Yuan Tianqing, and Elmar were already having a headache. They could only report the situation to Xiao Lin and wait for him to think of a solution. Xiao Lin took the report and sighed deeply, expressing his helplessness. In the end, they could only let Elmar lead a few groups of zombies with bombs to blow up the 3 tunnels and the underground passages, temporarily blocking the exit of these creatures. However, the underground was the territory of these things. Let's not talk about the number of tunnels they had created. Even if they blocked the tunnels, it wouldn't be able to block them for long. Xiao Lin wanted to personally investigate the situation, so she could only ask Wu Qingyue to go with her. Wu Qingyue received the report from Xiao Lin. When he saw the resistance and attack power of these creatures, he was silent. He frowned and carefully looked at the report before agreeing to Xiao Lin's request. What are these things? Where did they come from? He asked in confusion. Xiao Lin wrote on the paper, They are afraid of sunlight, so they should have been living underground. But for them to grow so big and have such strong attack power, the surface might not be their original territory. Wu Qingyue saw her words and immediately understood. You're saying, these are creatures from the core? Xiao Lin nodded, but then remembered that he couldn't see. Nodding his pen, he wrote, the core world has always existed, and Almar said that the tunnels we see now are all newly excavated. She meant that these things shouldn't have appeared on the surface. Wu Qingyue understood what she meant, but his frown deepened. They came up from the core? Why didn't they stay where they were, but appeared on the surface? But the most important thing now wasn't to figure out why these things came out from the core, but to figure out where their weaknesses were. From the situation this month, these things didn't come with good intentions. If they continued like this, in a year or two, it might not be just the base that would be in danger. Ocean City wouldn't be able to go anywhere since it wasn't too far away. They're afraid of sunlight, but fire doesn't affect them. What are they afraid of? Wu Qingyue pondered. Xiao Lin thought for a bit, then wrote, maybe they're afraid of ultraviolet light or some other light source. Wu Qingyue nodded. That might be the case. Then let's lure these things out and see what happens when sunlight shines on them. Xiao Lin wrote, I've had them try. These things are very smart and cunning. They won't come out no matter what. Wu Qingyue thought for a bit, then said, then we'll have to go and see the situation ourselves. We'll be able to deal with these things. Xiao Lin narrowed her eyes and looked at his energy source, which was a bit dimmer than before. But it was only a bit and didn't seem to affect Wu Qingyue at all. Chapter 942. There was nothing going on in Haiqing recently, so Wu Qingyue didn't mind going with Lin Xiao to check out these creatures. So they left. That night Wu Qingyue asked Xiao Liqing to prepare. After arranging the work for Xiao Yunlong and Zhou Shihui, he took Wu Yueling and slipped back to the universal base. Xiao Yunlong. Which is your base? Zhou Shihui. Diske, can't you hurry up and marry her? Xiao Liqing was already used to it. He rolled his eyes and looked at the sky. He silently followed his leader to the universal base. But Xiao Liqing also knew the importance of the information about the underground creatures from the universal base. This was much more terrible than the previous group of rats. What the hell is this thing? It can't be burned by fire or frozen to death. Its skin is harder than a tortoise shell. Can this thing be killed? He sat in the passenger seat and couldn't help asking curiously to the back seat. Wu Qingyue sat on the side and Wu Yueling was playing in the middle. Wu Qingyue's right hand was on the window, supporting the side of his face. Hearing the voice in front, he turned his head and said, I don't know, we are going to check now. Xiao Liqing frowned slightly. These things spread a bit fast and they are active at night. Will they be directly burned to death by the sun? Otherwise, why don't they dare to come out? I don't know if they will die from the sun, but there will definitely be some impact. It seems that it is not easy to let them come out to bask in the sun. Wu Qingyue said and glanced above his head. Xiao Liqing's voice sank. But soon he asked strangely, Boss, you have been looking for Xiedong recently, what are you plotting? Even I don't know? Since the last time Wu Qingyue asked him to send someone to find Xiedong, Xiedong often quietly appeared in his small building. Xiao Liqing, who thought that he knew everything about his leader, was very curious about this. Boss and the female zombie leader of the universal base had made progress? Wu Qingyue smiled lightly. Why? Are you curious? He also knew what Xiao Liqing was thinking, but the female zombie situation was not suitable for too many people to know. Xiao Liqing turned his head to look out the window, then turned back and said, I feel that you have made some progress? You haven't asked me to keep an eye on the base, but Xiedong keeps coming over. I'm not the only one saying this, but I'm sure others would think the same. Wu Qingyue glanced at the roof of the car again, then looked at the front seat and said, If I can remember what happened during the period of my madness, then perhaps there will be real progress. Because after that time, the female zombie's attitude towards him had a clear change. But he just couldn't remember what had happened. Other than the female zombie, no one else knew what had happened. When everyone saw the change in her lips, they could guess what was going on. But he didn't have any memories. This made him feel as if he was missing something. And the female zombie looked like she was trying to escape, so he didn't dare to force her too much. If he pushed the other party even further away, then the gains would not make up for the losses. Although she had been by his side for the past few days, her heart had never been close to him. However, at the thought of Lin Xiao's tummy condition, Wu Qingyue revealed a deep smile on his face. Lin Xiao, who was sitting on the roof of the car, calmly listened to their conversation and didn't have any reaction. It was just that in her mind, The image she saw the most in the past month was this man's serious look in the kitchen. And now, it was also these images that were flashing in her mind. The car quickly drove into the base. Yuan Qianxing and the others were already waiting in front of the government building. Seeing Wu Qingyue come down, Yuan Qianxing and the others looked left and right, but they didn't see their female leader. Seeing Wu Qingyue carrying Wu Yueling down, Yuan Qianxing and Lin Feng looked at each other and couldn't help but ask, "Excuse me, our leader?" He didn't ask directly, but as long as he mentioned their female leader, Wu Qingyue should understand. Wu Qingyue carried Wu Yueling. Because there were many people around, Wu Yueling had already curled up into a ball and hugged Wu Qingyue's neck. He smiled and said to Yuan Qianxing and the others, "Didn't she come back?" Yuan Qianxing and Lin Feng looked at each other in confusion. Just then, Xiaodong suddenly appeared and said to the two of them expressionlessly, "Deputy leaders, leader invites leader Wu to the living room for a chat." Yuan Qianxing and Lin Feng were stunned. They looked at him blankly and asked, "Is leader back?" Xiaodong nodded and didn't say anything. However, he had already expressed his intention. Yuan Qianxing and Lin Feng immediately turned around and led Wu Qingyue in. Just as Wu Qingyue's car was about to reach the government building, Lin Xiao had already leaped down from the car. In the past month, apart from Wu Qingyue's energy being a little abnormal, Lin Xiao's energy had also returned a little. Moreover, apart from these 2 points, the distance between the two of them had widened. At the start, they were at most 28 meters apart. Now, Lin Xiao could walk to 100 meters away from Wu Qingyue. Meanwhile, Lin Xiao's belly was like a balloon that was being blown up. Even if she didn't turn invisible, she couldn't appear in front of everyone. Lin Xiao was sitting on the main seat in the living room. She touched her belly, which was 6 to 7 months pregnant like a normal pregnant woman. She didn't understand why this child had grown so fast in the past month. She had been growing so slowly before. She thought she would have to wait another 7 to 8 months before she was born. In the end, after staying with Wu Qingyue for a month, she started to brag. Although Lin Xiao's movements were still nimble, the weight on her belly couldn't be ignored. At least she dared to jump down from the roof of the car. However, she didn't dare to jump down from the roof of a building that was tens of stories high. Little Man had also entered hibernation not long ago. So, it was Wu Qingyue's energy that made her grow so fast? Wasn't the difference too big? She had absorbed energy in her body for 8 to 9 months before she had grown a little. However, after absorbing Wu Qingyue's energy for a month, she felt like she was flying. This made Lin Xiao a little unhappy. However, when she thought about how Little Man would soon be born from her body, Lin Xiao's displeasure disappeared. Anyway, no matter what, as long as she could give birth to her safely and healthily, everything would be fine. She thought about how Wu Qingyue had been touching her belly recently and how his face was shining with anticipation and happiness. It made Lin Xiao feel a little weird. She didn't know when the two of them would be untied. Could it be that she had to wait for Little Man to be born again? Lin Xiao thought worriedly. Fortunately, the distance between the two of them was now more than 100 meters. Chapter 943. After Lin Xiao sat for 2 minutes, Yuan Qianxing walked in with the others. He invited Wu Qingyue to sit in the guest seat. Yuan Qianxing and Lin Feng naturally wouldn't sit in the main seat. They sat in the secondary seats, leaving the main seat for Lin Xiao, who hadn't appeared yet. What they didn't know was that Lin Xiao was already sitting there. Wu Qingyue glanced at the empty main seat with an indecipherable look in his eyes. But no one else saw it. Yuan Qianxing and Lin Feng had thought that Lin Xiao was already waiting in the guest room. They didn't expect to see her when they came in. It was strange. At this moment, Xiaodong walked up to him and whispered something into his ear. Yuan Qianxing's eyes flashed with understanding. He said to Wu Qingyue, "Looks like our leader can't come out to receive you. You don't mind, right?" Wu Qingyue had a faint smile on his face. He wasn't surprised. Of course not. Yuan Qianxing took out some information and told him about the gorillas. Lin Xiao sat there quietly and listened. Apart from Wu Qingyue and Xiaodong, no one else could sense her presence. These things are invincible. They're immune to all poisons. Their abilities are useless. Even the machine guns are useless. Bombs have some effect but only a little. They can't kill them. Lin Feng's face turned serious when he talked about the underground creatures. Yuan Qianxing said, "They're afraid of sunlight. We've thought of many ways to lure them into the sunlight, but they're very cunning. They seem to be able to guess our intentions. During the day they hide in very deep caves. We've sent people to capture some mutated beasts to lure them, but they couldn't escape in time. It's useless to leave them outside the cave. Other than this area, are there any other places with these creatures? Wu Qingyue asked. Lin Feng and the others shook their heads. Not yet. Wu Qingyue nodded. Got it. Get ready. We'll go to the nearest cave tonight. If they weren't willing to come out during the day, they'd do it at night. He wanted to see if these things were afraid of lightning. At night? Isn't that too dangerous? Yuan Tianqing asked hesitantly. Wu Qingyue asked, have we only seen the highest level 7 so far? Lin Feng nodded. Wu Qingyue thought for a moment and said, it's all right. I won't force it. Maybe I can catch a lower level 1 to study. Lin Feng and Yuan Tianqing looked at each other. They had thought of catching one. However, it wasn't that easy to move. He couldn't catch it at all. It was too risky to catch them at night. If he went to catch them during the day, they would be hiding underground. After the discussion, Wu Qingyue brought Wu Yueling to the medical department to find Lin Hao. She looks much better. Lin Hao first noticed Wu Yueling in Wu Qingyue's arms. Seeing that she was just quietly hugging Wu Qingyue's neck and shrinking in his arms, he opened his mouth and said. Wu Qingyue sighed and said, really? But she's still afraid of people and doesn't like crowded places. She doesn't dare to leave me in an unfamiliar place. Therefore, when he was talking to Lin Feng and the others in the living room, he felt that the others were looking at him strangely, even though everyone hid it well. It's good enough that she didn't flare up. Don't ask for too much, Lin Hao immediately said to him in annoyance. This kind of mental illness required a long time to cure. It wasn't something that could be cured in a month. Just like Lin Hao said, it was good enough that she could quietly hug Wu Qingyue. If the situation worsened, she might become agitated. Wu Qingyue sighed. I know. Lin Hao sat in front of his desk and asked, did you come here just to see your daughter's condition? She doesn't need to look for me. You have a doctor in the base, right? Wu Qingyue immediately shook his head. I'm not looking for you. It's her. Lin Hao turned to look at him blankly. Her? Which her? When he finished speaking, he saw Wu Qingyue staring at his desk. Lin Hao looked back at his desk in confusion. There didn't seem to be anything wrong. He turned to look at Wu Qingyue again. Just as he was about to ask, he suddenly heard a few clicking sounds coming from his desk. Lin Hao turned around strangely, and then looked at him blankly as one of the hands on the table floated up, and then began to write on the draft notebook on the table by itself. Lin Hao. Was this haunted? Did he come to the wrong set? Wasn't this the sci-fi era? Soon he saw a sentence written on the paper. It's me. I can recognize a person just by looking at the words. And familiar handwriting. Damn. This was his sister's handwriting? So why are you invisible now? Are you trying to play with me? Lin Hao's face had already become somewhat dissatisfied. He stared at the pen that was moving around and said, Lin Xiao wrote, do you think I want to? I don't want to either, okay? It suddenly became like this. Okay, stop talking nonsense. Hurry up and help me check the child's condition. You definitely can't imagine what the child looks like now. Lin Hao looked at her words strangely. How can I check if you're invisible now? Duh. Lin Xiao put the pen on the desk and walked to Lin Hao's side. She grabbed his hand and gently pressed it to her abdomen. Lin Hao touched it and his eyes suddenly widened. Damn. You've grown so big. Then he touched Lin Xiao's abdomen with both hands. Although in the eyes of outsiders, Lin Hao looked like he was touching the air. But in Wu Qingyue's eyes, he knew what was going on. He tried hard to suppress the sour bubbles in his heart and silently said, He's a doctor. He's a doctor. He's a doctor. Lin Hao touched his sister's round belly and said in disbelief, What did you eat? She suddenly bragged so much. It's only been a month, what's going on? Lin Xiao saw that he was almost done touching, so she slapped her brother's hand away and walked back to the desk to write. Little Man said that my energy was no longer enough for her to absorb, so she started to absorb her father's energy. This is the reason why I stayed by Wu Qingyue's side for the past month. After Lin Hao read it, he subconsciously turned his head to look at Wu Qingyue. He found that Wu Qingyue seemed to be fine. Receiving his gaze, Wu Qingyue raised his eyebrows and looked back at him. Lin Hao looked at him a few times and asked, Are you okay? That little freak sucked her mother until she became invisible. Why did she seem to have no problem sucking Wu Qingyue? Could it be that the time was too short? But the child had already grown so big. It seemed that he had absorbed a lot of energy. Wu Qingyue said to him in confusion, What should I have a problem with? Other than wanting to stay in bed after waking up recently, he really didn't seem to have any problems. Chapter 944. Lin Xiao walked to Lin Hao's side and took him by the collar to the consulting room next to the office. Then she sat on the examination equipment. Feeling Lin Xiao sitting on the equipment, Lin Hao didn't say anything. He immediately sat next to Lin Xiao and began to examine her. But he groped Lin Xiao, who couldn't be seen, and his behavior was very strange. After thinking about it, he took a piece of cloth from the side and covered Lin Xiao's body. He cut a hole in the middle of the cloth. Lin Xiao consciously scooped up the fabric of her clothes under the cloth and exposed her belly in the hole of the cloth. Lin Hao began to operate it. Wu Qingyue didn't follow. He just sat in the office and waited. After a long time, Lin Xiao sat up from the small bed. She pulled up her clothes and took off the cloth. Then she stood up, walked behind Lin Hao and put her hand on his shoulder. Her eyes were fixed on the baby shown on the screen. A big-headed baby curled up into a ball. Her hands were clenched in front of her chest. Her short legs were curled up and her eyes were closed. She was 3 or 4 times bigger than last time. She was really growing very fast. Lin Hao pointed to the baby and said, "According to this size, she's about 7 months and 2 weeks old. But with this girl's current growth rate, I can't guarantee what she will look like in another month." He meant that this child couldn't be calculated according to the time of a normal person. Moreover, she had grown so fast in this month. At this rate, maybe in another month she would have grown to the point of being born. Lin Xiao took her hand off his shoulder. She agreed with Lin Hao's words. Lin Hao talked about the child's health. "She's growing very well, but she still doesn't have a heartbeat. Will she be born like you or Xie Dong, looking like a human but without human functions?" Lin Xiao frowned slightly and put her hand on Lin Hao's shoulder again. She asked directly in her heart, "Will it affect her body?" Lin Hao shook his head. "From the data of the instrument, it's like a, stillbirth. Whether it will affect her or not, we can only know when she's born. But it seems that she's growing normally, except that she's growing a little faster these days. Maybe it's because she's too nutritious. But Wu Qingyue doesn't seem to have any problems. Why do you have so many questions?" After saying that, he turned his head to look at Lin Xiao's position, but when he turned his head, he only saw a mass of air. Suddenly he realized something. "Wait a minute, you were the one who was talking just now? But I don't think I heard anything." Lin Xiao pressed on his shoulder. "I can communicate with you when I touch your body." When Lin Hao heard the voice in his head again, his eyes were a little surprised and he became silent. How magical. Lin Xiao heard him say that Wu Qingyue's energy was absorbed without any problems, but when it came to her, all kinds of unexpected situations occurred. He also seemed very depressed. However, when he thought about how Wu Qingyue's energy aura was weakening, he felt that there was still a problem. The gloominess in his heart disappeared a little. She continued, "Wu Qingyue isn't completely fine either. His energy aura has become much weaker." Lin Hao said blankly, "Oh, is that so? Why didn't I feel it?" Lin Xiao said, "Because you're not a zombie and your ability level is lower than his." Lin Hao could smell a hint of disdain in her tone, and he couldn't help but say, "I'm busy treating people all day and I often work overtime at night. You're blaming me for your low level." Lin Xiao shrugged. After knowing about little man's situation, he didn't plan to stay here any longer. He turned around and opened the door to leave. Lin Hao printed out the data of the inspection and then followed Lin Xiao out. He returned to the office next door and took out a document bag. "When can the child be born?" Seeing Lin Hao come over, Wu Qingyue immediately asked anxiously. His tone was very concerned about this matter. Lin Hao glanced at him and thought about it. After all, he was the child's father, so he had the right to know. He then looked at Lin Xiao, who was standing in the corner of the room. She didn't seem to have any intention of stopping him, so he answered Wu Qingyue's question. "I don't know when it will be born because the child's growth rate is not stable. You know it too. With the current speed, it might not even take a month. But it's hard to say because I don't know if the child will stop this state tomorrow." For Lin Xiao's first case, there was no data to refer to, so Lin Hao couldn't be sure. Hearing this, Wu Qingyue sighed in disappointment. But the gentle smile on his face didn't change. He smiled, looked at the empty space around him and said, "Tonight, you have to hide far away from that place. Even if those things aren't interested in zombies, you still have to be careful." Lin Xiao was sitting in front of Lin Hao's table, and when she heard this, she immediately picked up a pen and wrote, "I'm not stupid." She's not stupid, and she still dares to take the risk to get close in her current state. Wu Qingyue just smiled and didn't say anything. Lin Hao spread his hands and said, "Anyway, from the looks of it, the child is temporarily fine. Okay, you guys can go." Saying this, he started to chase them away. However, he suddenly added, "Leader Wu is right. I can't do anything about you running around in this state, but remember not to do anything stupid on your own. If that happens, I won't care." Lin Hao still cared, but thinking about Lin Xiao's mission this time with Wu Qingyue. With Wu Qingyue there, he probably wouldn't let anything happen to her, so Lin Hao didn't object. That afternoon, before the sky turned dark, Lin Xiao brought Elmar and a group of level 1 kings. She and Wu Qingyue left the base and headed towards the underground cave that was closest to the base. This cave was about 60 to 70 kilometers away from the base, and it was in the southeast direction. Lin Xiao and the others arrived before the sky turned dark. Because they knew that these things liked to hunt living things, other than Wu Qingyue and Xiao Liqing, the rest were all zombies on Lin Xiao's side. Standing on the roof of a building 200 meters away from the hole that had been blown up, Lin Xiao narrowed his eyes and sized up the vicinity of the hole. Then he sniffed the air around him. Elmar stood beside her, her face was a bit depressed and said with a bit of disgust, "These things smell really bad." Lin Xiao had already smelled a faint fishy smell in the air, so she agreed with Elmar's words and nodded, "It does smell a bit bad." Although the smell was already a bit faint, this kind of smell was like the smell of rotten soil, and there was also a kind of bloody smell mixed in, which Lin Xiao smelled was very pungent. Hearing Elmar's words, Xiao Liqing and Wu Qingyue both sniffed the air, but they didn't smell anything. Chapter 945. Of course, Wu Qingyue and Xiao Qiao couldn't smell anything. They weren't zombies or mutant beasts. Their noses weren't that sensitive. 200 meters in front of them, the ground had collapsed. It was a scene of devastation. Wu Qingyue asked, "It's been 10 days since the explosion. Why haven't these things come out? Could it be that they have already dug another hole?" Elmar shook her head. "Judging from the flow of the smell in the air, this is the place where the smell is the strongest. It's nowhere else. There aren't any other places unless they run far away and we can't smell them." Lin Xiao stood next to them and sniffed a few times, then nodded slightly. Indeed, this place had the strongest smell. The sky was slowly darkening and the temperature was dropping. But Lin Xiao and the other zombies didn't feel anything. Wu Qingyue and Xiao Liqing were both high-level metahumans, so they weren't afraid of the temperature. Lin Xiao sensed the surrounding auras. Other than the zombies, there weren't any other creatures. There were a lot of mutant plants, but they weren't very strong. At most, they were level 5. She pointed in the direction of the level 5 mutant plant and said to Pit King behind her, "Go and get the energy core of that mutant plant." Pit King immediately replied, "Yes." Then she quickly turned around and disappeared in front of the zombies. Lin Xiao pointed in the direction of the other two and sent out the level 1 kings. Those who wanted to get the energy core went to get it, and those who wanted to kill the zombies went to kill the zombies. Only Elmar stayed by her side. Wu Qingyue and Xiao Liqing couldn't hear Lin Xiao's voice, but seeing the zombies that followed them back, they knew that Lin Xiao had given them a mission. They didn't care. Although the mutant beasts in the area had been killed, there were still many mutant plants and zombies. There were 4 or 5 level 5 leaders, but there weren't any level 6 kings. Wu Qingyue put on the night vision binoculars and continued to observe the surroundings while sensing the aura fluctuations. The hole seemed to have been blocked. They didn't know if the creatures had dug another way out or were hiding. Just when Lin Xiao thought that they might have to search for a few days to find these things, she and Elmar suddenly turned their heads to look behind them at the same time. Elmar said in surprise, "Ha!" She only made a sound and didn't say anything. Wu Qingyue and Xiao Liqing both turned to look at her, only to see her turning her head to look back, so the two men also turned their heads to look back. However, they didn't see anything. But they could vaguely feel that there was something over there. The two of them thought that they had discovered the underground creatures. Before they could do anything, a head slowly rose from the edge of the rooftop platform, revealing a pair of dark eyes that stared straight at them in the dark. Then it slowly shrank back down. Wu Qingyue was a bit disappointed because it wasn't an underground creature. They were familiar with a level 5 zombie, but it was a level 5. Xiao Xiaoan saw it. However, he was speechless when he saw the zombie's head slowly rising up and then slowly retracting back down. Liqing the Qiu Yi and He Xiao Xiao and Chengless Hua Yun. Yun didn't feel surprised. Surprised Yun and was. Yun is He Yun's spirit. Yun, this level 5 zombie didn't even react to their pressure, and even climbed up to look at them. His action made them speechless. "You're a zombie, not a cat. Why do you have such a curious look in your eyes?" Xiao Liqing looked at the newly appeared zombie and inexplicably felt that if it had 2 ears on its head, it would definitely be pressed flat. Just when everyone had a subtle expression on their faces, the level 5 zombie slowly rose up again. Seeing that the three were staring at it, it wasn't afraid. This time his whole face was exposed and he even stuck out his tongue to lick his lips. Then it looked at Xiao Liqing. Well, this food had the weakest aura. He should be able to beat it. A level 5 zombie could beat a level 6 metahuman. Xiao Liqing didn't feel good after being stared at like that. Seeing how the opponent ignored Wu Qingyue Elmar, who was a second-rank king, and Lin Xiao, who was invisible, then he slowly climbed up, but when he flipped over the edge he sprained his ankle. Puff Xiao Liqing, Wu Qingyue, and Elmar's expressions were like this. Lin Xiao stared at the zombie with interest, sizing it up. There was no smell of blood or hostility on this guy. It was very clean. For some reason his actions gave him a silly feeling. He was already level 5, yet he could fall over a wall. There was no one else like him. The level 5 zombie quickly stood up from the ground, then looked left and right as if it had thought of something. Then with a whoosh it flashed into the door of the stairwell next to it. Then half a head popped out from behind the door and continued to stare at Xiao Liqing. Everyone, they didn't know what expression to use to express their feelings. Elmar covered her face and murmured, "I've never seen such a stupid zombie. How do you think it evolved to level 5? His tone was clearly saying, "This guy is definitely not of the same kind as me." Lin Xiao looked in the direction of the half-head that retracted back into the door frame. He thought that although the zombie had fallen down after climbing up, its clothes seemed to be quite clean, although it looked a bit old. She was also curious how this guy evolved. There was no smell of blood or hostility, so it shouldn't be eating people or zombies. His face was still intact and he looked very young. It was just a bit skinny and its eye sockets were black and sunken, making it look very big. The short hair on its head looked like it was gnawed by a dog. Although it looked ugly, it gave off a refreshing feeling. Wu Qingyue looked at it for a while and said, "What does it want?" Xiao Liqing said, "It probably wants to eat me." He was almost drooling from staring at it. Lin Xiao's expression became subtle. If she didn't feel that this zombie didn't have any blood or hostility, she might have thought so too. But this zombie was a bit far away from her, so she couldn't feel his thoughts. Thinking about this, Lin Xiao silently moved towards the stairwell. Then he heard a voice coming from the dark door. "Delicious. So fragrant. Delicious. Delicious. Can't eat it." Lin Xiao didn't know what expression to put on her face. Felt weird. What should she do if she couldn't kill it? Chapter 946. Just when Lin Xiao was thinking that this zombie was too clean and he didn't want to kill it, the zombie suddenly rushed out from the door of the stairwell and rushed towards Xiao Liqing at a very fast speed. In the blink of an eye, the zombie had already flashed in front of them, and then when it was 2 meters away from Xiao Liqing, bang, it fell again. Everyone looked at the zombie that fell on the floor with a subtle expression. It seems to run quite fast, but why did it fall? I don't understand. Xiao Liqing said speechlessly. Although this zombie's target was clearly rushing towards him, Xiao Liqing didn't feel any danger at all. He was still leisurely talking about the zombie. Because he couldn't feel any killing intent or threat, Xiao Liqing really couldn't be on guard against it at all. Lin Xiao walked over from behind the zombie on the floor, reached out his hand and grabbed the back collar of the zombie that had just climbed up and was about to rush towards Xiao Liqing again. Hey. The level 5 zombie waved his claws forward twice and stretched out his legs to move forward. Then he looked back with a blank face. Because he found that he was fixed in place and couldn't move. There was no one behind him, so what was grabbing him? The level 5 zombie clearly felt that something was grabbing him from the back of his collar, so he reached back with his 2 claws. Sure enough, he grabbed a claw. But when he turned his head, he couldn't see anything. The level 5 zombie looked back with a head full of question marks. At this time, Elmar curiously looked at the twisting zombie, and said with a strange expression, "How did this guy escape our detection before? We obviously didn't feel his existence before, but he suddenly ran out." Then she turned to Xiao Liqing and teased, "He seems to like you a lot. Did he have a special interest in men when he was alive?" When they heard what she said, they understood that the special interest she said might be referring to sexual orientation. But the guy in Lin Xiao's hand could feel that his heart was like this. The same kind doesn't taste good, the level is too high to eat. Only this Xiao Liqing is a bit weaker, so he should be able to beat him. Being able to fight was equivalent to being able to eat. But this guy wasn't vigilant at all. He really wasn't afraid of them being stronger than him. Why was that? Lin Xiao stared strangely at the struggling zombie in front of him. There was no bloody aura on him. As a level 5 zombie, it shouldn't be too difficult for him to eat humans. But this guy clearly didn't have any blood on him, so why did he pounce at Xiao Liqing like he was really going to bite him? Suddenly Lin Xiao let go. She wanted to see if the zombie would really pounce on Xiao Liqing. They watched as Lin Xiao suddenly loosened his grip. As a result, he twisted his body and lost his balance. With a thud, he fell in front of them for the third time. Everyone. How stupid. Xiao Liqing's first reaction was to ridicule him speechlessly. His second reaction was to remember, wow. Miss Lu, why did you let him go? He now knew that Lin Xiao was invisible around them, so he didn't make a fuss just now. By the time Xiao Liqing was done cursing, the zombie had already jumped up from the ground. It pounced at Xiao Liqing. Xiao Liqing panicked and quickly dodged to the side. Bang dash, so after Xiao Liqing dodged, the level 5 zombie fell to the ground again. Lin Xiao said to Elmar, he didn't kill or eat people. Elmar then said what she said, the leader said this zombie didn't eat people or kill people. I was wondering why his aura didn't have any bloody aura. Don't tell me he doesn't want to eat me now but just wants to play with me? Xiao Liqing looked at the zombie that jumped up from the ground again. He had already retreated a few meters. Then he said to Elmar snappily. Elmar smiled and said, I really don't know. Anyway, the leader said this zombie is very simple. He really wants to eat you. But we don't understand why it's so stupid. Haha, it's also our first time meeting this kind of zombie. It seems to be the same type as pesticide and Xiao Xiao. While Xiao Liqing was dodging, he pointed at the level 5 zombie that was chasing him and said, can I hit him? Seeing that the other 2 high-level zombies didn't want to deal with this stupid zombie, Xiao Liqing didn't expect the 2 zombies to help him. Elmar smiled and nodded, sure, as long as you don't kill him. Lin Xiao crossed his arms and leaned on the railing at the edge of the roof. He watched the man and the zombie running around on the roof while paying attention to the big hole 200 meters away. After Xiao Liqing got Elmar's approval, he immediately clenched his fists and turned them into stones. Then he suddenly stopped running and fiercely punched the level 5 zombie that was rushing towards him. Puff dash! The level 5 zombie was punched in the face and immediately cried out, ow dash, and was beaten back a few steps. Then this guy covered his face, suddenly screamed, turned around and ran. He ran. Suddenly, it turned around and ran to the edge of the rooftop. Before climbing the guardrail on the edge, it even fell down, but it quickly got up and jumped out of the building. Just like that, the level 5 zombie ran away. Xiao Liqing was a little stunned. He blankly turned his head and said to the others, I just punched him, right? He really didn't use any big moves, right? Wu Qingyue and Elmar nodded at the same time. Lin Xiao covered her mouth and couldn't stop laughing. If it wasn't for the fact that she couldn't have too much mood swings, she would have really laughed out loud. The smile on Wu Qingyue's face also became unpredictable, but it was a little hard to see clearly at night. He said, very interesting zombie, very fun. He came fast and left fast. Xiao Liqing thought, strange zombie. Elmar walked towards the place where the zombie jumped out, looked around and said, he disappeared. His aura and the feeling between the same kind disappeared without a trace. Lin Xiao heard this and also found that after the zombie jumped out of their sight, his existence and aura immediately disappeared. Wu Qingyue and Xiao Liqing also walked over and looked down. They really couldn't feel the zombie's aura. But this was also normal, even Elmar couldn't feel it, let alone them. It was just that this zombie's aura hiding ability was very strong. He disappeared just like that, and when he came, no one could feel it at all. But thinking about the way this zombie appeared and what he did just now. Chapter 947. Several people looked downstairs with a confused face. After confirming that the zombie had indeed disappeared, they felt a chill run down their spine. After confirming that the zombie had indeed disappeared, they looked at each other in confusion. Lin Xiao finally understood why there was no smell of blood on the zombie's body. If they had just set their eyes on a prey and were scared by the other party before they could even make a move, Elmar smiled and said, this kid, when he came up just now, he was clearly very brave. Why did he run away after getting beaten up? Was there something wrong with his brain? Or is he lacking a brain? Xiao Liqing looked at his fist and said, I feel that his attack has a big flaw. Is he really a zombie? And a level 5 one at that? Wu Qingyue looked through the binoculars for a while, then suddenly turned to look into the distance. Lin Xiao also saw it, there was a rotten smell coming from that direction. She patted Elmar and said, you and Xiao Liqing wait here. Let's go take a look. Elmar froze for a moment, then immediately reacted. She knew that Lin Xiao had found something strange. They appeared? Lin Xiao nodded and said, yes, you pay attention to protect Xiao Liqing. Although Xiao Liqing was already a level 6 earth psychic, these creatures were not afraid of the earth element. In the pitch-black pit, a place suddenly moved a few times. Then a part of it suddenly caved in. A layer of dust rose up and was blown away by the wind in the night. A black shadow jumped out of the hole and lay on the side of the hole, not moving. Lin Xiao's eyesight could clearly see within 500 meters, and this was at night. If it was daytime, she could stand on a high ground and see a kilometer away. She stared at the creature that crawled out of the crater 200 meters away. This creature was the vanguard. It was as big as an adult gorilla. Its forelimbs and upper body were very strong and muscular, and its skin was like a layer of mud that had been air-dried. Its back body was much smaller, and its two hind limbs were short. Its claws were sharp, and even in the night, it faintly revealed a metallic luster. It had a monkey-like face on its round head, but its mouth was wide open, revealing a mouthful of sharp teeth. There were no eyes, and there was nothing where eyes should have been. This underground gorilla lay on the ground and sniffed left and right. It even stuck its head to the ground to sense something. After a few seconds, it used its two thick forelimbs to prop itself up. Woo woo woo, the underground gorilla made a strange sound with its mouth. It didn't sound very loud to the ears, but the sound traveled very far. After it called out a few times, a few of its kind immediately jumped out of the hole. They were slightly smaller than it. When there were 7 or 8 of them, the creatures suddenly rushed towards the building where Lin Xiao and the others were. Looks like we don't have to go over. Wu Qingyue put down the binoculars and said with a faint smile. Then he suddenly raised his hand. Boom! A few bolts of lightning streaked across the sky and descended from the sky, directly striking the creatures that flashed towards them. The lightning bolts accurately struck those things. Roar! A woo! Roar! Several shrill screams rang out. Ah! The lightning attack is effective. Elmar's eyes lit up, and a trace of joy flashed across her face. Previously, no matter how they attacked with fire or water, it was useless. These creatures were not afraid of fire, and they could even swim and dive. They didn't expect Wu Qingyue's lightning attack to be able to injure these creatures. This was even more effective than the original bombs. These 7 or 8 underground gorillas moved quite quickly, and when they ran they didn't make any movements, nor did they emit any aura. If one didn't pay attention, one wouldn't be able to detect their existence. Wu Qingyue and Lin Xiao locked onto these creatures as soon as they came out of the hole. That was why they were able to silently rush to a place tens of meters away from their building and hit them with lightning. Lin Xiao silently walked towards the stairwell. She couldn't just jump down from the roof with a big belly. She was a pregnant corpse. She slowly walked down the stairs, and Wu Qingyue directly jumped down from the top of the building. He landed at the bottom of the building and didn't move. When Lin Xiao came down and walked past him, she purposely stepped on the stones to let him feel her. Then Wu Qingyue walked towards the creatures. Lin Xiao didn't walk towards those creatures, but just followed behind Wu Qingyue. She stopped about 30 meters away from the creatures that were blasted to the ground by the lightning. Wu Qingyue had blasted 5 of these underground gorillas, and the other 2 were scared and ran back into the hole. 5 of their companions were paralyzed on the ground by the lightning, but they weren't dead yet. When Wu Qingyue approached, he saw the 5 underground gorillas struggling to get up. However, half of their bodies were charred and their movements became much slower. Roar roar, the largest gorilla stood up and immediately bared its teeth at Wu Qingyue. Then its body suddenly emitted a layer of faint red light, and its body began to grow rapidly. It's going berserk. Elmar leaped down from the roof and stood on a telephone pole at the side. Not only did this gorilla start to glow, but the other gorillas also started to glow in red. Wu Qingyue raised his hand and 4 thick lightning bolts immediately fell. Boom 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 boom, 4 explosions sounded. Other than the smallest gorilla, the other 4 creatures were blasted into pieces by the lightning bolts. Looking at the 4 vulnerable creatures, Wu Qingyue felt strange and asked Elmar, "Didn't you say that they weren't afraid of bombs?" Elmar nodded blankly and said, "Yes, they weren't afraid." Wu Qingyue pointed to the 4 that were blasted into pieces and said, "What's going on now?" Elmar thought for a while and said, "This? I think we should catch this one first before studying it. Are they afraid of lightning?" At this moment, the underground gorilla that Wu Qingyue deliberately left behind was already glowing red and pouncing towards him. Wu Qingyue raised his hand and at the same time his feet flashed. In an instant he appeared a few meters away and stood there. Boom, A thinner bolt of lightning struck the body of the gorilla that was pouncing towards him. Bang! This time Wu Qingyue controlled the energy in the lightning and only used 30% of the previous lightning. The underground gorilla was immediately beaten to the ground and stopped moving. Elmar jumped down and walked to the side. She found a remaining claw and picked it up. At this moment, Lin Xiao suddenly flashed to Wu Qingyue's side, grabbed his shoulder and said, "Let's go, the main force is coming up." Chapter 948. When Wu Qingyue heard what she said, he immediately grabbed her arm and disappeared in a flash. Elmar and Xiao Liqing, who were beside him, also quickly left. Before Lin Xiao grabbed Wu Qingyue and spoke, she had already stored the underground gorilla lying on the ground into the space and threw it into the forest. Just a few seconds after they disappeared, countless underground gorillas drilled out of the hole. They were much bigger than before and 2 of them were as big as cows. After the 2 huge underground gorillas came out, a violent and powerful majestic aura spread to the surroundings. In the blink of an eye, the 2 huge underground gorillas appeared beside the corpses that Wu Qingyue had blasted into pieces. As soon as the dozens of underground gorillas arrived, they quickly cleaned up the corpses of their clansmen that had been blasted into pieces. Then they brought them to the hole. As for the 2 largest ones, they were sniffing left and right and pacing back and forth as if they were searching for something. After searching for a while, the 2 underground gorillas stopped. Then they rushed in the direction of Wu Qingyue and Xiao Liqing. Wu Qingyue was concerned about the distance between him and Lin Xiao, so he retreated a distance and stopped. He raised his hand and struck the huge underground gorilla that was chasing him with lightning. Boom! Lin Xiao flashed to a remote position dozens of meters away from Wu Qingyue and watched the battle between Wu Qingyue and the huge creature. After the lightning struck down, it didn't hit the underground gorilla because it dodged it in time. It didn't seem to feel Lin Xiao's existence and only rushed towards Wu Qingyue. Perhaps it felt that Wu Qingyue's aura was too strong, or it was afraid of Wu Qingyue's lightning ability. The huge gorilla that was as big as a buffalo began to glow red and its aura became stronger and more violent. Roar! This thing roared ferociously in Wu Qingyue's direction, then continued to attack Wu Qingyue. It was extremely fast. After disappearing from its original spot, it appeared in the sky more than 10 meters away in the next second. It waved its claws and slashed at Wu Qingyue. Wu Qingyue's figure flashed and he immediately raised his hand to throw out a thunderbolt. Sizzle! The lightning flashed in midair and struck towards the underground gorilla that was pouncing down. Boom! Bang! The lightning immediately struck the underground gorilla, and it was blown away, landing on the ground with a muffled sound. Lin Xiao saw that it had landed a little close to him, so he silently dodged to the side and immediately distanced himself. Huff, huff, huff! The gorilla that Wu Qingyue shot to the ground lay on the ground for 2 seconds before getting up shakily and shaking its head. Lin Xiao saw that there was a black patch from its left shoulder to its chest, and there was a faint smell of blood. He could not help but frown. With Wu Qingyue's lightning strike, this kind of energy attack could shatter a boulder weighing a few hundred kilograms into pieces. However, when it landed on the creature's body, it only left a superficial wound. At this moment, the underground gorilla shook its head and disappeared in a flash. On the other side, Wu Qingyue's eyes turned cold, and he immediately retreated from his original position. Bang! The place where Wu Qingyue was just at was hit by a red shadow, and the ground was smashed into a large pit a few meters wide. The raging red creature was standing in the middle of the pit. On the other side, another huge gorilla was chasing after Xiao Liqing. Xiao Liqing's level 6 Earth class ability could not withstand the powerful claws of the other party. The half-meter thick earth wall was instantly smashed by the other party's claws. Stone awls and earth spikes stabbed the body of the giant gorilla, but it did not even dodge. This was because the stone awls and earth spikes directly shattered when they hit the body of the gorilla. But the flesh of the creature was not damaged at all. Fortunately, Almar had transformed into her beast form and swung her thick lizard tail at the body of the giant gorilla. Her claws were very sharp, but they could only cut through the opponent's skin and flesh. She could not even cut through the bones. Xiao Liqing did a roll and quickly rolled to the back of another mound. He awkwardly avoided the attack range of the gorilla for the time being. The gorilla's target was always Xiao Liqing, and it initially ignored Elmar, who had been attacking and harassing him. However, after being scratched by Elmar a dozen times, it became angry and roared at Elmar, who was covered in scales. Roar! Just as Elmar was about to launch another attack, it suddenly turned around and swung its thick arms at March. Bang! With a muffled sound, Mar was directly sent flying. In an instant, she flew more than 20 meters away and fell into a pile of stones. Cough cough cough, fuck. This is so hard to deal with. Mar coughed a few times and immediately coughed out a few mouthfuls of dark blood. She cursed and quickly climbed up. After the underground gorilla casually sent Mar flying, its body immediately emitted a red light. Then it turned into a red shadow and rushed toward Xiao Liqing's hiding place. Xiao Liqing cursed in his heart and suddenly turned to run. Bang! In the next second there was a loud sound behind him. He turned his head and saw that the place where he was just standing had been smashed into a pit by the underground gorilla. To these two giant gorillas, Xiao Liqing and Wu Qingyue were now their prey. That was why they kept staring at them and didn't care about Mar at all. Even with Mar, Xiao Liqing's side would still be crushed by the two of them. On the other hand, Wu Qingyue's side was evenly matched. Although his first lightning strike didn't have much effect on the giant gorilla, the second and third strikes had a different effect. Boom! Another thunderous sound. Wu Qingyue aimed at the wound on the underground gorilla's chest and shoulder and struck again. Roar! This time, the giant gorilla roared angrily, and its body became a little sluggish. Lin Xiao watched from the side as if he was watching from the side. Seeing that Wu Qingyue's side was slowly pulling back the odds of victory, he turned to look at Xiao Liqing's side. These two giant gorillas were the level 7 beasts mentioned in Lin Feng's report. From the aura they emitted, they were indeed similar to level 7 mutated beasts. However, they didn't seem to have any abilities and only knew how to fight hand to hand. Xiao Liqing was being closely watched and the pressure was immense. A strong sense of danger shrouded his heart. He saw Mar being casually slapped away by a claw. The sense of danger in his heart was even stronger. At this moment, as Xiao Liqing was preparing to dodge the next attack, he suddenly felt something tighten around his waist. Then, the world spun and he was being carried away. That's right, he was being carried away. Chapter 949. His abdomen was pushed against and his hands and feet were suspended in the air. By the time Xiao Liqing regained his senses, he realized that he was being carried and was running at an incredible speed. Who is it? When Xiao Liqing realized what was going on, he could only see a blurry back in the darkness. He opened his mouth and asked. However, the other party didn't respond to him and continued to run. Lin Xiao, who was watching Xiao Liqing being carried away, was speechless. Mar didn't realize it at first as she was focused on attacking the giant gorilla. After exchanging a few blows with the giant gorilla, she realized that the gorilla seemed to be a little agitated. Mar then realized that something was wrong. She turned her head and realized that someone was missing. Where's Xiao Liqing? Did he get dragged into the cave? The giant gorilla that had its prey stolen roared angrily. Roar! Then it left Mar behind and chased after Xiao Liqing's aura. At this moment, Lin Xiao suddenly waved her hand and a wisp of black smoke was thrown out from her palm. In the dark night, it flashed towards the giant gorilla without a trace. The energy in her zombie core had only recovered to about 10% of its original strength. She couldn't use the death fire. However, she could still control a little of the poisonous fog. She just couldn't release too much. Only a little. The wisp of black smoke that couldn't be seen in the night flashed into the gorilla's mouth faster than the giant gorilla. Since these things couldn't be destroyed from the outside, she would try to start from the inside. Although these things were immune to poison, Lin Xiao's black smoke wasn't just a simple poisonous fog. Her black smoke was similar to her death fire in that it could melt and devour anything. However, Lin Xiao wasn't sure if her ability would be effective against these things. Therefore, she used a wisp of black smoke to devour the energy of these underground creatures just to test the effect. Lin Xiao looked at the giant gorilla that she released the black smoke into chase after Xiao Liqing. She didn't ask Wu Qingyue to chase after it. She only gave Mar an order to quickly find Xiao Liqing. On Wu Qingyue's side, the underground gorilla that was injured twice by him was much weaker now. It was no longer as forceful and oppressive as before. Roar! It had been blasted twice by Wu Qingyue at the same spot where it was injured. At this time, a hole had been blasted open, and dark liquid kept flowing out of the wound. The color of the blood could not be seen clearly in the dark night, but the smell was very strong. Lin Xiao pinched his nose, indicating that he didn't like the smell of this thing's blood. The underground gorilla was no longer attacking Wu Qingyue fiercely. Instead, it maintained a distance from Wu Qingyue and stared at him fiercely. His muscles tensed up and he was on high alert. The red light on its body did not recede, making the charred part of its wound even more conspicuous. Wu Qingyue stared at it and raised his hand. Another thick bolt of lightning came crashing down. However, just as he was about to move, the giant ape suddenly turned around and instantly wanted to escape. However, it was already too late. A thick bolt of lightning descended from the sky with a dazzling light. Once again, it accurately blasted its body, and this time it was precisely at the location of the wound. Woo! The giant ape let out a strange cry, and its body was blasted away. The surrounding trees and stones were sent flying far away. But even so, it did not fall. Instead, when it was blasted into the air, it quickly turned around and landed. Once it landed, it immediately rushed toward the hole that they came out from at an extremely fast speed. In an instant it went into the hole. After it entered the cave, the other underground gorillas that were wandering nearby immediately retreated back to the entrance of the cave. Seeing that the giant ape ran so fast, Wu Qingyue did not take advantage of the situation to chase after it. He saw that the surrounding danger had disappeared and he said to the air, "Let's go find Xiao Cheng. Maybe he can take care of the bigger one. Forget about this one." Although he was talking to the air, he was informing Lin Xiao and the others to change their location. Lin Xiao flashed to his side. At this time, in order to reach Xiao Liqing's location in time, she could only support her stomach with one hand and put the other hand on Wu Qingyue's shoulder. She let him carry her away. Wu Qingyue grabbed her hand and held it in his palm. Seeing that Lin Xiao had no intention of objecting, his smile deepened. The smile on his face deepened, and then he pulled her along and left in a flash. On the other side, Xiao Liqing, who was being carried, asked and found that the other party did not respond. His stomach was very uncomfortable from the jolting, and he immediately continued to ask the other party to put him down. And the other party's breath seemed to have been met before, and he actually could not remember who it was. But the other party still did not respond, and Xiao Liqing felt that something was wrong. He suddenly raised his hand to touch the skin on the other party's stomach, and it was cold. This person was not alive, so it was a zombie. Xiao Liqing was shocked, and immediately raised his hand to turn into a rock and hit the back of the other party's head. The strength of this hit was not very strong, at least it was not enough to break the back of the other party's head. He just wanted to scare the other party so that it would put him down. Because every zombie had an instinct to protect their own head, and Xiao Liqing didn't understand why this zombie suddenly appeared and carried him. He didn't know if it wanted to save him, or if it wanted to take him away and then eat him. So Xiao Liqing's attack was also reserved. It would not kill him and he could also get himself out of trouble. Sure enough, when his stone hand hit the back of the zombie's head, the zombie seemed to be stuck for a moment, and then suddenly flipped its hands and threw him out. After Xiao Liqing was thrown out, he reacted in mid-air, and adjusted his posture to make it easier for him to land. As soon as his body touched the ground, he immediately bounced back to open up the distance between him and the zombie. At this time he suddenly realized why this zombie's breath was a little familiar. Wasn't this the stupid and cute level 5 zombie from before? This guy actually had the ability to snatch him from the underground gorilla. That was a level 7 mutant beast. But this zombie obviously didn't give Xiao Liqing time to be in a daze. After throwing him out, it immediately followed and rushed over. So when Xiao Liqing bounced up from the ground, he only took 2 steps back before he was thrown down again. Looking at the other party's big mouth that was about to bite him, Xiao Liqing unconsciously touched the ground next to him, and without thinking he grabbed it and stuffed it into the zombie's mouth. Ka-bang, a muffled sound as if something had broken. Xiao Liqing then figured out what he was holding in his hand. It seemed to be a mobile phone? Well, in the apocalypse, abandoned mobile phones could still be seen everywhere. Chapter 950. When he realized that he had subconsciously picked up a mobile phone and stuffed it into the mouth of the zombie in front of him, Xiao Liqing almost subconsciously thought that the muffled sound just now should be the sound of the mobile phone being bitten into pieces. So he condensed his hands into stones and pushed the zombie that was on top of him away. Then he quickly stood up and retreated far away. When he stood still, he saw that the zombie in the dark seemed to have covered its mouth with its hands and stood up as well. Xiao Liqing squinted at the other party and found that the other party was digging something into its mouth with both hands. Although the night was very dark, Xiao Liqing's ability had broken through to level 6, so his night vision was still very strong. Although his vision was not as clear as it was during the day, he could still see clearly when he got close. Then he saw that the abandoned mobile phone he had just grabbed seemed to be stuck in the zombie's teeth. Xiao Liqing. He wanted to complain in his heart, but he didn't know what to say. Just at this moment, the zombie's two hands broke off the phone with a crisp sound. But Xiao Liqing just happened to take out the mini flashlight in his pocket and turned it on. He saw that the mobile phone was indeed bitten into pieces, and the screen was cracked into a mesh. But why was there a white tooth stuck in the middle of the crack? Xiao Liqing. Why is a zombie's tooth more fragile than a mobile phone screen? Didn't these guys gnaw on human bones very tasty? At this moment, suddenly a red shadow flashed in the corner of Xiao Liqing's eyes, and then a burst of air-breaking sound came. Xiao Liqing jumped in time and then rolled on the ground. He did not stop there, but immediately bounced up from the ground and quickly waved a thick mud wall in front of him. Bang dash, a huge red figure with a gust of wind rushed to the place where he was just now, and its two claws directly smashed a hole in the ground. Xiao Liqing turned his head and found that the level 5 zombie had disappeared again. At this time, the underground gorilla jumped out of the hole just now and turned towards Xiao Liqing. Xiao Liqing saw that it had no eyes, but he also knew that it was staring at him at this time. The underground gorilla was fast, but Elmar wasn't slow either. As soon as it appeared, it immediately slashed its claws at the gorilla's neck. The underground gorilla tilted its head slightly in response to Elmar's attack. Then it turned around and clawed at Elmarch. Seeing that the situation was not good, Elmar immediately twisted her tail and turned around in midair. Her body subconsciously became transparent and disappeared. However, the other party didn't seem to care about her becoming transparent and continued to grab at the air without any reaction. Elmar narrowly dodged its claws and dodged to the side of a lamppost to hide. At this time, Xiao Liqing had also taken the opportunity to put some distance between himself and the giant creature. The body of this underground gorilla was the size of a buffalo, and it was 4 meters tall when it stood upright. At this moment, its entire body suddenly stiffened, and then it began to open its mouth and let out some strange roars. Roar, roar, roar. Then it began to scratch its chest frantically with its sharp claws, tearing the skin on its chest. At this time, Elmar landed beside Xiao Liqing and stared at the strange movements of the underground gorilla. She was puzzled and said, "What is it doing?" Xiao Liqing shook his head. The crisis of being locked on had been resolved. However, he still looked around cautiously, worried that the zombie would suddenly come out again. As soon as the underground creature appeared, the zombie disappeared. It seemed that it was afraid of this thing, but why wasn't it afraid of Wu Qingyue and Elmar? Roar, roar, roar dash. At this time, the underground gorilla scratched its chest until it was bloody, and even its back was bent. What was going on? Xiao Liqing held the flashlight in puzzlement and shone it on the body of the underground gorilla. There was a large amount of blood flowing out of its body. The dark brown blood dripped onto the ground. Elmar flashed to Xiao Liqing's side and asked him, "Are you all right?" Xiao Liqing shook his head and said, "I'm fine." Elmar smiled strangely and said, "That zombie took you away because it was afraid that you would be eaten? It's so protective of its food." Xiao Liqing was speechless. This was not funny. Just as the two of them were talking, the big monster suddenly fell to the ground with a bang. It let out a strange roar while rolling on the ground. Is there something in its chest? Xiao Liqing looked strangely at the thing that fell to the ground. Its hands were still scratching its chest and its legs were kicking wildly. Elmar nodded in agreement. "I think so. The others have started to run." Suddenly, she turned to look in the direction they came from and said with some surprise. When Wu Qingyue and Lin Xiao arrived, the huge underground gorilla was already lying on the ground motionlessly. Feeling a trace of Lin Xiao's energy coming from the underground gorilla, Wu Qingyue turned to look at her and asked, "You did this?" Lin Xiao slapped his hand away and walked closer to the underground gorilla. She raised her hand and controlled the black mist to expand in the body of the underground creature. Perhaps it had absorbed a lot of the creature's energy. The black mist became much thicker. However, under Lin Xiao's control, it expanded and became thinner. At this moment, the underground creature's chest cavity was already hollowed out. As the black mist expanded, its flesh and blood started to disappear. Soon, Xiao Liqing and Elmar saw the body of the underground gorilla, which was originally the size of a buffalo, suddenly deflate. When they heard Wu Qingyue's words, the two of them immediately understood why the underground gorilla suddenly went crazy and scratched its chest. Xiao Liqing shone the flashlight on the body of the underground gorilla and saw a black hole suddenly appear on its flattened back. A few wisps of black gas came out of the black hole and the gas started to spread on the back of the thing as if it had a spirit. After a while, the few of them saw the body of the underground gorilla disappear in front of them, leaving only its head and 4 claws. Lin Xiao waved her hand again and the black mist flew back into her palm. The one that was released earlier was the size of a pinky finger. Now it was as thick as an arm. She walked over and kept the limbs and head of the creature. She was going to bring it back to study when Leng Shentong came back. At this moment, Xiao Liqing suddenly clicked his tongue. Diske, here it comes again. Then he saw a figure sneaking out from the side and suddenly rushing towards Xiao Liqing. Alright, this fella saw that the underground creature was dead and came out to pounce on its prey. Chapter 951. Elmar grabbed the zombie that was about to sneak up on Xiao Liqing and pulled him away from Xiao Liqing by the back of his collar. Don't move. Elmar directly released her aura, stared at the zombie and shouted. The level 5 zombie froze for a moment, and its struggling movements stopped. He turned his head and looked at Elmar blankly, then suddenly bared his teeth and roared at her. Roar dash. You dare to roar at me? I can't control you, you're just a level 5 zombie leader. Elmar was stunned by his roar. After she came back to her senses, she raised her eyebrows and scolded him while gnashing her teeth. She didn't expect this level 5 zombie to ignore her level pressure and dare to resist her. What happened to the level suppression? How come it didn't work on him? Since he didn't listen, then she could only beat him until he listened. Elmar grabbed the zombie's clothes with one hand and used the other hand to slap the zombie's head with a pa-pa-pa sound. Roar dash. The zombie roared with each slap and roared a few times after being slapped a few times. After a few times, the zombie also seemed to be angry. His hand suddenly grabbed Elmar's hand, then he suddenly turned around and threw her hand away. Elmar was thrown to the side with great force. She was stunned for a moment and then immediately turned around to continue to teach the zombie a lesson. As a result, after the zombie shook her off, it immediately turned around and disappeared on the spot. Then the 4 people saw that he flashed more than 10 meters away and fell down again. However, he quickly got up again and disappeared in a flash. Did we just let him go? Xiao Liqing felt a little uncomfortable in his heart. This guy always came for him. If he couldn't kill him, he should at least catch him and bring him back to the second base of the all-living base for training. Looking at Elmar's appearance, Xiao Liqing also guessed that Lin Xiao didn't want to kill this zombie. Although he didn't understand why, he always wanted to jump on him and bite him made him feel a little uncomfortable. Elmar shrugged and said, "This guy is a bit strange, the leader thinks he should be useful to us." She meant that she was ready to put this guy into Lin Xiao's zombie army. However, he still needed training. He found a building to rest for the time being. It was not far from the underground gorilla's cave. Lin Xiao took out the remains of the underworld creature that she had devoured with the black mist and placed it in the middle of the room to study it closely. Xiao Liqing and Wu Qingyue shone their flashlights on the creature's head and claws. The claws and nails were black, and the surface reflected a layer of metallic light. Its 2 front claws were very large and its palm was more than 20 centimeters wide. Each of its fingers was very thick. He looked very powerful and gave people a dangerous feeling. The remaining head was half the size of a bull's head. There was nothing on its face except for its mouth and nose. Its ears were small and pointed. The top of its head was smooth and there were some protrusions at the back of its head. His appearance was ugly and strange. Lin Xiao felt that these things might have lived underground for a long time, so their eyes had degenerated and closed because they couldn't use them anymore. Elmar stood by the window and stared at the entrance of the cave. Those things had just escaped into the hole, and she didn't know when they would come out again. Wu Qingyue broke the leg of a wooden chair and turned the head over to look at it. He looked at the broken neck a few times. This thing's blood and claws carry the zombie virus. Don't touch it, Elmar reminded him. Although she knew that Wu Qingyue's information should have this, she couldn't help but remind him. Xiao Liqing said, "What the hell is this thing made of? For it to grow like this?" Lin Xiao stood by the side and looked at these things. Its claws were very long and there was dirt accumulated in the gap. From its claws, it seemed to be very suitable for digging, especially its front limbs which were relatively thick and its palms were very wide. If they really came from the Earth's core, then there should be more than one kind of creature. But what was the reason for them to come to the surface? Could it be that there was a big change underground? At dawn the next day, some of the zombies that Lin Xiao had sent out returned with a small pile of zombie cores or mutant plant and animal energy cores for her. Lin Xiao tested the hind limbs of an underground gorilla under the sun while everyone watched. The morning sun was very warm, but when it shone on the claws of the underground creature, they saw that other than the hard nails, the other parts of the claws began to swell. Poochie poochie, after the skin and flesh of the claw swelled up, the surface of the skin began to slowly bubble. Then these bubbles grew bigger and bigger, and when they reached a certain degree they began to explode. The burst skin emitted a burning smell, and then the flesh under the skin began to melt. 10 minutes later, all that was left of the claw was a set of white bones and 5 sharp nails. So there's a reason why they are afraid of the sun. Elmar said with a look of understanding. Xiao Liqing and Wu Qingyue pinched their noses. Lin Xiao and Elmar weren't the only ones who could smell this stench. It was really very smelly and it assaulted their noses. Lin Xiao went downstairs and took out a small truck. Then he released the corpse of the smaller gorilla from the space and threw it into the trunk of the pickup truck. Then he let Jing Yin, Ah San and Ah Si drive the corpse back to the base. Although the sun is very harmful to them, we can't kill them if they don't come out. We can't blow up the entire underground cave. Who knows how big the underground cave is? Elmar said with a frown. Previously these things weren't stupid. No matter how they lured them, they wouldn't come out during the day. And they didn't know how many of these things there were. Wu Qingyue, Lin Xiao and the others stayed there for a few more days and nights. The cave was still quiet and there was no movement. Lin Xiao ordered the zombies to spread out and search the surrounding 10 kilometers to see if there were any other situations. In the end, after searching a few times, there was nothing. These things seemed to have temporarily stopped moving and hid. And the level 5 zombie that would fall a few times when it ran would harass Xiao Liqing 3 to 4 times a day. This guy didn't know how to avoid the senses of the zombies. Every time they found him, he would already be less than 20 meters away from Xiao Liqing. During the day, the zombie's face could be seen clearly because the muscles were contracted. The bones on the face were protruding, and the eyes were black and sunken. It really didn't look good. But his eyes were especially bright and had the pure eyes of a baby. Every time they saw this guy come out, everyone would unconsciously stare at his eyes and ignore his face. Chapter 952. Wu Qingyue and Lin Xiao stayed at the cave entrance for another half a month. When they found that those things didn't come out, they started to look around to see if there were any other caves that they missed. The main focus was on the distance between this place and the base of all beings. And that level 5 zombie at this time has been caught by Elmar and tied up. Yes, it was tied up with a rope. Roar dash, this level 5 zombie's hands were tied up like a fool. It didn't know how to bite the rope. It was really just a rope, not a chain. Although his hands were tied and his movements were restricted, he still reluctantly moved closer to Xiao Liqing, who was still alive. It stretched out its neck and opened its mouth to bite him. Boom dash, Wu Qingyue casually hit a level 6 mutated plant. It was a tree that could swing its branches. The branches were swinging like messy hair in the wind. When it saw Wu Qingyue and the others passing by, it tilted and wanted to wrap around them. In the end, Wu Qingyue used a lightning bolt to directly break the main branch. Digging out an energy core and holding it in his hand, Wu Qingyue looked around. Where is it? Everyone knew that when he was talking to the air, he was looking for Lin Xiao. Elmar raised her hand and pointed to a tree on the side. That tree. Wu Qingyue walked under the tree, looked up and smiled. Here. Lin Xiao didn't climb very high, she was on the shortest branch. Seeing Wu Qingyue give her the energy core of the mutated plant, she felt strange and lightly jumped down. Holding her stomach, she walked to his side and put her hand on his shoulder. Don't give it to me every time. This was what he had hunted, not hers. He didn't need to give it to her. Wu Qingyue gently smiled and softly said, It's not for you, it's for her. Lin Xiao knew that he was talking about little man in her stomach. After more than half a month, her stomach was much bigger than when she just came out of the base. Lin Xiao also felt a heavy pressure on his abdomen. Little man couldn't absorb much of the energy she was absorbing now. Little man was mainly absorbing the energy from Wu Qingyue's body. Every night, Lin Xiao could feel an invisible energy flowing from Wu Qingyue's body into her stomach. Therefore, Wu Qingyue would give her all the zombie cores or mutant energy cores that he had hunted these days. In the beginning, she refused because she had a large group of high-level zombies with her. If she wanted zombie nuclei and energy nuclei, she had plenty of them. She didn't need to take anything from Wu Qingyue. However, Wu Qingyue would always use the excuse that it was for the child and force it into her hands. If she didn't accept it, he would give it to Elmar or other zombies. Therefore, Lin Xiao didn't argue with him anymore. Although he accepted it, he would scold him angrily every time. After more than half a month, she found that the distance between her and Wu Qingyue had increased a lot. She could already walk 200 meters away. The energy in Wu Qingyue's body had also become much weaker these days. He glanced at the energy core in his hand. It was sparkling and translucent under the sunlight. Lin Xiao said, "I have a lot here. I think you need to absorb more." The smile on Wu Qingyue's face was faint. His eyes curved into a pair of crescent moons. His eyes flashed a charming light hidden under his thick eyelashes. He said, "I don't need it." These days he gradually felt that his ability energy was somewhat reduced, and now he clearly felt that his whole body was weak and heavy every night. But when he touched the female zombie's belly, Wu Qingyue didn't feel unhappy at all. Occasionally he could feel the little feet in her belly kicking his hand. Although the other party didn't have a heartbeat and probably didn't have a body temperature when she was born. However, this vitality made him feel as if he was full of life. Wu Qingyue said he didn't need it for a reason. Right now he was unable to store the newly absorbed energy. These days he had also absorbed the corpse cores, but after the energy circulated through his body, it did not gather in his brain. Instead, it directly melted into his blood and disappeared into nothing. He faintly guessed that this might be related to the child in Lin Xiao's belly. Since he couldn't store energy for the time being, he didn't want to waste time here. Fortunately, his original energy was still very rich. Lin Xiao frowned and said, "You should keep it for yourself first." Then she let go of her hand and turned around to the level 5 zombie that was tied to a tree, and then he tied himself together with the rope. Wu Qingyue felt her let go of his hand. He felt a slight sense of loss in his heart. The smile in his eyes faded and the corner of his mouth was pressed down a little. But in the next second he put the energy core into his pocket as if nothing had happened. He knew that if he insisted on giving it to Lin Xiao, it would only make her unhappy. Lin Xiao walked in front of the level 5 zombie and felt that this guy's thoughts hadn't changed from beginning to end. He simply loved Xiao Liqing. There were 2 living people here, but he didn't have any interest in Wu Qingyue. He only stared at Xiao Liqing. Even if Xiao Liqing was more than 20 meters away from him, he still stared at Xiao Liqing with a covetous expression. It was like looking at a beauty. No, like looking at a roast duck? Or roast suckling pig? Roast whole sheep? He didn't know how this guy tied himself to the tree. Elmar just tied the rope in his hand to the tree. Lin Xiao stood in front of him and raised her hand. She held a glass of water in her hand. A transparent glass of water appeared in front of him. The level 5 zombie immediately turned his head and stared at the glass of water. The energy aura in the water made his hunger surge even more. He couldn't eat the meat in the distance, but the energy water in front of him could still alleviate his hunger. It was like humans eating meat and drinking nutritious juice. One was the desire for good food, and the other was just to suppress the physiological hunger. Seeing the glass of water, the level 5 zombie immediately calmed down. His eyes were glued to the glass of water and he didn't look at Xiao Liqing. He opened his mouth and stretched his neck toward the glass of water. His mouth was still making sounds of awe. Lin Xiao didn't tease him and directly poured the water in the glass into his mouth. While Lin Xiao and Wu Qingyue continued to inquire about the situation of the underground gorilla, there were people hiding in the cultivation base and outside the cultivation base. They took advantage of the night and hid a kilometer away from the cultivation base. They carefully looked over there with long-range binoculars. "Did you see it clearly? Are you sure there's no heat source on those people?" A figure next to him lowered his voice and hesitantly asked the person holding the binoculars. "There's really no heat source. See for yourself." That person heard him say so and immediately handed the binoculars in front of him directly to the other person. Chapter 953. The 2 of them used night vision long-range binoculars to observe a kilometer away from the Universal Life Base. They discovered that the people moving about in the area where the crops were planted were a bit mysterious. They didn't dare to get too close. It was already very dangerous to be more than a kilometer away. At this time, they discovered that the people in the cultivation base didn't have a heat source. There were many people outside the base without a heat source. They were the zombies. However, the Universal Life Base was outside the base's walls and within the safe zone. There shouldn't be zombies here. The person took the binoculars and was about to check. Suddenly, the person who handed him the glasses retracted his aura. He pulled his companion and ran in a panic. "Let's go. Someone's coming." The person who was about to raise the binoculars immediately put away his things, turned around and ran. The 2 of them were very fast. They quickly disappeared from the building they were originally in. A few seconds later, the two figures appeared here again. Lu Jun stood in the room. After looking around for a while, he stood by the window and said to the fat girl, "Fox, there's a strange smell here." Huli looked left and right. She raised her nose and sniffed. She asked in confusion, "What's that smell? I've never smelled it before." Lu Jun's expression was calm. However, a sharp light flashed in her eyes. He said, "Just now I did see a shadow pass by here from afar. There must be something or someone here." As she spoke, she lowered her head and began to carefully examine the room. Huli stuck her nose out and sniffed for a while. She suddenly said, "If you say it's people, then they should have smeared something on their bodies to hide their smell." Then she sniffed outside the building. She frowned. "Tiske, this smell can't be smelled outside. It was blown away by the wind." The smell was very faint. She could only vaguely smell it in the room. Once she went outside, it mixed with the other smells in the air and immediately disappeared. That was why Huli couldn't smell it from the outside. Lu Jun's face darkened. He walked around the room a few times. Then he said, "The people who came this time are much more cautious than Zhuo Chen's group." There was no trace left at the scene that could identify them. Basically, nothing in the room had been touched. Even the dust on the floor had been cleaned. Not even a footprint was left. They even concealed their own scents. It was unknown whether they were aware that the base had the ability to distinguish between scents, or if they were just habitually prepared. Huli stuck his head out of the window and sniffed a few more times before he retracted his head and looked at Lu Jun and said, "Ask the leader to carefully check everyone in the base this time." From this position, he shouldn't be able to see the details of the cultivation base. But we can't ignore what they might discover. Lu Jun nodded and said, "We can't be careless about this." The two of them quickly left the place. One returned to the cultivation base while the other went to the second base. Lu Jun returned to base 2 to find Xiedong and told him about the incident. "Even the smell is covered?" When Xiedong heard this, his expressionless face frowned slightly. As zombies, they were very sensitive to smells and smells. This was one of their strengths. But now the other party could think of a way to erase the smell. This was a great obstacle for them to find the direction of the other party. Lu Jun stood by the window of his office, leaning against the window with his arms crossed in front of his chest. He thought for a moment and said, "Is it someone from Zhuo Chen's group that slipped through the net? Otherwise, who would want to find out the secrets of our cultivation base?" Xiedong shook his head slightly and said, "I'm not sure if it's someone from that group that slipped through the net, but these people could also be from other sides. Because in addition to Haiqing base, the bases in the northwest and northeast are all trying to figure out the situation of our base. Now that there are so many new survivors in our base, we can't guarantee that there are spies from other bases among them." Although Xiedong and Yuan Tianqing would send people to find out the details of each new batch of people, the number of people coming in was not small. It was just that their investigation wasn't that comprehensive. However, with so many people being let in, Yuan Tianqing naturally thought of the existence of spies and spies. So they couldn't stop people from coming in, so they could only hide the secrets of their base. Thinking of this, Xiedong asked Lu Jun again, "How far is the other party from the base?" Lu Jun said, "At least a kilometer away, it's not far. But I can't see the situation in the cultivation base clearly. Using binoculars, I can only see all kinds of leaves." Xiedong thought for a moment and decided to go there first to see the situation. "Take me there." Lu Jun nodded and said, "Okay." Then the two of them quickly left the place after leaving the office. In the next second, they appeared outside the cultivation base where Lu Jun and Yuan Tianqing had found them. "The smell is gone." Lu Jun sniffed and suddenly found that the strange smell he had smelled just now had disappeared completely. It dissipated so quickly. Obviously, the gas had been specially processed before. It depends on who entered the base in the past 2 days. But I think since the other party has such a thorough anti-reconnaissance ability, they shouldn't take the initiative to enter the base in the past few days. Xiedong squinted his eyes and looked around, then said coldly. Lu Jun frowned, sighed and said, "We are not strong enough now. It's not suitable for these secrets to be leaked at this time." Xiedong suddenly held her hand and said, "Don't worry, I won't let the secret of the base be leaked." This base was a place where Lu Jun and her son could live in peace. It was also a place where Xiedong would follow and pledge his loyalty. This place meant a lot to both of them, so Xiedong didn't want to see the situation of the base fall into a disadvantageous situation. On the other side, 2 figures appeared in an alley outside the safe zone in the dark. Then they found a manhole cover and opened it. The two of them quickly went down and closed the cover. Are you sure this disinfectant is effective? What if they let the dogs chase us? One of them was a little uneasy and asked in a low voice. Don't worry, this is effective against zombies. Didn't you see that the zombies nearby didn't react when we came here? The other person said confidently. Their current position was already outside the safe zone where there were zombies active. All right. I didn't notice this just now. The person who spoke before was stunned for a moment before he reacted. We have been discovered. We can't enter the base for the time being. The other person said in a somewhat annoyed tone. Chapter 954. Since we can't get into the base, why don't we go to Haiqing? Luo Yuxing suggested as they hid in the sewers. There were only the two of them, 4th-level adepts. When they'd infiltrated the base, they'd suppressed their disciplines and passed themselves off as 3rd-level adepts. Now that they were out of the base, the weapons and food they had wouldn't be enough to get them to China or Skyfire in the northwest. They'd have to figure out a way to get into Haiqing. They couldn't stay away from the base for too long. It was too dangerous outside. Wang Chong hesitated. I'm worried they'll find out we're in Haiqing, or they'll keep an eye on it. After all, every entry and exit of a security base had to be recorded. Luo Yuxing thought it over. What should we do? Head to Skyfire? That's too far, I'm afraid we won't make it. Wang Chong shook his head. It's too early to go to Skyfire. The information we have isn't worth much. We haven't even gotten a clear picture of the base, and we've already alerted the enemy. Even if we go there now, we won't be able to get anything good. Luo Yuxing frowned. And we'll have to go through a lot of trouble to get there. It's not worth it. Thinking of this, he stopped thinking, but then he thought of another problem. Right, those people we saw just now didn't have a heat source. Do you think they are zombies? Or humans? I've scouted around Base 1 and I haven't heard of anyone working there. Right now, those people are mainly working on the construction of the walls of the second base. Wang Chong narrowed his eyes and said, I also think it might be zombies, but the plantation is already in the safe zone. Why didn't they get rid of the zombies? Or, did they give up on the plantation? Didn't they say all the land was closed to farming? Luo Yuxing thought for a few seconds. But why didn't they get rid of the zombies? What's the point of keeping them around? I'm not sure, Wang Chong said. But I do think they have a lot of secrets. They have a lot of secrets. Those soldiers who wear sunglasses all day also give me a weird feeling. Also, I can't enter the second base. As they were moving around in the base, Wang Chong didn't dare to bring too many equipment with them. Therefore, they did not use special binoculars to observe the base soldiers who wore sunglasses all day long. Therefore, neither of them discovered that these soldiers had no heat source on them. Those soldiers wearing sunglasses belonged to the second base. I think if we can enter the second base, we should be able to find out something. The problem is that we can't even enter the first base of this base. Luo Yuxing said. Both of them felt a little depressed at the same time. The current situation was very disadvantageous to them. He didn't know where to go next. Going back to Universal wasn't an option, and Skyfire or the Chinese base was too far. He could only try to go to Sea City. At this time, Xiadong had already sorted out a list of people who had not returned from all the entry and exit records of the base. Maybe they didn't even enter our base? Or has he been observing from the outside? Qiu Lily couldn't help but ask. Yuan Tianxing said, there aren't many of them. If they don't come into our base to resupply, I don't think they'll stay outside for too long. But what you said is not impossible. I don't think they'll return to our base. Most likely they'll go to Sea City. I'll have the people in Sea City keep an eye on all the entrances, Xiadong said. He didn't care how these people had appeared, he just wanted to know what to do next. Yuan Tianxing nodded. I agree. Qiu Lily shrugged. I'll go out and track them. Maybe I'll find more of them. With that, she stood and left the room. She came and went as she pleased. The others didn't react, continuing to discuss their next course of action. By the way, what's the size of the zombie horde in the second base? Yuan Tianxing asked Xiadong. He only knew that other than Lin Xiao there were Qiu Lily, Elmar, and Lin Kuei. There were 12 kings of the first rank of the sixth rank. But he didn't know how many level 5, 4, and 3 kings there were. The soldiers wearing sunglasses and masks that occasionally passed by the base every day were only level 3. There were no level 4 zombies among them. Xiadong said, there are more than 100 level 5 leaders, more than 500 level 4 zombies, and more than 2,000 level 3 zombies. We've divided them into 2 groups and they've passed the training. The third group is currently in training. With the blood control of the leader, they're very obedient. A group consisted of 1,000 to 1,500 people, but Lin Xiao had only arranged 1,000 to 1,200 zombies to form a group. So, the 2 zombie groups were being suppressed by Qiu Lily and El March. 5 level 1 kings were sent to assist them. Lin Kuei hadn't been recruited by Lin Xiao yet. As for the level 3 zombies, they weren't recruited by Lin Xiao either. They were just left to be raised, and any evolved ones would be caught and trained before being recruited. Although it was just 2 normal groups, they were zombies, and their collective strength was not something humans could compare to. Yuan Qianxing and Lin Feng looked at each other and nodded. The number is less than we thought. According to the large number of zombies that Lin Xiao had brought back as well as the ones that had been driven to Mount Wu to hide, there were at least 80,000 if not 100,000. They didn't expect that Lin Xiao had recruited only 2,000 to 3,000 people. Xiaodong said, "You all know that these low-level zombies didn't have much intelligence before. Even though the leader has modified them with his blood, the leader still doesn't feel at ease. After all, the instincts of zombies are still very troublesome. Many who didn't obey were killed directly. If they didn't obey now, they might die in the hands of others in the future. It was better to be cleaned up earlier, and at least they could contribute a zombie core." Yuan Qianxing nodded, "That's right." Lin Feng said, "We have to guard the secret of the second base. At the very least, we have to prevent them from being targeted by the other bases for the next 10 or 20 years. Xiaodong nodded and didn't say anything. Chapter 955. Qiu Lily appeared on the wall of the base, following the smell in the air while sensing. Although Xiaodong said that the other party used an odor eliminator, the smell might have dissipated. But as long as the effect of the odor eliminator wore off, she would be able to distinguish the smell in the air within 10 kilometers. When Lin Xiao was not in the base, she would feel that it was her fault if anything happened. If the situation at the cultivation base was really leaked, then she would be a little embarrassed. But this time, no one thought that the person who came to investigate would use an odor eliminator. On the other side, Lin Xiao led the zombies to carefully sense the smell of the underground creatures. Standing on the roof of a building, Lin Xiao suddenly trembled. She turned her head at the same time as Wu Qingyue, and there was a strong pressure coming from that direction. "It's coming?" Wu Qingyue's eyes flashed. Elmar and the other zombies also felt it and immediately went into a state of alert. But no one let go of the level 5 zombie that was entangled on the tree. Lin Xiao suddenly turned around and took out a glass of water, then she cut her finger and squeezed a drop of blood into the water. Roar dash! When her blood appeared in the air, the level 5 zombie immediately exploded. His whole body tensed up and went into a state of alert. He stared at Lin Xiao and roared as a warning. Lin Xiao didn't say anything. She directly raised her hand and held his chin with one hand, making him open his mouth. Her other hand poured the water mixed with her blood into his mouth. Woo dash! The level 5 zombie was scared stiff and immediately let out a frightened cry. But because his mouth was blocked by Lin Xiao, he could only make half a sound. Gulp, gulp. Lin Xiao poured 70% of the water in the glass into his mouth, the rest flowed out. Then she let go of his hand and took a few steps back, then immediately flashed to Wu Qingyue's side. She pressed him down. "Go check it out." Although the smell was very strong, she didn't want to avoid it. Letting Wu Qingyue go check it out was just for a look. She didn't want to face it directly. After Wu Qingyue pulled Lin Xiao away, the other zombies also left. Before Xiao Liqing left, he turned his head and glanced at the level 5 zombie. He didn't understand why the female zombie leader left him here. After they left, the level 5 zombie's body shook, then its face changed and it roared ferociously. Roar! His whole body struggled and the energy in his body began to overflow violently. It directly condensed into energy blades and very quickly the ropes on his body were cut. Roar, 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 ah! But in the next second the zombie rolled on the ground and began to roll. His entire body twitched as he curled up into a ball for a moment, then sprang up in the next moment. His 4 limbs flailed about as he struggled. After more than 10 minutes he gradually calmed down. His clothes were also dirty and messy. The zombie stood up in a daze and looked at the ground blankly. After a few minutes, his black eyes gradually regained their original luster, but the color of his eyeballs became somewhat transparent. After he woke up he looked around. Then he raised his nose and sniffed the air, then lifted his feet and slowly walked in the direction that Lin Xiao and the others left. On the other side, Wu Qingyue pulled Lin Xiao back to the entrance of the cave where they killed the level 7 gorilla. They stopped 2 kilometers away. Elmar brought number 8 and Summer, the 2 level first kings, to carefully approach. Lin Xiao frowned slightly. Even though she was 2,000 meters away from the entrance of the cave, the powerful aura made her very uncomfortable. The dissatisfaction in her heart made her unable to control her aura. She was stimulated to the point that she couldn't help but want to rise up and fight against the opponent. Wu Qingyue took a step forward and stood in front of her, helping her to block the aura. This is only level 8. It seems that the one we killed before made them vigilant, Wu Qingyue said. Lin Xiao said, it was just a guess before, I didn't expect these things to really evolve to level 8. Wu Qingyue couldn't see her expression, but he could feel that her aura was a bit suppressed, or perhaps it was more accurate to say that she was vigilant. At this moment, Lin Xiao indeed had an instinctive vigilance in her heart, because the aura of this creature was indeed very powerful. It was much stronger than her, almost comparable to the pressure from the thunderclouds that Mo Yen created when he went berserk. However, in comparison it was a bit weaker. But what made Lin Xiao feel suppressed was that this thing was too close to her base. After a huge black shadow crawled out from the ground, this pressure immediately formed an invisible wave that spread out. Even in the base that was dozens of kilometers away, everyone could feel it. Qiu Lily was standing on top of the wall and was the first to feel this aura. Then Yuan Qianxing, Lin Feng and the others in the base also felt it. Then Ocean City's Xiao Yunlong and Zhou Shihui stopped what they were doing and looked out the window. What is that? Yuan Qianxing stood up from his desk and walked to the window to look out. Li Zheng also seemed to feel an unusual aura, but he didn't feel it as clearly as Yuan Qianxing. What? Yuan Qianxing stared at the dark night outside and said, there is a very aggressive aura suddenly coming over, that should be the area where the underground creatures appear. There was some worry in his eyes as he murmured, I don't know what the leader and the others encountered. Li Zheng walked to the window and felt that the aura was even more intense. He said, the leader and Leader Wu are together, they should be fine. Yuan Qianxing's eyes darkened, but he nodded, they should be. At this moment Wu Qingyue and Lin Xiao both frowned. A trace of uneasiness flashed through their hearts, especially Lin Xiao's feeling was stronger. She suddenly pulled Wu Qingyue, let's go. Then she sent an order to Elmar and the other zombies, telling them to quickly retreat. If Lin Xiao was at her peak she wouldn't be afraid to fight with this level 8 underground gorilla, but she had a big belly now. She didn't dare to be careless. Wu Qingyue immediately reacted after being pulled by her, and immediately left with her in the blink of an eye. If this female zombie wasn't tied up with him, he certainly wouldn't have any scruples. But thinking that she was tied up with him, he couldn't let go of his hands and feet to fight. Then he could only temporarily evacuate with her. After the two of them disappeared, Elmar and the other zombies immediately turned around and dodged. All of them ran in the direction they went. The huge black shadow climbed out and stood up. It was a full 10 meters tall. After standing up, the aura on its body became stronger. It twisted its head to sense something as if it was listening or sniffing. Chapter 956. All the mutated beasts within a radius of dozens of miles shrunk and quickly hid their auras before running away desperately. Some immediately hid in their nests and didn't dare to come out. Most of the birds also quickly flew out from the treetops and flew away. Even some of the mutated plants above level 5 quieted down. Wu Qingyue took Lin Xiao and left very quickly. In the next second, when the level 8 gorilla came out of the ground, Wu Qingyue and Lin Xiao had already appeared more than 10 kilometers away. Lin Xiao stood still and turned to look at the direction of the level 8 gorilla. She was a little uneasy and hoped that the big guy wouldn't go in the direction of the sentient being's base. Wu Qingyue appeared with her in another direction, not in the direction of the sentient being's base. Of course, he knew that he couldn't appear in the sentient being's base at this time. If he lured the big guy there, it would be over. Elmar and the rest of the zombies were not slow and quickly appeared around the two of them. Only Xiao Liqing's speed was a little slower and he was still on the way. He couldn't help it since he was an earth element and not a wind element. Moreover, Xiao Liqing was unlucky enough to be targeted again. This time, it wasn't the level 5 zombie or the level 7 gorilla that was staring at him. The 10-meter-tall gorilla sniffed a few times in the air and began to take 2 steps in the direction of Xiao Liqing's scent. Then it lowered its upper body and stretched out its 2 thick elephant-like forelimbs to support itself on the ground. It bent its waist and stomped with its hind legs. Whoosh, bang! A huge shadow shot out in the dark night, leaping more than 10 meters high and landing 40 or 50 meters away. Then, as soon as it landed, it leaped forward again, leaping another 10 meters high and 40 or 50 meters away. The gigantic figure created a gust of wind in the air, and when it landed on the ground, it shook the ground with a loud sound and dispersed the wind. Xiao Liqing was jumping forward from the top of another building when he suddenly heard a few vibrations behind him. The dangerous aura covered the ground and tightly locked onto him. Looking back, he saw a giant figure leaping towards him from afar. Xiao Liqing's whole body felt like it had fallen into an ice cave. The huge pressure made his face immediately pale. His forehead was also covered with a layer of dense sweat. I've been targeted. Being watched equals dying. Just as his body stiffened and his reaction slowed after being locked on, the giant shadow had already closed the distance between it and Xiao Liqing with a few leaps. The huge sense of impending death made Xiao Liqing quickly sober up. Then he began to run for his life. On the other side, Lin Xiao and Wu Qingyue also noticed the situation. Both of them had a bad feeling. Wu Qingyue was a little anxious, but he hesitated. He really wanted to save Xiao Liqing. With him around, Xiao Liqing's life wouldn't be in danger. However, he still had his fiancée tied to him. With her current condition, it was even more impossible for him to bring her close to the gigantic beast. He was in a dilemma, but Lin Xiao narrowed his eyes and sensed something. Then he quickly ordered Elmar and the other zombies, "Go save them first, don't fight them head-on." Elmar immediately led a few rank 1 monarchs in Xiao Liqing's direction. None of the zombies they brought out this time were wind type. Otherwise, it wouldn't be so troublesome to find a wind type to bring Xiao Liqing along. Bang dash, another loud sound. Xiao Liqing looked back and saw that the giant shadow had already leaped more than 10 times in a few seconds. It had quickly caught up to him. At this time it was more than 200 meters behind him. In a few blinks of an eye, it would be in front of him. Although his heart was full of danger, Xiao Liqing still calmed himself down. At least his boss was still here. Big leader Wu would definitely not let anything happen to him. In addition, there were also the zombies from the base. Xiao Liqing felt that he wouldn't die here so soon. Don't look back. Elmar flashed to his side and pulled him forward. The other zombies immediately appeared, but they only used their abilities to attack the giant from afar. Old 8 was a metal type. His head was still wrapped in gauze and the shape didn't look right. However, this didn't affect his combat ability. Countless metals around him were pulled out by him. Abandoned cars, various metal objects in the building, and even the steel bars in the wall were pulled out. Then they condensed into a huge steel arrow. With a wave of number 8's hand, these steel arrows immediately shot towards the giant shadow. Roar dash, the giant underground gorilla saw the steel arrows flying over. It paused for a moment, waved its left arm and swung its right arm. It swept away the 2-meter-long, 5-centimeter-thick arrows in a few moves. A few missed arrows pierced its body, but they only made a few ding-ding-ding sounds. Then they fell. None of them could pierce into its skin. They could only leave white marks on its skin. After sweeping away the arrow rain, the giant gorilla immediately leaped in Xiao Liqing's direction. At this moment, a huge condensed fireball with a dazzling red light smashed towards the giant underground gorilla. A4, who threw the fireball from afar, immediately flashed and disappeared in place. This was the most powerful fireball he had ever gathered. After throwing this fireball, he couldn't use his fire ability for the time being. He had to wait for more than 10 minutes. Just now, after 8th brother shot out those steel arrows, he also needed a few minutes of buffer time. Because Lin Xiao's order wasn't to fight head-on, they took turns to interfere with the monster, so that Elmar could gain some time. Boom dash, sure enough, the giant underground gorilla in midair couldn't avoid the fireball and was directly blasted down. But it didn't cause any damage. It only ignited some flammable objects around it. Roar dash, the giant gorilla rolled on the ground, crushing the flower beds on the side of the street. It stood up and roared angrily. Although these attacks didn't have any effect on it, they prevented it from catching up with its prey, which made it very unhappy. With Elmar's help, the distance between Xiao Liqing and the giant gorilla immediately increased. Seeing that Lin Xiao sent the zombies to help Xiao Liqing, Wu Qingyue was relieved. The hand that was holding Lin Xiao's wrist tightened. He slightly lowered his head and turned to her, saying, "Thank you." Lin Xiao replied calmly, "You're welcome." Maybe it was because Wu Qingyue's energy had decreased a lot recently. As long as she had physical contact with him, she could vaguely sense his thoughts. Therefore she immediately noticed the other party's worry just now. Only then did she send Elmar and the other zombies to bring him back. Chapter 957. Except for Elmar, the other zombies were only level 6 or 5. Their abilities couldn't stop the giant gorilla. After the gorilla was thwarted again and again, it immediately became angry. Its counterattack was also sharp. When it fell to the ground, it was blocked by the mud wall and smashed into pieces with a swipe of its claws. When it was entangled by the wood vines, it could only struggle left and right before it broke. At this time, a figure sneakily circled around the battlefield, following Xiao Liqing and El March. Seeing that Xiao Liqing was temporarily out of danger, Wu Qingyue continued to pull Lin Xiao away. Both of them wanted to see how far this eyeless monster could chase them. However, at this moment the giant gorilla suddenly stopped. It swayed left and right, then turned around on the spot and stood there quietly for a while. Then it suddenly turned around and walked back. This time it was walking slowly, not jumping dozens of meters like before. And as it walked, its aura began to quickly converge. Soon it couldn't be felt. Elmar also felt it. She took Xiao Liqing to the roof of a building and looked at the direction of the gorilla. "What's wrong?" Xiao Liqing saw her and asked curiously. Elmar said, "Didn't you feel it? It didn't chase us and hid its aura. The movement also disappeared." Hearing her words, Xiao Liqing immediately felt it. Indeed, he could no longer feel the oppressive feeling that made him suffocate just now. He also couldn't hear the sound and vibration of the giant running. At this time, the closest to the giant gorilla were number 8, Summer and other level 1 zombies. They all quietly watched the giant monster's aura suddenly disappear and looked at it slowly walking back. The strange thing was, although it was big, there was no sound when it walked. Without a sound, he submerged his figure into the darkness of the night, disappearing in the darkness. Asi landed next to Old Six and looked blankly in the direction where the giant monster disappeared. Then he looked up at Old Six in confusion. Old Six looked down at him and shook his head. He opened his mouth and spoke in a hoarse voice, "I don't understand." He didn't understand what was going on either. Why did the big guy that was chasing him suddenly stop? However, they did not let down their guard. Instead, they continued to stare at the giant gorilla and began to move silently in the darkness. However, they were no longer chasing after Xiao Liqing. Originally, the fresh scent of Xiao Liqing was its target for the night, but it wasn't the habit of a predator to give up on its prey. Lin Xiao and Wu Qingyue, who were about to leave, immediately stopped and turned around. It stopped? He also withdrew his aura. A look of confusion flashed in Wu Qingyue's eyes. He asked in confusion, "Why?" Lin Xiao narrowed her eyes and sensed for a moment, then subconsciously shook her head, indicating that she also did not understand. However, he quickly realized that Wu Qingyue couldn't see any good moves right now. He raised his hand and pressed it against her arm, saying, "I don't know." After saying that, she let go of her hand and crossed her arms, trying to guess the behavior of the underground gorilla. The underground gorilla hadn't even activated its berserk state. Why did it stop halfway through the chase? Could it be some kind of scheme? Or did it change its fighting style? Was it preparing to ambush? The other party had withdrawn its aura, so Lin Xiao could only rely on its scent to determine its movements. At this time, Elmar brought Xiao Liqing back to the two of them. She was also puzzled by the giant monster's behavior. It turned back and didn't chase after us. It's not preparing to ambush us either, Elmar said. Lin Xiao looked at her and asked, "Are you sure?" Elmar said, "Old 6 and Old 8 are still watching over there. Why don't we wait for their report?" 10 minutes later, Asi returned. He stood in front of Lin Xiao and spoke to her. He told Lin Xiao that the monster had indeed returned and that Old 6 and the others were still watching it. Lin Xiao frowned and muttered to herself in confusion, "Why did it give up? Could it be that it couldn't be too far away from the cave?" She suddenly asked Elmar, "Where did it go just now? How far was it from the original cave?" Elmar answered, "About 10 kilometers away." Lin Xiao suddenly thought of a problem. When these things came out of the cave to look for food, they would only go in one direction. But each time they wouldn't go far. No matter how many prey they caught, they would always retreat after a certain distance. The next time he changed his direction, the distance between them seemed to be the same. It seemed like they didn't dare to go too far. Then Lin Xiao thought of a possibility. She said, "Do you think these things don't have a sense of direction?" Are they afraid of getting lost so they don't go far? What if they go back the way they came and follow the scent they left behind? Elmar was startled and said, "You said they might get lost?" It seems possible. If a person was in a pitch-black environment, it was very easy for them to lose their sense of direction. And these underground creatures had been living underground for a long time. Their eyes had degenerated and they couldn't see anything. Of course, they didn't have a sense of direction in the dark. They could only rely on their five senses to sense the scent of prey or the scent they left behind as a mark. When Elmar spoke, Xiao Liqing and Wu Qingyue immediately understood what she meant. Wu Qingyue's eyes lit up and he nodded in agreement. That's possible. Many underground creatures actually don't have a sense of direction. That's why they don't dare to go too far on land. If the scent they left behind disappears, they might not be able to find their way home. But this was just everyone's guess. They weren't sure yet. Therefore they didn't dare to let their guard down. If their eyes can't work, then they will be more sensitive to scent. I think this is very likely. Xiao Liqing, who had just been a little frightened, had calmed down and agreed. Next time we can catch one alive and bring it back for research, Elmar said excitedly. Since these things wouldn't go too far on the ground, the danger to the base was temporarily reduced by 10%. Lin Xiao said, "Let's go back first. I don't know the results of the research on the corpse that was sent back to the base." As she spoke, she went downstairs and released a few cars. She held her stomach and got into the back seat of the first car. Wu Qingyue didn't think and followed her into the first car. He didn't feel at ease letting her go too far away from him. If something unexpected happened, he wouldn't be able to protect her in time. This was the outside of the apocalypse. Any danger could appear in the next second. Xiao Liqing got into the driver's seat and watched Elmar climb into the co-driver's seat before starting the car. The other zombies were squeezed into the two cars behind. Chapter 958. Xiao Liqing had just started the car and was about to leave, when suddenly there was a bang-dash sound. A black shadow suddenly leaned on the windshield in front of him. Xiao Liqing was so scared that he reflexively leaned back. In the end, who else could it be other than that stupid zombie? What a lingering ghost. And he's level 6 now? After Xiao Liqing calmed down, he immediately noticed something unexpected. He was just level 5 not long ago. Oh, he was level 5 before. But that's still the peak of level 5, it's time to break through. Elmar said calmly. These days, Lin Xiao had fed this guy a cup of energy lake water every day. He had long reached a point. He didn't think that the cup of lake water that Lin Xiao gave him before she left with her blood would directly make this guy level up. Xiao Liqing was silent for a few seconds, then raised his hand and pointed at the zombie that was still clinging to the front of the car. He turned to look at Elmar and said, "What do we do now?" What he meant was, "Why don't you hurry up and get him down? How can we drive like this? The road in front of us is completely blocked." Elmar shrugged and said, "He didn't listen to us before. Now that his strength has increased, he won't listen to us." Obviously, she didn't plan to care about this guy. Xiao Liqing turned his head and looked at her quietly. "This is your zombie's business, you don't care. Do you want me to do it? Can I give this guy a shot?" At this moment, suddenly, the zombie that had just leveled up from level 5 to level 6 in front of him climbed onto the roof of the car. Then there was no more movement. Xiao Liqing couldn't help but look at the roof, then turned back to look at the person in the back seat. Wu Qingyue smiled and said, "Let's go, you don't need to care about him. Someone will care." As he said that, he turned his head and looked at the empty seat next to him. With Wu Qingyue's words, Xiao Liqing immediately felt relieved and drove away. He acted as if he didn't know there was a zombie on the roof of his car. On the other side, Qiu Lily felt the strong pressure disappear, and then she let out a sigh of relief. But her heart was not completely at ease. This feeling of being threatened made her feel vaguely uneasy. However, the most important thing for her now was to find the person who dared to inquire about the cultivation base. Qiu Lily carefully sensed that there were no signs of living beings in the safe zone around the base. She then extended her perception outwards. Suddenly, a strange aura flashed past. Qiu Lily's ruby-like eyes lit up, and then her figure flashed. At this time, a few kilometers underground not far from the base of humanity, two figures were fleeing in a sorry state. Why is there a level 6 mutant snake here? This shouldn't be happening. Running at the front, Wang Chong said in shock and disbelief. Cut the crap. If you want to live, then hurry up and run. Luo Yuxing didn't want to talk, but his companion's nervousness would disrupt his judgment and reaction. There weren't many passages in the sewers to begin with. Soon the two of them stumbled into a dead end. There was only a hole above their heads. The two of them didn't think too much and could only quickly climb up the ladder. However, as soon as they crawled out of the cave, they saw the shadow of a beast standing not far away. A pair of glowing eyes stared at them coldly. The coldness was no less than that of the huge black snake that was chasing after them. Using his flashlight, he saw a large dog standing there. Its entire body was pitch black, but its short fur gleamed with a glossy sheen. Seeing that he shone the light from the flashlight on his face, Ah Wang immediately opened his mouth, revealing a mouthful of sharp white teeth for them to see. Its eyes. Its eyes. Luo Yuxing's face paled at the sight of the dog's eyes, and he felt even more despair. It was a pair of pitch-black eyes without the slightest sliver of white. This meant that this wasn't a mutant dog but a zombie dog. Its height was around 1.2 meters, its body was more than 2 meters long, and its 4 muscular limbs were extremely intimidating. No matter how one looked at it, it exuded an oppressive and dangerous aura. Bang! At this moment, the entrance to the tunnel behind the two of them was smashed open. A giant snake about the size of the manhole cover slowly slithered out. Halfway through, however, the giant snake suddenly stopped moving. Ah Wang stared straight at the two of them. Under its gaze and that of the giant snake, Luo Yuxing and Wang Chong had lost the ability to move. They could only stiffly stand there, not daring to move. 2 minutes later, a chilly night breeze blew past. Ah Wang silently glanced at Big Black, a hint of impatience flashing through its eyes. Why don't you hurry up and crawl out? What are you doing poking yourself in the hole? Big Black expressionlessly glanced back at its little companion, then continued to stare at the two trembling humans. Do you think I don't want to come out? Cut. Stop. God. Good. Really? That's right, Big Black was currently stuck in the opening of the manhole, unable to move up or down. At this moment, a strange shadow flashed by and appeared next to Big Black. A mushroom spirit curiously stood behind Big Black, slightly bending over as it stared at its body that was buried in the hole. 2 tentacles hung down from the mushroom umbrella and bent over to support its mushroom head. It looked like a curious baby no matter how one looked at it. This was what Chiu Lily saw when she appeared. After knocking the two unconscious, Chiu Lily curiously looked at the strange posture of the snake and the mushroom. What's going on? Big Black, aren't you going to take your body out? The sewers are so dirty. Don't forget to take a bath. Chiu Lily circled around Big Black and then retreated with a smile. Of course, Big Black didn't understand what she was talking about. But it could faintly understand the first half of her words. After being stuck for so long, Big Black's patience had run out. It shrunk its head back and its aura suddenly changed. The mushroom spirit and Chiu Lily immediately retreated. Boom! With a loud noise, Dahe's body was pulled out of the cement ground. Of course, its powerful movements had caused the opening of the manhole to explode. A look of understanding flashed across the eyes of the other three. Woof! Ah Wang bluntly laughed, his eyes narrowing and his mouth opening, revealing a mouthful of white teeth. Chiu Lily carried the two people and said, "Okay, then I'll be leaving first. Thank you, you three." After saying that, she flashed away. Seeing that she had left, Ah Wang knew that its task had been completed. In fact, these three had been playing on Mount Wu. After discovering Lu Jun and Hu Li's actions, they felt that there were 2 strange breaths nearby. Ah Wang immediately understood something and immediately brought the other 2 friends to catch prey. After Ah Wang evolved to the 6th level, its IQ was very high. Moreover, it had recently regarded the cultivation base, Mount Wu, as its territory. If there were strange breaths coming in without the consent of Lu Jun and the others, it would immediately be vigilant. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.